Whether it was because of the cold night wind or the moonlight piercing through the clouds, every sense of that assassin was alert to one truth. He was going to die that night. Rayon had been praised for another well-executed mission, and the one who said it was none other than Lord Darius. This was Darius Robert, the man believed to bring certain death to anyone, especially on a night like that. Darius praised Rayon, saying he had delivered results worthy of his position as leader of the Shadows. According to him, thanks to Rayon's work, the Robert family continued to grow stronger. But Rayon humbly replied that he only did what was necessary. Still, Darius pressed on, saying he often thought about it, and asked if Rayon believed that Shadows needed freedom. Rayon answered that Shadows existed only to obey the orders of their masters. They were not supposed to have emotions, thoughts, or a heart. That was when Darius questioned why, even knowing that, he had acted on his own. How had he escaped the doctrine? Surprised, Rayon wondered how Darius had figured it out. That was when the meaning of the doctrine became clear. The doctrine was the method used by House Robert to create its group of assassins known as the Shadows. They kidnapped or bought children and trained them to become loyal assassins, dedicating their entire lives to the family's dirty work. In other words, they were loyal dogs of House Robert. Rayon had also undergone this doctrine, but during one of his missions, thanks to a special kind of control, he managed to break free from the invisible chains that held him captive. Even so, he wondered how Lord Darius had discovered that. Darius then explained. He said all assassins, including himself, had two prisons. The first was the doctrine, which Rayon had somehow escaped. The second he would now demonstrate. Darius snapped his fingers. Instantly, Rayon felt an unbearable pain in his chest. He coughed up blood and felt as if his heart would explode. Darius explained that it was caused by the rage worm, an insect implanted inside Rayon's body that obeyed only Darius and began devouring the heart slowly. In shock, Rayon asked if the doctrine had not already been enough of a punishment. Even so, Darius kept acting as if he were a saint. It was madness. But Darius replied that it was not madness, it was caution. After all, no one could forget that Rayon had escaped the doctrine. Everyone wore masks, and Darius's mask was just a little better than the rest. Rayon remembered that he had been kidnapped when he was too young to remember. He had been raised to be an assassin of House Robert. Even when he became leader of the Shadows, he lived a life without heart or emotion. But one day, he got lucky. He learned a cultivation technique called Flame Ring, created by one of the strongest swordsmen on the continent. With it, he managed to free himself from the doctrine. He thought he could finally leave the Shadows and claim his own freedom. For the first time, he felt hope. But now, at the end, the only thing he felt was death approaching. He wondered what sin he had committed to deserve to die in such a pathetic way. However, he refused to accept that end. If he had to die there, he would fight to the very end. With difficulty, he stood up. Darius was impressed to see him standing in that condition. But Rayon declared that at the very least, he would take something from him. He would not die miserably. He charged with all the strength he had left, ready to kill Darius. However, the one who had his head cut off was him. Darius truly was impressed. Not only had Rayon escaped the doctrine, but he also endured the pain of the rage worm and still had the strength to attack. It had been many years since Darius had been wounded like that, or seen his own blood. Being bitten by a disposable dog he himself had trained was hard to believe, but it no longer mattered. Now that Rayon was dead, there was nothing more to worry about. He ordered the other assassins to dispose of the body. In his final thoughts, Rayon accepted the truth. Darius was considered one of the strongest warriors on the continent. From the start, it was obvious he had no chance. Darius was strong. He was weak, but he couldn't accept it. He deeply regretted having lived that way, without purpose. He regretted being Darius's toy all his life, and most of all, he regretted not completing the flame ring technique. At that moment, it didn't matter if it was a god or even the devil himself. Anyone would do. He just wanted a chance for revenge. And then the system answered. He had been chosen by wrath. Wrath would descend upon his body, even though he was dead. The next vision was unexpected. He saw a beautiful woman holding a child. She spoke lovingly to the baby, calling him cute and saying he was adorable. That child was him. He had reincarnated. The woman holding him was named Sylvia, and she was his new mother. Rayon had been reborn as the child of that woman. Memories of his past life as an assassin. At first, he thought it was a dream and spent 100 days sleeping, but no matter how much he slept, he never woke up. In the end, he accepted the truth. He had been reborn. Sylvia commented that the weather was lovely and said she hoped the Lord would return soon so they could finally choose a good name for the baby. Rayon found it strange not to have a name yet, but figured the man was probably busy. After all, he had been missing for 100 days. He still didn't know much about his new life, but he could tell the family was wealthy. That was for the best, as he would need resources for his revenge. The only thing he remembered clearly was the hatred and remorse he felt before dying. But now, he had to be patient. So far, he had only lived in that room. He didn't know where he was, what his position was, or even what year it was. More than that, he hadn't fully mastered the flame ring. ring, so he would need even more patience. Once, he had been called the greatest assassin in the history of House Robert, and when the time came to take revenge on Darius, he would need to suppress every emotion and desire. Even so, his curiosity grew. That mansion wasn't just a rich house, it was of the highest level. That was when a maid entered the room and told Miss Sylvia that the Lord was arriving. She smiled and asked if Daddy was already coming. The baby then realized that he was not the Lord's son, but his grandson. Sylvia mentioned she needed to prepare something, but the maid said it was too late. The Lord was already at the door. At that moment, everyone in the room felt a heavy pressure on their bodies. His presence approached, and soon the arrival of the great Lord was announced. To cause such pressure with his mere presence, he was certainly an extremely powerful person. Even the baby, who had lived a previous life, was surprised by the figure approaching. It was someone he definitely recognized. The man asked if that was the child. When Rayon looked at him, he was sure of who it was. The man had golden hair like the sun and red eyes like fire. He was the master of the most powerful family on the continent, known as the King of Northern Destruction. He was Glenn Sieghart. Somehow, Rayon had reincarnated as the grandson of the most feared and respected man on the continent. When Glenn held his grandson for the first time, he gave him a name, Rayon. As the meaning of the name suggested, he was to live and exist like a shadow in silence. Even after crossing the gates of death, Rayon had regained his name. Now, once again, he was called Rayon. That night, while everyone slept, Rayon reflected. Those last 100 days had been frustrating, but now he had a chance. He often felt sleepy, and whenever he woke up, Sylvia was by his side. He still couldn't control mana or perform techniques, but at least he was sleeping in a crib. It was a start. With effort and patience, he began to condense the flame ring once more. Unlike the continent's common cultivation techniques, which used breathing to absorb mana from nature and form aura in the energy center, the flame ring was a special technique gained through unique encounters. Just like a mage creates mana circles, this technique formed a ring around the heart. It increased stamina, stimulated physical growth, and also strengthened willpower and spirit. Because of this, it was considered the best technique to shape a true warrior. More importantly, this technique had one decisive advantage. No genius, not even Darius, could detect the existence of a flame ring. If he could strengthen his body and mind with this technique and also learn the swordsmanship of the Sieghart family, his revenge against Darius would no longer be a distant dream. However, he soon noticed something strange. Perhaps due to the special constitution of his new body, the mana circuits were filled with intense cold. Even after sleeping for more than 20 hours, his body remained cold. Furthermore, the blockage was spreading to new areas. If it continued, he would die once the cold froze all his circuits. He knew he had to break through the frozen circuits using the flame ring, but he also realized that simply eliminating the cold would be a waste. It was high-density energy, so he decided to try combining it with the fire flow. Although slow, the process seemed stable, but once again he fell asleep shortly after cultivating a little. That body was still too weak. The next morning, as he crawled with difficulty, Glenn appeared to see him. Sylvia, excited, encouraged the baby. Rayon, deep down, found it all very difficult. His soul was that of an adult, but he was forced to act like a baby all the time. Even so, he heard Sylvia say that there was nothing her dear son Rayon couldn't do. She believed in him. Rayon was someone who preferred to endure cold alone, until, suddenly, a man entered the room. He was called a saint, but said he could be addressed simply as Sir. Rayon wondered if that was the famous Ragged Saint. His abilities with divine power and healing arts were unmatched, and he was known as the most talented healer on the continent. However, his passion for travel made him extremely difficult to find. The saint explained that he had been traveling when he heard Sylvia had a child. Upon seeing the baby, he commented that the blonde hair and red eyes showed he had taken after his mother. He also said the child was very cute, very different from Glenn's other children. Sylvia then said that the baby's name was Rayon. The saint asked if the name had been given intentionally, with the meaning of shadow. Sylvia confirmed. The saint then questioned what Glenn was thinking by naming a child Shadow. To Rayon, it was clear that the saint didn't treat Glenn formally. He called the head of the family simply Glenn, which indicated a close relationship between them. Rayon had heard about this. The King of Northern Destruction and the Ragged Saint shared an old friendship. The saint approached the baby to examine him. After checking his mana circuits, he concluded that the situation was not good. He explained to Sylvia that the child was afflicted with the curse of ice. The circuits were blocked by cold fragments. If ignored, he wouldn't die immediately, but he wouldn't live long either. Moreover, following the path of a swordsman would become impossible. Sylvia was devastated. The saint said he would give her a medicine to delay the progression of the condition, but before he could do more, the maid entered the room, announcing that the Lord was looking for the saint and wanted to see him immediately. The saint grumbled that the man always appeared at the worst times. He said he had to go right away but would return later. Rayon, meanwhile, now knew he suffered from the curse of ice, but that didn't change much. much. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Sylvia's tears. She was visibly shaken and said she wouldn't accept losing her son that way. She claimed she would do whatever it took to save him. As a mother, she would do everything for him. Rayon's heart ached at those words. It was painful to see her in that state. He didn't want her to cry. With effort, he wiped the tears from her face and at that moment said his first word. Shortly after, Sylvia stormed into her father's meeting with determined steps. Glenn asked angrily what kind of rudeness that was, but Sylvia knelt down and begged him to save Rayon. She said she knew he was already aware of the child's condition, but even so, she insisted. She declared that the baby meant everything to her. Glenn replied coldly. He believed that Rayon would never be able to become a warrior. If that was the case, why should he care? According to him, there was no reason to help someone who couldn't contribute to the family. Sylvia then asked if he wasn't the grandfather of that child. Glenn responded harshly. He said that was the grandson she had brought after abandoning her own house. He declared that he had already done more than enough by giving him the Sieghart family name, and that should already be considered a blessing. He ordered them to take Sylvia away. But even in tears, she kept insisting. All she wanted was for her son to be saved. The saint, who was still present, remarked that Glenn was as stubborn as ever. He asked why Glenn couldn't simply have an honest conversation. After all, Glenn was the one who had called him to examine the child, so why act with such coldness? Glenn ordered the saint to be quiet and just give the details. The saint explained that 9 of the child's mana circuits were sealed by cold, and the more the body grew, the more dangerous the condition would become. For now, there was no immediate threat, since Glenn himself had temporarily suppressed the cold. But as he had already said, it would be impossible for Rayon to become a warrior in the future. After hearing that, Glenn said it didn't matter. What mattered was that the boy lived. The saint, surprised by the change in attitude, observed that Glenn seemed to care for his grandson, even if he pretended not to. If that was true, then why had he given him the name Rayon, which meant shadow? Glenn explained that it didn't only have that meaning. 1,000 years ago, the name held a deeper significance. Later, Sylvia was feeding Rayon an elixir the saint had left behind. She said it might taste a little bitter, but to everyone's surprise, Rayon didn't complain. On the contrary, he asked for more. Sylvia smiled and said he was very strong for enduring that taste. The maid commented that he was amazing. For Rayon, the elixir was exactly what he needed. With fire attributes, its heat began pushing the cold out of his mana circuits. Seeing his reaction, Sylvia wondered if he understood her feelings. He simply asked for more elixir. 2 years passed since he had begun training and drinking the elixirs. Thanks to that, his flame ring grew quickly and reached the level of 1 star. After 2 more years of constant training, his routine already included playing with Sylvia and Helen in the mornings. He thought there probably wasn't another child on the continent as busy as he was. He spent his nights cultivating instead of sleeping. Now Rayon was 5 years old. The system informed him that he had obtained the 2nd flame ring. His soul had grown stronger, and the effects of the new ring increased his mana affinity, willpower, and energy. The 2 rings now rotated in the shape of a cross, making him even more sensitive to the presence of mana around him. Then Helen appeared and was surprised to see him awake so early. She asked if she could collect the dirty clothes, and Rayon nodded. He thought he was testing something with her, but quickly realized that no one else could see the system window. Since reaching the 1st level of the flame ring, he had been able to view his own attributes and receive messages from the system. At first, he didn't understand what it was, but over time, he realized it was incredibly useful. And from Helen's reactions, it seemed only he had access to that information. Despite all his progress, the curse of ice and his weak vitality were still present. That's why he got tired so easily, even with minor physical effort. Even so, he was certain that the saint's elixir, along with the constant help of Sylvia, Helen, and the other residents of the annex, had been essential to his development over the past 5 years. He knew he was still a child and had time. There was no need to rush. The curse of ice and his frailty were real obstacles, but he also possessed the best cultivation technique on the continent. In his past life, he was the greatest assassin of House Robert. Now, with the flame ring, he was confident the negative effects would fade with time, and if, in addition, he could learn the swordsmanship of the Sieghart family, one day he would kill Darius. But rushing wouldn't help. Darius was someone who contended for the title of the strongest man on the continent. Giving in to the thirst for revenge too soon would only weaken his mind. He had to wait for the right moment. The number of people capable of killing Rayon could be counted on one hand. Even if his progress was slow, he knew he had to grow in a controlled way. When the opportunity came, he would have to eliminate it in a single decisive blow. That was when Sylvia came to speak with him. She said she had an appointment later and asked him to get dressed because they were going to the main building. At that moment, Rayon remembered exactly what day it was. It was explained that the 6 kings and the 5 demons maintained the balance of power on the continent. The Sieghart house, where he had reincarnated, was one of the 6 kings' houses. While the kings spread order and stability, the 5 demons represented threats to peace. Besides them, there were other forces on the continent that also held judgment ceremonies ceremonies to decide whether someone was virtuous or not. That day, it was Sieghart House's turn to hold its ceremony. Many people were gathered in the main building, and the atmosphere resembled a formal ball. When Sylvia appeared, many began whispering and criticizing her. They looked at her as the black sheep of the family. They said she shouldn't even be there, that it was shameful to allow her presence in that place. They claimed that accepting her was a fall in the house's standards. But Sylvia and Rayon completely ignored the stares and comments. He noticed that the direct bloodline of the family seemed to be weakening. Maybe there was some reason or circumstance he still didn't know. Rayon didn't mind being insulted, but he couldn't stand seeing his mother being humiliated. However, Sylvia said it was fine. They were there just to observe. Shortly after, the Lord of Sieghart House appeared. Rayon thought it had already been 5 years since he had last seen him up close. Once again, he stood before Glenn Sieghart. The patriarch announced that everyone had arrived and then revealed the Sword of Judgment. It was the beginning of the ceremony. Rayon was impressed by the sword. It was said that by touching the blade, the sword would reveal one's talent for mana. The first to step forward was Buren Sieghart, one of the children from the direct bloodline. They explained that a child's skull is not fully formed until around 4 years old, and that this is when mana sensitivity stabilizes. That's why children were tested while still young before their full development. Buren touched the sword and managed to activate the wind attribute, revealing a mana quality considered excellent. Glenn praised the result, saying that the wind attribute was great for swordsmen, and that he should focus on feeling and following the flow of the wind. Next was Runan, from the vassal house Sulayon. While watching, Rayon tried to better understand how the evaluation worked. The distance. The light projected from the sword indicated the purity of the mana. The hilt of the sword revealed the child's attribute. That's how talent was determined. They said that another genius had been born in House Sulayon, which only reinforced how obsessed everyone there was with talent. Rayon believed he would not have a good result. Although he had already achieved 2 stars in the Ring of Fire, there was still a lot of ice obstructing his circuits. Even so, he was not worried. His focus was to discover which attribute matched best with his new body, and then decide which path to take in cultivation. When the last name on the list was called, everyone looked at him and Sylvia with contempt. It was Rayon Sieghart's turn. He stepped forward, encouraged by his mother's kind words, but without high expectations. Sylvia asked if he had paid attention to how the other children had done it. He just had to touch the blade. So, Rayon placed his hand on the sword. At that moment, a bright light appeared, surprising even him. He had a vision. In front of monstrous creatures, there was a radiant sun. A warrior with blonde hair wielded a flaming blade and, with a single strike, destroyed all those creatures. Ron didn't know what he was seeing. That scene felt far beyond reality. However, to others, the light he emitted barely reached half the sword. They began laughing at him, saying he was far from having any talent. They commented that he didn't even seem like a Sieghart descendant. He was a complete disappointment. Even so, Sylvia comforted him gently, saying he did great. Meanwhile, people kept laughing, even doubting his bloodline. But Glenn stood up and ordered everyone to be silent. He said they were making too much noise and declared the ceremony over. He ordered everyone to leave. Only Glenn and his butler remained, standing before the Sword of Judgment. Glenn thought that must be the boy's limit, but admitted he hadn't expected much to begin with. However, in that instant, the sword began to radiate an intense golden light. Glenn knew exactly what that meant. It was the golden aura of the sun, the same one recorded in ancient texts about the first head of the Sieghart house. A transcendental energy, strong enough to even dispel demonic fire. It was golden, blazing mana, a radiant flame that had appeared only once in the family's history. He himself had never seen that light before. He had only read about it in the old records. Now, in front of the dazzling golden glow of the sword, Glenn wondered what exactly Rayon was. 7 years later, while checking the system, Rayon reviewed his status. He still had no title. The negative conditions remained: curse of ice, weak stamina, poor physical ability, and weakened mana. However, there was progress. His Ring of Fire was now at the 2-star level, and he had also acquired 2-star resistance to water. Rayon believed he would soon reach the 3rd Ring of Fire. 7 years had passed since the last ceremony, and now, at 12 years old, he felt that his constant effort was finally paying off. His 2 rings of fire were close to becoming 3. If only he could do something about the ice in his body, his progress would be much faster. His resistance to the water element had increased to 2 stars. The ice that once spread through his body had disappeared, and although his limbs were still stiff, they were not as rigid as before. Moving was difficult, but compared to the early days of his life, his condition had greatly improved. He decided it was time to begin his physical training as well. Sylvia, seeing him standing still, asked what he was doing there without getting ready. It was time to go because they couldn't be late. Rayon then realized it was time to attend the second judgment ceremony. He knew he would face those same frustrating things again. The ceremony happened quickly, maybe because only members of the collateral line were present. The last to be called was once again Rayon Sieghart. Lord Glenn commented that he must have received the order to participate in basic training as a family member. Still, he asked why Rayon hadn't responded to the summons, even though a month had already passed. Rayon was confused by the question. Sylvia explained that he was different from the other children. There was still ice in his body, and it was too much for him to endure. He wondered if his mother really knew about that. But Glenn stated that this land belonged to the Siegharts, and there was no exception or refusal for anyone who carried that name. Even if he couldn't walk, he would have to crawl until he was able to train. That was what it meant to be a Sieghart. He asked Sylvia if she was going to give up again. He questioned if she would flee from the house once more. In that land, one could only live as a true Sieghart. Some people there began to wonder if she really would run away again, as she had in the past. It was then that Rayon began to understand why his mother was treated that way. Sylvia had fled from the Sieghart house after breaking her own energy center and mana circuit. Even though she had learned martial arts, she had no aura. After fleeing, she married Rayon's father. However, when she became pregnant, her husband died, and she had no other choice but to return to the Sieghart house. That decision, made after consciously giving up her position as a direct descendant, caused her to be rejected even by members of the collateral bloodline. That was how people saw her. But Rayon, seeing all of this, couldn't accept it. He was her son. He couldn't stand seeing her treated that way. He stepped forward, climbed the platform, and declared that he would join the training starting next month. The sage of the martial palace, Denier Sieghart, argued that even the basic training was something someone like him couldn't endure. He asked him to give up, but Rayon responded that he would be fine. He had received the Sieghart name and would honor it. Glenn asked if he understood the weight and seriousness of invoking that name. Upon hearing this, Rayon felt such overwhelming pressure that he coughed up blood. It was as if his body were being torn to pieces just from the family leader's gaze. The impact struck his heart more deeply than any blow from Darius. In that moment, he understood the power of the King of Northern Destruction. Sylvia tried to argue, saying that Rayon was still very young and didn't know what he was saying. Denier added that he was just a clueless child and asked them to remove the pressure. But Glenn interrupted, saying that now he was the one speaking and no one could stop him. Sylvia insisted that her son wasn't physically capable of enduring that training. While listening to all of this, Rayon thought that an assassin was someone who lived in the shadows, closer to death than to life. Assassins never revealed themselves, but he was no longer one of them. He would never again live as an assassin. Now, he was Rayon Sieghart, and he would make sure Sylvia regained her position. He remembered that he had been raised in the annex building and not the main building. That was why he didn't know how imposing and grand the Sieghart name was. Participating in the training was his way of understanding what kind of place that was. As Rayon, he would protect Sylvia, protect the happiness and smiles that were precious to him, and recover everything with his own hands. Glenn asked if he truly thought he could judge the Siegharts just based on the basic training. Rayon replied that it was the only way he knew to learn about the family. Glenn said he would assign him an appropriate instructor, but warned him not to be disappointed. Even while facing all the pressure coming from Glenn, Rayon ended up fainting. Before losing consciousness, he thought that in his previous life, he had been the greatest assassin of all time. Now, he was someone who carried the legend of the continent. If he could use all the skills he had, making his mark within that family wouldn't be impossible. He would show everyone how resilient that little stone they all despised could be. Later at the training center, the martial palace master, Karun Sieghart, asked if that round boy, who could barely move, was really coming to train. A subordinate confirmed that he was. He said it wasn't just one or two maids who had overheard the conversation between the saint and the lord. Many already knew that Rayon suffered from a rare and severe illness. Karun reflected that upon seeing the boy's body for the first time, he had immediately known that Rayon wasn't an ordinary child. Even so, he was surprised that he had managed to withstand the presence of the family head. Thinking more calmly, he realized Sylvia's talent had also far surpassed the others. He ordered a subordinate to inform a maid to station someone in the annex. It was necessary to begin monitoring the boy immediately and report everything that happened. Meanwhile, at the fifth training ground of the Sieghart family, the family lord made a brief visit to speak with a specific person. He went to Rimmer, who pretended to be asleep but was quickly found out. Rimmer Diaz, known as the Radiant Blade, responded with good humor, and the conversation continued. Glenn, the head of the family, commented that the trainers were working hard while Rimmer remained lying down. Rimmer argued that he was only following orders, saying the leader was the head and the others were the body. To him, it was all fair. Glenn remarked that even after 50 years, Rimmer still acted like a child. Rimmer replied that people don't change until death, and then asked if Glenn was there because of his youngest grandson. Sylvia had gone to see him and asked that that the boy not be harmed, but surely she hadn't expected the family leader himself to show up. Rimmer made it clear that if the visit was for the same reason as Sylvia's request, it would be a waste of time. He stated that place, could not be interfered with, not even by the family head. Even if it was the leader's grandson, he would make no exceptions. However, Glenn assured him that he hadn't come to ask for the training to be softened. On the contrary, they could even intensify it if needed. To him, it was important to separate trash from treasure. Rimmer said the leader seemed to be showing more affection for his grandson than expected, perhaps trying to give the boy the love he hadn't been able to offer Sylvia. Glenn replied that if it weren't for his companion, he would have lost his mind a long time ago. He made it clear that Rimmer shouldn't go easy on the boy because he needed to learn how to distinguish right from wrong. Only those who were worthy should receive training. Rimmer then assured him he would go all out and wished the Lord a good trip, saying he was curious to see how Rayon would perform in training. Looking at his system, Rayon had finally reached the third ring of fire. His body and soul had become slightly stronger thanks to the effects of this new level. His strength, agility, and stamina had increased, as well as his mana, energy affinity, and willpower. His water resistance had also risen to 3 stars, and one of the threads of the freezing curse had disappeared. Rayon realized that the 3-star level was completely different. His bodily awareness was sharper, and his mind was more stable. Thanks to Sylvia's help, his muscles were protected from tearing, which allowed his development to continue without major difficulty. In addition, the magical status window was accelerating his growth even more. Still, this was only the beginning. The Zieghardt family's training was known for its difficulty. Reaching 3 stars was only the start of the path as an apprentice. The foundation needed to be solid so that the future could be built firmly. Rayon wanted to surpass everyone, prove his achievements, silence those who looked down on him, and after that take revenge on the Holy Sword Saint, Darius Robert. He would not stop until he cut that man's throat. Sylvia appeared and asked if he hadn't gone to sleep yet. Rayon then asked why she was there at that hour. She said she needed to talk to him. She asked if he really had to attend basic training the next morning. She admitted that she wanted to stop him because he always remained silent even when in pain, and she feared what might happen if he got hurt. She said she wasn't asking him to give up, just to wait a little. But Rayon said he couldn't wait. Every time he saw members of the direct or collateral bloodlines of the family looking at them with disgust, every time they belittled his mother, he felt hatred. The frustration was so intense that he couldn't contain it. That was why he believed that if he trained hard, no one would dare look down on Sylvia again. She replied that he was too smart for his age and should understand the reasons why they lived alone and were cursed by others. She said she met Rayon's father while working and fell in love with him, even knowing how difficult it would be, as he was just a common knight. For that reason, she destroyed her own mana circuits and energy center and ran away from home. In truth, Rayon had an older sister named Shaya, 2 years older than him. While they were living peacefully, an Eden squad recognized Sylvia's face and ambushed them. Rayon's father was not strong enough and Sylvia was pregnant, so they couldn't fight back. Fortunately, his father had secretly arranged guards to protect her, but when they arrived, it was already too late. Everyone was dead, except Sylvia, who had no choice but to return to her family. That was why she was called a failure in that house. Sylvia said she had nothing more to say to Rayon's grandfather, but he thought that was selfish. He believed his mother had abandoned her responsibilities just to pursue her own happiness and, in the end, returned only to beg for her life. Even so, she was also the person who gave him a new life and showed him affection for the first time. Even if everyone called her selfish, to him, she was the only mother he had in both his lives. Rayon asked if she regretted everything she had done. Sylvia firmly answered that she did not. She didn't regret anything. Rayon thought that even if everyone called his mother selfish, she was still the precious mother he could never replace. In the future, he might seek revenge, but only after he had earned, through his own merit, the position and rights she deserved. At that moment, Sylvia suddenly began to cry. Later, while she slept, Rayon reflected that it had taken him a long time to calm her down. Now, he needed to check the progress of his ring of fire and then get some rest. There wasn't much time left until the start of training. He noticed that since he had reached the 3rd star, the rotation speed of the rings of fire had increased greatly. He wondered how fast it would be once he reached the 4th star. As he gathered more and more magic, something appeared before him. The time had finally come. A presence emerged within him. A furious force called the King of Essence manifested before him. The entity, filled with hatred, declared that in the name of the 2nd monarch of the demon realm, it would carry out its revenge. Rayon, confused, wondered what that was. Faced with that strange pressure, Rayon activated 2 special traits, one of them being wrath itself, which had awakened. The voice of the entity ordered him to hand over his body and soul, but it soon hesitated, realizing there was a child before it, and questioned why. Rayon, surprised, also wanted to know who that entity was. Wrath, in turn, said that the anger it saw in Rayon was not something an ordinary boy could contain. That fury did not come directly from him, but was deeply hidden in his heart. Wrath was pleased by this and said Rayon could give it his soul, and in return, it would grant him the revenge he so desperately wanted. Rayon wondered if that entity had appeared because of the rage he felt toward Darius before dying. But even if that were the case, it was a little too late. He then refused. He declared he would achieve his revenge with his own hands and would not depend on anyone for it. Wrath, however, said he was mistaken. There was no negotiation. It had already decided, as the King of Essence, it would take his body regardless. Wrath's flames began to devour Rayon's body. He felt the freezing fire, as if his entire body were about to freeze from the inside. It was a suffocating feeling, as if even his soul were in danger. Wrath ordered him to direct all his rage, claiming that even if he were to face a god, the King of Essence could kill him. Rayon thought he was only managing to endure because of his water resistance, but then realized it wasn't just about temperature. It was as if the flame was constantly provoking the fury inside him, awakening his anger. Wrath screamed that it would crush his head and trample on his remains, demanding that Rayon surrender his body. But he thought that if he did, he wouldn't know what would happen to Sylvia and everyone else, so he decided he wouldn't give up, even if it meant dying. Wrath said he would find peace if he gave up his soul, and claimed that all resistance was useless. It had tried to minimize the damage to Rayon's body, since it only planned to use it for a while, but it would hold back no longer. Rayon felt as if his body were about to explode. He was reaching his limit and thought he couldn't hold out much longer. But then he had an idea. If his water resistance allowed him to endure that icy aura, maybe he could also use his ring of fire to counter Wrath's power. It was his only chance to survive. He activated his ring of fire and began confronting the entity's flames. Wrath was surprised, saying it was impossible. A mere human who had just awakened was already resisting its power. But Rayon did not back down. He said he would achieve his revenge on his own and would not allow some random spirit to take his body. Wrath, offended, replied that it was not just any spirit, it was a monarch of the demon realm. Rayon then mocked it, asking if a monarch with such weak power really posed a threat. He realized Wrath had said it was awakening, which meant it was not yet at full strength. Suddenly, Rayon's system granted him additional abilities. Wrath became irritated, saying that authority belonged to it and that the attribute window was also its creation. Rayon could now see his own stats and numbers. Curious, he asked what kind of system that was and whether it had a connection to Wrath. The entity confirmed that yes, it was a system it had created itself. Rayon asked what the purpose of it all was, but Wrath refused to answer. Even so, Rayon had already figured it out. It was a system made to accelerate his growth. He began to find it strange how his current ring of fire was better than in his past life, but now everything made sense. It was thanks to that system. Wrath demanded that Rayon return its body and authority, but in truth it was Wrath who was being absorbed. Rayon, gathering all his mana, managed to land a powerful punch directly on the entity's essence. Rayon wondered why that immaterial soul hadn't been able to absorb him all at once. Even after releasing so much power, no one had shown up. It was as if only he could feel and see Wrath's presence. He tried to brush it off like an annoying fly, but Wrath was furious. Then it entered his body, taking the form of a bracelet. Wrath explained that its seal had recently been broken and that its powers would return over time. When that happened, Rayon would no longer be able to stop it. It stated that it would remain by his side until his last breath. Rayon thought that entity was like a plague. He would love to tear it out of his body, but he knew that if Wrath were forcibly removed, the magic system might also disappear. Besides, he couldn't predict what it might do to the people in the annex building, so it was better to keep it close. As the saying goes, keep your enemies even closer than your friends. Irritated, he asked why Wrath had chosen a flowery bracelet as its form. The entity replied that he should respect its personal taste. The next morning, under a clear sky, Sylvia and Helen were very worried. It was Rayon's first day of official training. He appeared confident, saying he was ready, and headed off to the training fields. At the moment of farewell, Helen insisted he not push himself too hard, but Rayon replied that he would be fine and would return safely. Helen then asked Sylvia why she had that serious look. Was that how she said goodbye to her son? Sylvia, holding back her emotions, tried to cheer up a little and wished him safety. Rayon reassured her that he wouldn't overdo it and promised he would not give up. As soon as he left, Sylvia asked if everything would really be all right. Helen answered with confidence. She said he had improved a lot and would surely endure the training. Sylvia agreed. Rayon had grown a lot, and Helen said that, according to reliable information, this year's instructor was the best in the entire Sieghart family. Rayon would be rewarded for his efforts. He had promised not to get hurt and that his mother didn't need to worry so much. Even so, Sylvia could only wish with all her heart that her son would return safely. Later, in the 5th training ground of the Sieghart family, all the children of the main families, collateral bloodlines, and nominees from allied families were gathered. Ron had already expected a crowded environment because he knew it wouldn't only be direct and collateral descendants. According to Helen, there were 6 training grounds that year, and that one was only the 5th, not even the last. The negative comments didn't take long to appear. Some whispered that Rayon was so weak he would probably break his bones just by bumping into someone. Others said he shouldn't even be there, claiming he would soon give up. They also mocked the bracelet he wore, calling it tacky. Wrath grew furious at this, calling them all trash, blinded by noble arrogance, and threatened to crush their skulls. Rayon, however, calmly approached. He asked why they didn't have the courage to say all that to his face, instead of gossiping behind his back. He reminded them that speaking ill of others in secret was shameful. One of the boys got angry and told Rayon to shut up, saying someone from the annex had no right to speak to them like that. They added that he wasn't even a direct descendant, but Rayon replied by questioning what gave them that right since they were also from collateral lines. He said such words shouldn't be used against weaker opponents. One of the boys, irritated, moved to attack him, saying Rayon should know his place. However, before the fight could escalate, someone intervened. It was Burin Sieghart, one of the direct descendants. Immediately, the 2 boys threatening Rayon backed off. Burin addressed Rayon, saying he didn't know his place either, calling him useless and claiming he could be crushed at any time. He said Rayon should stay in the shadows or risk being expelled. He believed Rayon only drew attention during the first ceremony by monopolizing the moment, not through any real merit. He said Rayon never even planned to take part in the training and should just leave since he had no chance of passing the tests. Rayon, unfazed, said he had heard enough from people like him. He asked who Burin thought he was, a direct descendant with no actual status. He questioned what authority he had to say such things. Did he expect recognition just by whining to his daddy? Burin got even more enraged and asked how someone from a collateral line dared to speak to him like that. That was when Rimmer appeared, kicking the door open. He interrupted everyone by asking if they were already fighting. According to him, that was to be expected from energetic youths. Rayon recognized him instantly. That was Rimmer, the Radiant Blade. He had heard stories, a former legendary warrior who retired after having his energy center damaged. Rimmer asked if it wouldn't be better to continue the fight after the ceremony. Without saying a word, Burin simply stepped back and left. With a calm smile, Rimmer introduced himself as the new instructor responsible for overseeing everyone's training. He said he was looking forward to getting to know each of them and mentioned that, from what he heard, around 160 youths would be participating. For him, that was far too many, so he would conduct a selection. He explained that there would be a test to reduce that number to just 40 participants. The news shocked everyone present. Rimmer explained that his goal was simply to separate the trash from the worthy without sugarcoating it. Wrath, inside Rayon's body, was outraged by the man's audacity, but Rayon silenced it with an internal slap, stopping it from saying anything more. Rimmer then declared that in that training ground, he was the law. Anyone with complaints could go home immediately. With no objections, he began the test, asking why they were still standing. He ordered everyone to start running, and to run a lot. He said energy, stamina, and willpower were essential in martial arts. Everyone started running. Wrath asked why Rayon was falling behind, saying that if he was going to run, he should be in front. But Rayon replied that it wasn't a competition. He didn't need to outpace anyone. He believed Rimmer wasn't just watching surface performance, but evaluating each person's potential and character. Those who endured until the end would be accepted. Up front, Burin and Runan had been running for a while. They maintained an impressive pace. Many commented that the two were amazing, on a very high level, and that expectations for their future were great. In contrast, they said Rayon could barely run. Some remarked that it was no surprise he was last, and would probably be eliminated soon. They said he should be grateful since his suffering would soon end. But Rayon thought it was all strange. Why did the training involve only running for so long? In his previous life, he had been thrown among starving beasts and had to run for his life. Compared to that, this training seemed simple. While others struggled to keep going, Rayon was still composed. Rimmer noticed this and became even more intrigued. He thought the boy was different. His energy should have run out a long time ago, yet he was still standing. This wasn't just persistence or grit. It was an immense willpower, typical of warriors who had faced death many times. He wondered why a child had such determination. Rimmer also noticed something unusual. He could see the colors that revealed each student's student's potential, but Rayon had no color at all. That meant the boy's potential was beyond what he could perceive. It was extraordinary. Meanwhile, the others commented that Rayon was arrogant for being last. They believed he would soon drop out of training. Rayon felt his body wearing down but didn't give up. He wondered why they were running for so long if it was just training. Despite the exhaustion, he kept going. Many had already given up. Some questioned how he was still running, even after being labeled as sickly. He stood like he felt no fatigue. In truth, Rayon was near his limit. He felt his lungs and heart being crushed, but he gathered strength with the help of his ring of fire. He took comfort in noticing that the ring was growing rapidly. He needed to give everything he had to draw out the full potential of the technique. Even so, Wrath mocked him, calling him pathetic. It said that even after being consumed by the King of Essence, he was still falling behind. It ridiculed the pitiful state he was in. The King of Essence, dwelling inside Rayon, demanded control of his body. He claimed he could surpass the blue-haired boy, and even freeze everyone else. He then tried to take over Rayon's body, but Rayon resisted with all his strength. His senses were fading, but he had to act like nothing was happening. He fought to maintain control and refused to surrender himself to that entity. Meanwhile, Burin was growing irritated by the fact that Rayon was still on his feet. He couldn't understand how the boy was still running. He was certain Rayon was unfit for physical training. He recalled a conversation he had overheard. Someone had said that, according to Saint Maltrapilho, Sylvia's son would soon die and had no chance of becoming a warrior. But now, seeing Rayon still running, he found it all infuriating. He decided to show his true strength. He would use his aura to highlight the difference between them and force Rayon to give up. With that, he surged ahead of everyone else. Rayon kept running alongside one of the other children. He thought that despite everything, Burin was still immature. Runan, on the other hand, showed more maturity. The truth was that this test wasn't a competition among students, but a battle against oneself. Each person had to overcome their own limits. Being influenced by others would only interfere with personal growth. Later, with several already giving up, some were commenting that Rayon was still going. Despite all the things said about him, he was still running. He reminded himself that talking was easy, but he was about to collapse. His organs screamed for rest, yet he continued to draw strength from his ring of fire. The technique was advancing, and he needed to take full advantage of every second. The King of Essence kept insisting, saying it was time to take control and end everything. But Rayon didn't give in. He knew this was the worst possible moment to let go. He had to resist and act naturally. Even as his consciousness teetered on the edge, it didn't matter. He would not let that force take over his body. The King of Essence was no longer laughing at Rayon's resistance. To him, it was impossible for a human to withstand his wrath. No one in the world could endure the pressure he exerted, yet Rayon remained firm. This piqued the king's curiosity, and he decided to test the boy's limits. Rayon knew he had to hold on. If he showed even a hint of weakness, he would be devoured immediately. The danger was real, and he was fully aware of it. The King of Essence began to wonder why that boy was so persistent. Why wasn't his wrath, which overwhelmed even seasoned warriors, having any effect? Meanwhile, Rayon was in excruciating pain. It felt like he was on the brink of death. He could no longer control his body. His vision blurred, and he struggled to breathe. Then suddenly Rimmer ordered everyone to stop. Burin, though trying to hide it, felt relieved. He muttered that Rayon was more persistent than a cockroach, but inside he was shaken by the near-death experience he had endured during the test. He was beginning to realize this new life would be much harder than he had imagined. Runan, on the other hand, seemed slightly intrigued by Rayon's performance. The King of Essence was in disbelief. He wanted to understand what kind of monster that boy was. How was he able to resist? Rayon had already said that it wouldn't work. Even in that pitiful state, the training had accelerated the growth of his ring of fire and strengthened his body. The attribute window appeared once more, informing him that he had reached extreme movement conditions, surpassing his own energy limits. Thanks to that, his stats increased. The King of Essence grew even more enraged. He thought it was absurd that Rayon was gaining attributes for free. Later, Rimmer gathered the students and said they had all done a great job. He revealed that what he had said earlier about eliminating most of them had actually been a joke. Many were furious that they had run so much for nothing, but Rimmer warned that if they continued training as they had, most of them really would be eliminated. That made everyone fall silent. He explained that he had told them to run with all their will. However, out of the 160 present, not one of them ran with full intensity to the end, except for a single person, and that person even dared to use aura. He said that in the end, it didn't matter what they had done so far because the real tests were still to come, but if they followed his instructions, they wouldn't fail. He warned that nothing would be easy. From that point on, they would all be considered temporary apprentices. If they passed the tests within 6 months, they could become official members. He also mentioned he would choose the best among them, but he wouldn't publish any rankings. After that, everyone was granted permission to move into the new high-quality dorms prepared by the family. Nearby to the left was an indoor training center they were free to explore. Later in the forest, Rimmer remarked to himself that someone special was waiting for him at his resting stone. That someone was Glenn Sieghart, who appeared to ask how the training had gone. Rimmer replied that Glenn shouldn't ask, since he had been watching everything anyway. After all, he had come there for that very reason. Glenn acknowledged that Rimmer was an excellent evaluator. As expected, he had highlighted Burin and Runan as the most promising talents. He also mentioned that other children had potential to become future pillars of the family. But when it came to Rayon, he admitted he couldn't understand how the boy had kept running until the end. His energy should have run out at the very start. It was the first time he had seen something like that since his own youth. Ever since his energy center was broken, his days had been dull. Now, however, he felt that something interesting was about to happen. Glenn reminded Rimmer that it was his own decision to become the apprentice's instructor and told him to focus more on his work instead of getting distracted. Rimmer replied that of course he would do that for his lord. However, he confessed that he felt he might be able to entrust the future to one of those apprentices. Glenn dismissed it as coincidence and said it would be difficult for that boy to become a warrior. Rimmer, however, said he wasn't certain of anything. No one was. Meanwhile, Rayon told himself that now that regular training was over, he would head to the training grounds. The King of Essence commented that he was toxic. At the same time, many other students were furious with Rayon, speaking behind his back. They spread gossip, saying it made no sense for a sick boy to run that much and still keep training afterward. One of the collateral line members, Krein Sieghart, remarked that this could only be the effect of an elixir. He had heard rumors that the Ragged Saint had given Rayon a powerful elixir. This led many to start claiming that Rayon was cheating. They said he could only run that far because of the elixir's power. Krein began to think it might be necessary to teach Rayon a lesson. Later, they actually began to pursue him for that reason. When questioned, Rayon didn't understand why he was being attacked. The others accused him, saying he had been abandoned by the direct bloodline, yet dared to steal and abuse the power of an elixir. Rayon replied that it was all ridiculous. It felt like a childish quarrel, but the others insisted it was just a friendly talk, and that they would show him some good old dialogue. Krein tried to calm the group by saying that kind of thing was normal, and sometimes people needed to argue to understand each other better. Without waiting, he charged forward with a punch, but the King of Essence watched with curiosity, wondering if the boy would really tolerate such disrespect. However, Rayon didn't let it slide. With a single powerful punch, he knocked Krein out, even surprising the King of Essence with the strength of the blow. Without missing a beat, Rayon commented that it had been a great dialogue and calmly asked if anyone else wanted to talk. The first opponent had his attack easily dodged and was kneed in the stomach right after. The second was confused and questioned how they were losing to a supposed weakling, but ended up getting slapped just as hard. The three of them were being completely dominated. The King of Essence, fascinated by the scene, watched with delight, enjoying a good beating. In the end, the boys were defeated, out of breath and begging for mercy. Krein, admitting defeat, confessed that they had been wrong, but Rayon, firm, stepped on his hand before letting them go and said he still had a question. He wanted to know who had ordered it and asked if it had been Burin. Krein assured him that Burin had nothing to do with the situation and that they acted on their own. Rayon was surprised. He thought Burin disliked him, but that showed maybe he wasn't as bad as he seemed. He then told Krein that the dialogue they had would stay between them. Krein, frightened, immediately agreed. Even so, Rayon pulled his hair hard and warned that if they didn't want another dialogue like that, they had better stay out of his way. Krein, defeated, promised they wouldn't appear before him again and said they had learned their lesson. Rayon then said that if everything was settled, they should leave as soon as possible. While it all happened, Rimmer was secretly watching from a distance. To him, it was an incredible show. It reminded him of the Lord himself when he was young. Blood didn't lie, and Rayon Sieghart clearly had talent for martial arts. It was a rare talent, a true hidden gift among the best. Rimmer felt excited, eager to see how Rayon would develop in the future. Later, in his room, Rayon was analyzing the system. He had reached new achievements, and Wrath was visibly satisfied. His agility had increased by 1 point. The King of Essence, surprised, questioned how that was possible, and said the system was completely abnormal. Rayon reminded him that he himself had created the system, but the King of Essence replied that he had never tested it on anyone. All of this was only happening because Rayon had stolen his powers, and he called him an ungrateful brat. Despite venting, the King of Essence made a suggestion. He proposed a bet. If Rayon won, he would earn attribute points. If he lost, he would receive even more wrath. Right after, the system window opened with the proposal: place first in the cadet test. If he succeeded, he would gain 2 points in all attributes and 1 random trait. If he failed, he would gain 10 more wrath points. Rayon understood that his mission was basically to become Rimmer's official cadet. The King of Essence explained that the results would be clear and that the random trait would be one of his own, but reduced in level to suit Rayon's current different body. As for the 10 wrath points, he explained that it was a small amount for now, but if it kept accumulating, Rayon could eventually lose emotional control. It was a real risk, Rayon reflected. For an ordinary person, coming in first place would be extremely difficult, but he had reincarnated. It was a ticking time bomb, but he had a unique advantage. He accepted the proposal, believing that if he used the experience from his past life, he wouldn't lose the bet. Later at the training center, all the children were exhausted. None of them could handle Rimmer's intense training anymore. The exercise of the moment was the horse stance. Although it seemed simple, it was a fundamental base in all martial arts. Rimmer explained that even though it was just a stance for riding a horse, it required concentration and endurance. He told everyone to stay in that position until he said otherwise, and then went off to take a nap, leaving everyone there struggling to hold on. Rimmer explained that he wasn't the one putting pressure on the recruits. They would eventually feel the weight of it themselves, because that was just a test, not the real training. One of the recruits complained that it was too hard and asked when they would start learning real sword techniques. Another said it was better to give up, since all they had done so far was hold the horse stance and run. Burin, hearing the complaints, told everyone to stop whining. Since regular training was over, they could practice on their own. He warned that if they kept focusing only on basic exercises, their swordsmanship would rust. Soon after, the others left the area, each on their own. The King of Essence, curious, noticed that everyone was going to train sword techniques and asked why Rayon wasn't doing the same. But Rayon knew that with the skills he already had, practicing swordsmanship at that moment would be a waste of time. What he really needed now was strength training and energy control. His body was still weaker than the others because of the cold aura running through his veins, making physical performance more difficult. That's why the basic exercises were more important than any refined technique. He knew there was no use rushing progress, so he decided to focus solely on strengthening his body. As he trained, Runan watched him silently. She thought about how fast Raon was progressing. The weights he was using were already much heavier than the day before. She had heard rumors that he was sick, but each day he increased the load even more. It was clear he was pushing himself to the limit. His rate of growth didn't make sense. Runan wondered if it was normal for someone to increase their bench press by 10 kilograms in just 1 week. Maybe Rayon really was different. Intrigued, Runan approached him. She felt there was something special about that boy. Rayon, noticing her presence, asked what she was doing there. He noticed that for a girl, she was actually quite tall. Only then did Runan realize she had gotten close without even noticing. Unsure of what to say, she sat down beside him and started bench pressing just to play it off. But the truth was that she followed him everywhere. She tried to copy every exercise he did. Runan was sure that the refreshing scent came from Raon. It was a pleasant smell that made her feel lighter. Thanks to that aroma, she felt like she could lift even heavier weights than before. Raon, noticing her persistence, asked if she wanted to say something. Runan, however, said no, while he began to feel slightly uncomfortable with her constant presence. Even so, Runan was convinced that Rayon was special and decided she needed to follow him a little longer. In the afternoon, when all the others returned to the training field with Burin, they noticed Runan was still by Rayon's side. They were surprised to see her with someone like him, especially the boy who had been cast out of the direct bloodline. Burin commented that it was pointless. According to him, repeating such basic strength training would lead nowhere. In his view, Rayon had a fundamental weakness in strength, so he needed to stick to the basics. But even so, the others were still a level ahead. Burin said he didn't know what the next test would be, but comparing each person's path, it was better to keep training swordsmanship, even if only to refine martial skills. He concluded that it didn't make sense to pay attention to a failure like Rayon because the results would speak for themselves. Later, another boy approached Rayon. He introduced himself as Dorian and asked if he could train with them. He wanted to learn the right way. Rayon said he didn't mind, so Dorian, in thanks, offered him a cookie, saying it wasn't much but hoped it tasted good. Rayon replied that he was fine, but Runan was clearly interested in the treat. With begging eyes, as if silently asking, she looked at the cookie with an expression that said, "Feed me." Rayon, unable to resist her expression, ended up handing over the cookie, and she ate it happily. Rayon thought he now had another weirdo following him, but even so, he felt like he was helping others in some way. As the days passed, the three of them started training together constantly, while the others kept blindly following Burin. It had been 6 months since the training began, and Rayon was practically risking his life with each hour of training. Those who had challenged him on the first day were no longer ahead of him. Now he released the breath stuck in his throat and focused on the ones he still had to surpass. Only 2 remained, Runan and Burin. Time passed and the day of the test finally arrived. The exam would be held in a stadium full of spectators. The host thanked everyone for coming and announced that since the Guardians were present, participants should follow their instructions. The King of Essence, watching everything, asked how Raon was feeling. He reminded him of the bet and commented that since he hadn't managed to surpass the 2 opponents, he had better be ready to receive more of his wrath. Rayon, however, replied that this test was completely different from what they had been training for. No one knew what might happened. As he looked around, he noticed that Dorian had collapsed on the ground. He asked what happened, and Dorian said it was nothing. He was just nervous because it was the day of the test and he didn't know if a weakling like him could pass. To calm him down, Runan said she brought a cookie and offered it to him. Then Rayon noticed Burn staring straight at him and wondered why. All of a sudden, so many people were around him. Meanwhile, in the crowd, Sylvia was radiant as she watched her son take the test. She and Helen observed proudly, commenting to each other. Sylvia said that Rayon looked so confident, and Helen agreed, remembering that he endured 6 months of intense training. Besides that, with his charm and politeness, he had even made friends. Helen mentioned that Rayon had always been very understanding since he was little, and Sylvia said she was very proud that he had managed to get closer to other people. It was then that a powerful presence made itself known. The head of the house, Sylvia's father and Rayon's grandfather, had arrived. Everyone around felt an intense pressure the moment he appeared, as no one expected the leader of the family to personally attend the event. In fact, he had never shown up at any of the previous tests. Rimmer, surprised, asked why he was there, but Glenn, the head of the house, replied firmly that this was an important event, a decisive moment that would guide the future of the Sieghart family. He noticed the looks around him and said they were acting as if he didn't have the right to be there, but Rimmer quickly responded that it wasn't like that. On the contrary, his presence was very welcome. Without wasting time, Rimmer officially declared the beginning of the apprentice selection test. He explained that he would use magic to apply the test's criteria. Using powerful wind magic, he released such an intense energy that everyone almost fell to the ground. Even Rayon, used to training under constant pressure, was impressed by the strength of that aura. Rimmer explained that the test was simple. The cadets had to walk through the pressure he was generating, nothing more. It would only be the pressure of his aura and magic, but that was enough to simulate reality. Warriors face this kind of pressure many times in life. The test would evaluate each one's mental and physical resilience when faced with adversity. Some cadets started to complain. They said they had only recently learned to use aura and that it was impossible to withstand that pressure. Others added that not everyone there had learned aura yet, making the test unfair. But Rimmer simply sighed, staying calm. He explained that true pressure wasn't just about aura. It was actually a reflection of the soul level a warrior developed through their experiences and accomplishments. It was something built through effort, sweat, and overcoming challenges, a testament to a life of battle. Even Glenn, the head of the family, agreed. He stated that a person could exert great pressure just through how they had lived, even without aura. The weight of their journey could speak for itself. Rimmer, flattered, praised his lord's words and said that now there was no reason for anyone to complain. He then asked everyone to ignore the interruptions and announced the immediate start of the test. Runan was called to step forward, while the others stepped back. Rimmer explained that she would face pressure adjusted to her level. If she could walk through it and touch him, she would pass. When Rimmer began to exert his pressure, Runan almost couldn't move. She was overwhelmed, even closing her eyes. But he warned that if she used aura, she would fail. The test required overcoming the pressure with the willpower built during training. Despite great effort, Runan managed to take small steps. She slowly advanced until she finally reached Rimmer and touched him. He smiled, gently patted her head, and said she had passed. He acknowledged the effort and dedication she had shown over the past months and asked her to keep progressing like that. Next was Dorian, who was visibly nervous. So nervous that he looked like he might faint. Rimmer asked if he had paid attention to what Runan did. He explained that he would also need to use willpower to cross the pressure. Dorian replied that he wasn't known for having willpower. In fact, he was known for lacking it. But Rimmer was direct. If he didn't try, he would fail. Right at the start of the test, Dorian was pushed back by the pressure and even fell to his knees. Rayon noticed that the pressure level varied by person. Rimmer was adjusting the intensity based on each one's training and potential. He really was observing every detail of each cadet. After an enormous effort, Dorian managed to stand up, walk while stumbling, and touch Rimmer. The instructor declared that he had passed. He said Dorian's problem was a lack of confidence, which didn't match the real skills he possessed. He encouraged him to hold his head high and be proud. Even so, Dorian threw up from the strain and nerves. The test continued with other cadets until it was Burn Sieghart's turn. When Rimmer began to exert his aura, the pressure was much heavier than before. Burn immediately felt the difference. He thought it was completely different from what he had seen from the outside. He couldn't understand how Runan had managed to push through it. He crouched down, feeling crushed, barely able to move his body. Rimmer believed that Rayon had more talent than the others. He said that the number of people who could be compared to Burn could be counted on one hand. Even so, Burn and the cadets who followed him had only wasted their time. Their swordsmanship had become hollow, without purpose. What What they should have trained was not just sword technique, but also their bodies and willpower. Rimmer explained that Burin always relied on aura when things got difficult. However, if he tried to use it now, he would fail instantly. As he listened, Burin thought that he couldn't fail. He clearly remembered the moment his father rejected his brother's entry into the house, and the cold look he received. He knew that if he didn't pass that test, he would face the same fate. He would be discarded. That was why he had done everything he could to be approved. Rimmer then told Burin to stop pretending to be an adult. He was only 12 years old and needed to train according to his age. If he kept looking only ahead, he wouldn't be able to see what was around him. With that, it was time for the last participant. Round Sieghart stepped forward. Rimmer said he would be the final one and asked if he was ready. Rayon confidently confirmed, and then Rimmer activated his pressure. This time it felt especially heavy. Sylvia grew worried as she sensed the intensity, and even Glenn wondered what was going on. Rayon questioned whether this was really part of the test. Rimmer, surprised, said he didn't know, but the talent he saw in that boy clearly surpassed Burin and Runan. That was why he had to endure it. Despite the pressure, Rayon managed to move forward with difficulty. It was explained that the level of a person's soul is not in the body, but in the soul's vessel. At that moment, Rayon didn't possess only the level of Rayon Sieghart, but also the one from his past life as an assassin. That's why his steps were light, as if he wasn't facing any pressure at all. Rimmer was completely shocked. Glenn, as always, simply observed. Rimmer wondered what kind of monster that boy was, because none of it made sense. Rayon touched him with extreme ease. Everyone watching remained in complete silence. Not even the head of the family could believe what he was seeing. Rayon calmly asked if the test was over. The other cadets wondered how he had overcome such absurd pressure. It was unbelievable. Even the audience was speechless. Many questioned how a boy considered crippled and without aura had managed to do that. Still in shock, Rimmer kept wondering who that boy really was. Rayon just stared at him in silence. Then Rimmer remembered he had been observing Rayon for 6 months. He was, in fact, Rayon Sieghart. But even so, he couldn't understand how Rayon had broken his limits. The pressure applied during the test was beyond his current capabilities. It was meant only as a provocation. He never expected Rayon would actually pass. With silence taking over the place, Rayon Sieghart, as the last challenger, officially concluded the apprentice selection. It was time to reveal the result everyone had been waiting for. The best apprentice of the 5th training ground was announced without suspense. Of course, it was Rayon Sieghart. Sylvia was emotional. She proudly declared that her son was the best. She and Helen cried with joy. Helen could barely believe he had actually succeeded. Meanwhile, the rest of the people there struggled to accept it. For many, it was still hard to believe that Rayon Sieghart, once considered a cripple, had become the top apprentice. Burin, outraged, said he didn't accept the result. He accused Rimmer of lying. The trainer, surprised, asked what lie he was talking about. Burin insisted that Rayon was inferior to him in strength, stamina, and talent. He couldn't accept someone like him being called the best apprentice. He said it could only be a trick. Part of the crowd started to believe that too. They murmured that they had heard Rayon didn't even have aura, and that Rimmer was a close friend of the head of the family. Dark rumors began to spread. Burin then suggested settling the matter with a duel. He said that, as warriors of House Sieghart, they should fight face to face. Rimmer, with a faint smile, asked if he really wanted that position so badly. Burin replied that it wasn't for himself, but Rimmer said the test was already over. He then asked the head of the house what they should do next. Glenn thought for a moment, looked at Rayon Sieghart, and remarked that the others seemed unwilling to accept the result. So he asked if Rayon would accept a duel against Burin. Burin smiled, hopeful that Rayon would say yes, but he refused. He said the test was over, and he wouldn't fight when there was nothing to gain. For him, there was no reason to fight just for pride. Glenn, surprised by the answer, commented that he didn't expect to see Burin lose so much grace all at once. Burin, furious, called him a bastard. So Glenn changed his proposal. He declared they would duel for the title of Best Apprentice, and that if Rayon won, he would receive a bronze tablet. This new prize caught Rayon's attention. Gold, silver, and bronze tablets were awarded based on performance within House Sieghart and represented great achievements. Now he had a real reason to fight. Depending on the type of tablet, the rewards were different. Even a bronze one was valuable, especially since it would be personally given by the head of the house. That alone was enough to mean something good would come. Rayon thought that, apparently, even the head of the house wasn't satisfied with him holding the title of Best Apprentice. So he decided to accept the challenge. The duel began shortly after. It would be a simple match with only one round. The use of aura and weapons was prohibited. They could only fight with their bodies. As soon as the fight started, Burin charged with speed, delivering several blows, but Rayon dodged them all with agility. Burin then declared he would use the vacuum tiger fist, a technique his father had personally taught him. Since the use of techniques wasn't forbidden, he didn't consider it cheating. With a powerful strike, he tried to hit Rayon, who managed to endure the impact. The audience said Burin was much stronger. They claimed that collateral bloodline, boy Rayon, didn't stand a chance. Filled with rage, Burn thought that someone like him should never aspire to the title of Best Apprentice. He remembered when his own brother had been rejected by their father and felt the need to prove himself at all costs. Determined to win, he continued attacking with powerful strikes. Meanwhile, Rayon kept dodging easily. His eyes could read every move. He saw Burn's fists and attacks with complete clarity. Irritated, Burn asked if Rayon would surrender, and if not, then he would end it right there. However, instead of backing off, Rayon prepared a strike, just like Burn's. The force was so great that it broke Burn's guard, and the following punch knocked him down completely. The crowd was in shock. They said it was impossible. Rayon had used the same vacuum tiger fist, and everyone wanted to know how he knew that technique. Lying on the ground, Burn asked how he had learned it. Rayon simply replied that Burn had just shown it. He had only copied the movement. People began to suspect that the technique had been secretly passed on. They wondered if it was all part of a conspiracy. Some said it was impossible, but the impact was already done. Rimmer, watching everything, thought that boy wasn't normal. Rayon had not only neutralized the spin of the strike with a direct response, but also delivered a counterattack with opposite rotation, done in the right direction at the right time. And he had done it just by reading the opponent's martial flow. That alone was enough to call him a genius. But Rayon didn't just read the flow, he made it his own. That kind of talent could reach the top of the continent. And that was exactly what House Sieghart was now seeking, a heavenly and exceptional talent. Rimmer then announced that the match was over. The result was clear to everyone. The winner was Rayon Sieghart. With that, the test finally came to an end. As soon as everything was over, Sylvia ran to hug her son tightly. She was extremely proud. The King of Essence, inside Rayon, merely commented that they should head home soon because he was hungry. Runan's family was also very proud, but in Burn's case, his own father didn't even come to see him. Only the butler showed up, and when Burn saw his father's gaze from a distance, he felt a deep sadness. Later, in Karun's office, Burn stood before his father. Karun asked if he remembered what had been said before. Burn replied that he did. He said his father had told him to return as the best apprentice and to never lose to anyone. Karun coldly confirmed it. He said that was the bare minimum expected of him. He ordered Beren to defeat the whore of the South Sulian branch and surpass Rayon, that piece of trash discarded from the main bloodline. He said Beren had turned him into a joke. He asked if his son wanted to end up like the third or fourth brother. Distressed, Beren firmly said no. Karun then stated that he had ruined his first chance. He said they would now choose that loser as the best of the group and ordered Beren to take the title back no matter what. Then, he dismissed him coldly. Those words wouldn't leave Bern's mind. If he wanted to remain part of the direct line of the Sieghart family, he couldn't fail again. This was his last chance. And in his mind, there was only one person to blame. That bastard. The trash named Rayon. Bern kept telling himself that he had trained hard precisely so he would never lose. But even so, he lost. As he thought about it, he realized he had wandered aimlessly. He was alone in an empty place because the test was already over. After that, Bern went to the training hall. There, his eyes turned to the lockers, especially Rayon's. Bern thought it wouldn't be a problem if he took a quick look. After all, it wasn't like he was going to steal anything. He would just look. When he opened Rayon's locker, all he found were shoes. There were more than 10 pairs. Bern was surprised. He wondered if Rayon had really used all those shoes in just 6 months. In comparison, Bern had only replaced his shoes twice during that time. It seemed like Rayon trained in that place all the time, as if even his soul had been absorbed into the hall. Now that he thought about it calmly, Bern realized that all his memories involving Rayon were always of him training. He was there dedicating himself while Bern ignored the basics, focusing on flashy sword movements. While Bern rested comfortably in the dormitory, Rayon kept training non-stop. It was as if he embodied the true spirit of the Sieghart family, while Bern, even as a direct descendant, was doing the complete opposite. The King of Essence said he still could not believe what he was seeing. He had never encountered anyone like that damn boy. He wondered what kind of monster Rayon was, but admitted that no one knew the answer. First of all, he wanted to understand what new ability Rayon had acquired. The King of Essence explained that the ability called Frozen Flower Perception was a very valuable trait, even for someone with such an insignificant existence like Rayon. This ability increased the range of all senses. With just 1 star, the enhancement could reach up to 10%. With the King of Essence's methods, it was possible to sense something up to 10 times farther than normal senses allowed. Rayon acknowledged that it was very useful, but asked why it had such a strange name. The King of Essence replied that it was just a personal preference. Though he admitted the name was not particularly good, Rayon thought that no matter how hard he tried, the king had no creativity for naming things. Later, Rayon was summoned by the head of the family. Sylvia became anxious, thinking he had done something wrong, but the butler explained that the leader wanted to reward him personally with a bronze badge. In the throne room, Rayon saluted the house leader. Glenn said that even if Des liked it, he needed to fulfill his promise. He then handed Rayon the bronze badge and explained that in the future, by returning it, he would have the right to request an item or a favor equal in value to the badge. Rayon said he wanted to make his request immediately. He spoke the name of his mother, Sylvia Sieghart, and asked what he had to do for her to regain her original position. Glenn asked if he meant her place as part of the direct bloodline. Rayon confirmed that was exactly it. He felt that Glenn's attitude changed a bit at that moment. The leader then explained that it would require an achievement, but not just any achievement. It had to be something recognized by the entire family, which was almost impossible, especially for someone like Rayon. Even so, he said it was still possible. Rayon then returned the badge and prepared to leave. However, Glenn stopped him and told him to wait. He pointed out that Rayon had not made a request, only asked a question. He said he could have answered that without needing the badge. Rayon was surprised. He did not expect to hear that from the King of Destruction himself. Glenn then told Rayon to say what he wanted. Rayon already had something in mind, something he needed at that moment. He said he wanted a cultivation technique. Glenn replied that this type of technique was taught during basic training, but Rayon explained that he wanted something more advanced, a cultivation technique better than the standard, but still within the bronze badge's level. He thought that the old shadow cultivation technique he used in his past life would not be enough. If he wanted to restore Sylvia's position and defeat Darius, he would need a perfect aura. Glenn then confirmed that he wanted a cultivation technique. With a snap of his fingers, several shelves full of books appeared around Rayon, as if a library platform had descended around him. This was part of one of Sieghart's libraries. He explained that if Rayon placed his head in the center and focused his mana, the book most needed by him would appear. Rayon reached out, hoping for something better than the old shadow technique. He wished for something truly useful. As he focused his mana, a book slowly began to approach. He wondered what ancient book that was, but both Glenn and the butler were extremely shocked. Glenn asked himself how it was possible for Rayon to have drawn that book. When Rayon looked at the title, he read the name Cultivation of 10,000 Flames. He had no idea what kind of technique it was, but the moment he touched the book, all the pages dissolved. The knowledge of the technique entered his mind directly, along with the flames. Glenn remembered an old conversation about Sylvia. Perhaps she had been isolated by the other family members. He thought he no longer cared about his daughter, as the growth of the house had always been his priority. Even so, over time, he realized he still cared for her, even if in a quiet way. He wondered if Sylvia had gotten close to another man and therefore left the house. After so many years suppressing his emotions and focusing only on duty, he had gained military power strong enough to break through the demon barrier. He had greatly expanded his house. But was it really worth it? In achieving all this, had he lost something essential? Later, Glenn received news. His son-in-law and granddaughter had been attacked. The attackers were the ghosts of Eden, who had an old rivalry with Sylvia. She was the only survivor of the ambush. Since it was a surprise attack, no one arrived in time to help. At that moment, Glenn felt pathetic. He had recovered his emotions too late and realized he could not make up for lost time. Therefore, even if he were hated by Rayon or Sylvia, this time he decided he would protect his grandson no matter the cost. Later, Rayon felt the technique's knowledge flowing through his body and mind, as if it were part of him. Still intrigued, Glenn asked his grandson what exactly he had done. Rayon answered honestly, saying he was not sure. He only remembered the cultivation technique vanishing in his hands. Glenn asked if he remembered the name of the book. Rayon, digging into his memory, replied that it was called Cultivation of 10,000 Flames. The system had recorded that name for him. Glenn wanted to know if he remembered the contents of the technique, and Rayon confirmed he did. Upon hearing that, the head of the family said it was excellent. Rayon had received the bronze badge and could now leave. After Rayon left the room, Glenn was still shocked. The butler, equally surprised, commented that that technique was that technique. Glenn confirmed. It was the technique of the first head of House Sieghart. No one in the entire history of the family had ever been able to read or replicate it. It was unbelievable that his grandson had managed to understand the cultivation of 10,000 flames. The butler warned that if this information spread, both Rayon and Sylvia would be in danger. Glenn told him not to worry. No one knew that this technique still existed. Even so, the butler asked what they would do about the disappearance of the book. Glenn replied that it was not a problem. The book had been passed on to someone who would truly make good use of it. In fact, no one else could use that technique. If it had not been for Rayon, it would have rotted away in the library, forgotten forever. Now he felt that new winds were about to blow. Meanwhile, back in his room, Rayon was deep in thought. No matter how much he tried to make sense of it, it was strange. He had received an incredibly powerful technique. Perhaps not even a golden tablet would be enough to match the value of the cultivation of 10,000 flames. The technique certainly rivaled the legendary level of the Ring of Fire. Still, it was something worth mastering. However, even with all his effort, he still could not fully grasp that flame. He had failed. He had not yet mastered the technique. Ever since he acquired it, Rayon had been trying to master it, but fusing that aura was extremely difficult. He knew he would not be able to learn such an advanced technique in one go, but even so, he had made no progress. The King of Essence, noticing his frustration, said he was aware of the difficulties Rayon was facing and advised him to do his best. At the same time, he warned him to be very careful. If anyone touched him while he was cultivating, the risk would be immense. His mana circuits, or energy center, could break, leaving him paralyzed. And this was even more dangerous for Rayon because of the cold residing within his own mana circuits. Rayon then told the King of Essence that he should not interfere, since he knew the risks, but the king said he was curious to see what would happen. He admitted he wanted to interrupt him once during cultivation, just to see. Rayon warned that would be bad for him too, since he was occupying a body that would become useless. The king replied that it did not matter. He believed that Rayon, being human, would not be able to overcome this anyway. Even if his limbs were cut off or his mana center exploded, the King of Essence said he could revive it all. And when Rayon gave up his body, that would be the perfect moment to take full control. Rayon, suspicious, asked if that would happen only once. The king said no. He could attack Rayon's mind at any time. That meant Rayon would have to live in fear every day. Rayon then realized that being was truly an enemy, a demon lurking, trying to devour his body whenever it found a gap. It was the embodiment of wrath. He had believed the king had finally given up and gone quiet, but now he knew he had to be much more careful. Still, he decided to leave that aside for now. There were more urgent things to take care of. The wrath inside him then asked if he was finally going to get rid of it. Rayon replied yes. This was not a coincidence. Its appearance that night had been intentional, and he would end it once and for all. It had been a while since he last dealt with it, so he thought it was time to return to his current task. Meanwhile, outside Rayon's dormitory, one of the maids was observing. She said there was nothing suspicious to report, aside from the fact that Rayon sometimes talked to himself. Other than that, he had not done anything unusual. However, she now had something interesting to report. This maid from the annex building was named Duel. She had not expected Rayon to receive such an advanced cultivation technique with only a bronze tablet. In fact, she had been watching him the entire time. The flow of mana she sensed during his aura cultivation was extraordinary. That was definitely valuable information for the Central Martial Palace. Duel wrote everything in a letter, folded the paper, and paused to reflect. She was only doing this because it was an order. Still, she felt sorry. After all, Rayon was just a boy. She wondered how much longer she would have to keep spying on him. Duel placed the message in the water, allowing it to be carried to the palace. When she stood up to return to the annex, a cold blade touched her throat. A voice warned that if she opened her mouth, she would die. If she moved, she would die too. All Duel could do was look toward the lake. She wondered who carried such a strong killing intent. When she looked at the reflection in the water, she recognized the face. It was Rayon Sieghart. He said he had sensed her gaze from the very first day and asked if she had managed to gather any decent information to report. Duel was in shock. Did he know from the beginning? She believed she had left no trace of her presence, but now she realized he had simply pretended not to notice. He ordered her to open her mouth. Then, he forced something down her throat that made her vomit the letter. Rayon looked at the paper and remarked that he could not see its contents, thinking it might be some sort of coded message. He began analyzing all possible elements. It was not water, nor earth, fire, wind, or ordinary light. He concluded it could only be moonlight. Duel, stunned, wondered how he knew that. Rayon replied that the members Alice Sieghart and Karun Sieghart used that element. It was obvious to him that the order had come from Karun. Duel panicked. That was impossible. She had never revealed her face. She had trained for years to become an experienced spy. How could that boy know everything? That was when she noticed the pain spreading through her body. She realized he could even sense her thoughts. The only explanation was that what he had forced her to swallow was a worm of wrath. She remembered the moment she received the mission. She was to go to the annex and report everything about Rayon and Sylvia. If she succeeded, she would receive a reward she had long desired. She asked if he had really placed a worm of wrath inside her. Rayon then asked if she knew the worm and said that if she did, then she knew she was completely trapped now. Desperate, Duel tried to vomit the worm, but it was no use. That kind of curse allowed the caster not only to track the target's location, but also to read their thoughts. It was one of the worst curses in the world, even allowing the caster to kill the target from afar, inflicting unbearable pain. And she had no doubt that it truly was the Worm of Wrath. Rayon concluded that since she was sending the letter to Karen, she must be a spy from the main palace. The operation had likely started 7 months ago, before the judgment ceremony. She had thoroughly investigated not only him, him, but also Sylvia, Helen, and the other maids. Judiel had thought it would be an easy mission. Watching a boy like Rayon and a crippled woman like Sylvia seemed simple, but there was a monster living in the annex building. She decided she would change the content of the letter, reporting something far from the truth, but Round stopped her. He said it was no use. Even if she changed the information now, Karen would eventually notice her incompetence. Then, with a faint smile, he said that from now on, she would be a double agent. She should send reports with information that would inevitably be discovered, while hiding the ones that could not be obtained by normal means. At the same time, she was to gather information on Karen and deliver it to him. When Judiel agreed, Rayon said that next time he returned, he would expect useful information. Later, the King of Essence asked Rayon when he had summoned a Worm of Wrath, but Rayon replied that he would never use something so disgusting. In truth, he had only given Judiel a paralyzing poison that caused intense pain. It was just a trick. The king then wondered if Rayon had read the spy's mind without using any magic. Rayon answered that he had not read her mind. He said that certain information can be obtained by observing reactions, signals, and patterns. Others might not notice it, but he had experience. Even the King of Essence admitted that Rayon looked like a true demon. After that episode, Rayon threw himself back into training. He returned to the training field, but even with constant effort, he still had not managed to form an aura by the day of the meeting. Back at the training field with the other children, Rayon noticed that around 42 participants had passed, only about a quarter of the total. Instructor Rimmer was very strict with final results. That was when Renan approached him. She stayed silent for a moment, just staring at him. She recalled a conversation with her family. Her mother had said that since Round helped her train, she should show her gratitude. Renan said she had invited Round to eat her snacks, but had done nothing else because her father had told her never to speak to that boy. Still, her mother explained that when it comes to gratitude, gender does not matter. If someone helps, the least you can do is say thank you. It is a basic courtesy she should never forget. So Renan walked up to Rayon and simply thanked him. The King of Essence, curious, asked the reason for that sudden gesture, but Rayon said he had no idea. He could not know. Renan left feeling proud for having done her duty. Soon after, Dorian came running, completely exhausted, probably because he had been late again. As usual, Dorian was cheerful and a bit frantic. He asked how the young master was feeling. He said that even when he was only a provisional trainee, he thought he would die. Now that he was officially an apprentice, things had gotten even harder. He said he could not even understand how he was still alive. He continued to have nightmares during rest and could barely sleep properly. Still, he kept rambling non-stop, saying he was really happy that Rayon had placed first. He added that if Burn had taken first place, that would have been hard to accept, but Burn was right behind him at that moment. Ignoring Dorian, he walked straight past and stopped in front of Rayon. He took a deep breath and apologized. He admitted that the previous week he had shown a bad side of himself. However, he made it clear that he had not given up. No matter how much effort it took, he promised that one day he would surpass Rayon. He would not back down, he would not quit. Rayon was genuinely impressed. It was not every day that a 13-year-old admitted his failures with such honesty. Maybe it was a reflection of being raised in a great family. The King of Essence, on the other hand, mocked him. He said Burn still did not know his place even after getting beaten up. Rayon simply asked him to calm down. At that moment, someone arrived late. It was Rimmer himself. With his usual carefree manner, he explained that he had drunk a bit of wine the day before and had taken a longer nap than he should have. He asked if everyone had rested well and then congratulated those who had become official trainees. From that moment on, formal training would begin. He explained that the routine would be similar to before, but with some new training programs. The first one would be the aura cultivation method, but before they could begin, someone interrupted the training. A furious woman appeared, complaining that she had almost hurt herself because the door wasn't opening properly. Just seeing her left Dorian completely terrified. Rimmer, smiling, commented that she had finally arrived. He said that he wasn't her instructor, but that she was a repeating trainee from the previous group. Since they would now be training together, everyone should treat her as a senior. She was Martha Sieghart from the direct family line. Before any greetings, Martha asked who the head instructor was. She couldn't accept someone inferior to her in a higher position and wanted to verify that with an immediate duel. She then turned to Round and asked why they didn't just fight right there. Round, slightly frustrated, thought he always ended up meeting crazy people. Still, he introduced himself as Rayon Sieghart, the top cadet. Martha replied that he didn't look like the best, but said there was no need for conversation. She just wanted to fight. Burn then asked why she was being so disgraceful and ridiculous. Martha, offended, offended, asked how he dared to speak like that to a senior. She said that if he kept talking without thinking, she would kill him right there. Buren firmly stated that Rayon Sieghart had been acknowledged as the top cadet by both the instructor and the head of the house. He wanted to know why Martha was making such a scene. She replied that she remembered well the day Buren caused trouble too, and he admitted that it was exactly why he was saying those things now. He didn't want to witness another disgraceful spectacle, especially from someone as unpleasant as her. Rayon was surprised. Buren had really changed. Even Runan stepped in front of Rayon to protect him. Seeing that, Martha laughed. She said she was having a lot of fun with that group of friends trying to protect him. She commented that trash protects trash, and that she would continue being the villain if needed. She hated cowards who hid behind others. To her, they were worse than the arrogant ones. Right after, she lunged at Rayon, but he dodged easily. With a precise counterattack, he sent Martha flying. Buren was impressed, and Rimmer, like any good teacher, simply watched his students fight. Martha, furious over the humiliation, promised that after she was done with him, Rayon wouldn't even be able to walk anymore. But before she could do anything, Rimmer firmly grabbed her wrist. She hadn't even noticed him getting close. Rimmer explained that they were underestimating him too much. Even though he was retired, it was annoying to be treated like he wasn't there. He commented that Buren and Runan had already awakened their auras, but Rayon hadn't yet. That was why he thought it was unfair for her to want to fight now. He said he would allow the duel, but only after Rayon learned to use aura. Martha, displeased, replied that she was going to stop anyway. Rimmer then told everyone to return to their positions. The King of Essence, annoyed, asked what Rayon was doing. He wanted to know how Rayon could let such an insolent girl go unpunished. If it were him, he would have cut her from head to toe and frozen her for 10,000 years. Rayon said he had hit Martha, but the King of Essence replied that wasn't enough. According to him, Rayon needed to rip her head off. Rayon then thought it would be better to save that fight for a more opportune moment, when he needed something, and would use his position as top cadet to draw Martha in. He promised the King of Essence that next time he would show something incredible. Later, as the sun was almost setting, the cadets were still training. When break time finally came, Buren drank his water and thought that, as expected, it wasn't easy at all. For him, who had already mastered the advanced rising fist of 2 stars, it wasn't exactly difficult, but reaching the 3rd star required technique sequences at an even higher level. Even so, Rayon's progress made him feel pressured. In just 1 month, Rayon had learned the 7 forms fist, and might even start training swordsmanship in the meantime. He wasn't the only one feeling that. Martha was also exhausted from so much training, always thinking of Rayon. Although it was her first time learning fist techniques, he was progressing quickly. Unlike Buren and Ronan, Rayon hadn't learned anything before. His body was different due to the coldness in his mana channels, but he trained more diligently than anyone else. Martha did not want to fall behind. She remembered the phrase she always heard, "Your talent is beginning to bloom." Even though she had been adopted by House Sieghart, she had always stood out as a hunter. She had surpassed several members of the direct collateral families, who constantly claimed to be geniuses. She faced them and humiliated them until they surrendered. She had always been the best. That was the kind of person she believed herself to be. However, at that moment, she was afraid she would not be able to keep up with Rayon. Later, when she met with her butler, she was clearly in a bad mood. The butler, trying to calm her down, said she had nothing to fear. People were focused on Rayon because he had shown talent, but she would never be defeated by him. He believed that without a doubt. Martha asked why he was so sure, and the butler answered that it was because young Master Rayon had a critical weakness he would never be able to overcome. Meanwhile, even though it was already late at night, Rayon was still training with his sword. One of the cadets approached him with a question about a fencing stance. He wanted to know if he was doing it correctly. Another cadet also wanted to ask something but was too shy. Both commented that Rayon's swordsmanship was impressive. Martha, observing, admitted that he was really good and thought it wouldn't take long before she matched his technique. However, even with such brilliance, she believed that Rayon's low mana affinity was making him waste time. It was incomplete talent, a real shame. Still, she thought he could at least become an excellent fencing instructor. Rimmer remained silent as usual, and so did the other cadets. Martha noticed the general silence and thought no one knew what to say. No one expected that after 4 months, Rayon still hadn't managed to use mana. That was the explanation her butler had given her. Rayon had no talent for aura. Since that had happened before she was adopted, she didn't know much, but during the judgment ceremony, his mana affinity had been considered the worst of all. He was the only one in the fifth training ground who still had not awakened his soul. The cultivation technique he obtained from the bronze tablet was, at best, intermediate, nothing special. And even with that technique, he still hadn't awakened his aura. That only confirmed that his talent for mana was terrible, just as shown in that ceremony. Even if Rayon was skilled with a sword, without aura, he could never become a knight. Knowing that made Martha extremely satisfied. Although she was still angry for being counterattacked by him, she now felt he had never deserved the concern she had shown. As she turned around, she found Runan, who was clearly irritated. Runan simply told her to leave. Martha said that was fine, she was already leaving, and that she would go train with high-level techniques, something reserved only for direct bloodline members. Later, exhausted, Rayon decided to end his training. Even so, he thought about how all of it was incredibly fun. During the wars, he had only learned how to survive and kill. Assassination techniques were the only thing he had mastered. At that time, living meant killing. Now, he never imagined that learning martial arts by choice could be so enjoyable. The King of Essence was outraged and asked what kind of world Rayon was living in. He found it absurd that Rayon had done nothing when Martha provoked him, calling her a damned black-haired woman. Rayon replied that he hadn't even noticed what had happened because he was too focused. The King of Essence was furious with his indifference and said that if it had been him, he would have turned the girl into ice. Even so, Rayon explained that there was no advantage in fighting Martha at that moment. He knew he could defeat her without using aura or his cultivation technique. As he left, he found Runan holding a small box. She had brought something for him to eat. Rayon didn't know exactly what it was, but it was cold. He remembered from his past life as an assassin that eating something unfamiliar was a risk, but it didn't seem dangerous. The King of Essence tasted it and was amazed by the flavor. He had never tasted something so sweet, not even in the demon realm, and got excited asking for more. Runan asked if he liked it, and Rayon confirmed. He said it was delicious. She explained that it was called pearl ice cream, and then turned around and left. The King of Essence, still excited, kept repeating that he wanted more. When Runan was already far away, he commented that she was quite strange. Rayon started to wonder if Runan was worried about him. For a child like her, who loved sweets, giving up the last one was a hard decision. Rayon then decided that he would return the favor later, and the King of Essence immediately demanded that he repay it with more ice cream. When he returned home, Sylvia commented that it felt like a long time since she had seen her son, but Rayon replied that it had only been a week. Still, she quickly got flustered and wanted to feed him. Later, Duel was delivering the monthly report that would be sent to the Central Martial Palace. She asked if there were any new orders. Duel replied that there was nothing special. They had only requested a deeper investigation into the martial arts Rayon had been learning and the rapid progress he had been showing. However, since he still hadn't awakened his aura, the interest in his progress seemed to have declined. Rayon then asked what they were saying about his mother. Duel explained that interest in Lady Sylvia had also decreased. It was even possible that she would be ordered to leave. Rayon realized that this was not good, and that he needed to cherish her presence while he still could. Duel took the opportunity to ask if Rayon had perhaps avoided acquiring aura on purpose. Rayon simply returned the question, curious to know what she thought. Duel replied that the question had been presumptuous. Rayon thanked her for her work and dismissed her. The King of Essence commented that he really did seem like someone who had avoided learning on purpose. Rayon replied that knowing how to take advantage of the moment and people's moods was an important skill. Even so, the King of Essence insisted, asking why it was so hard for him to acquire aura and calling it pathetic. Rayon agreed. He said it was pathetic, but that was exactly why he would go back to training. The King of Essence protested, saying he needed rest. How could he train again? But Rayon replied that training might help awaken his aura. As he left, he found Rimmer relaxing in his garden. Confused, Rayon asked why he was there. Rimmer said he had come to give special lessons, as he would start teaching Rayon about his attributes. Later, the two of them were climbing a mountain. Rayon asked why climbing a mountain had anything to do with learning about attributes, but Rimmer, as always, told him to stop complaining and be patient. Despite being lazy, his teachings were usually good. As they climbed, Rayon kept trying to understand the purpose of that place. Rimmer, however, was thinking about something that still amazed him. The day he observed Rayon's cultivation technique through aura perception. Rayon's method was on a completely different level from the others. His aura burned like magic. Instead of extinguishing the cold in his mana circuits, it tried to merge it with fire. If Rayon managed to complete that technique, Rimmer wouldn't even know how to describe the result. When they reached a spot that seemed good enough, Rayon asked why they were in the middle of a forest. Suddenly, Rimmer released his spiritual pressure. He explained that he had longed to use a blade of wind to protect his lord, and that was the feeling he was experiencing now. The attribute he had chosen was wind. Even showing that to a 13-year-old, Rayon showed no fear. He truly was not an ordinary child. Rimmer said he had been able to feel the wind since birth because of his elven bloodline, but Rayon was different. Being human and with frozen mana circuits made things even harder for him. Wind could manifest in many forms: warm, cold, or sharp. Rimmer wished for a blade of wind capable of cutting through anything, and he had achieved it. Now, Rayon had to do the same. He needed to imagine the fire he wished to possess. Rayon commented that they were in the north and that unless they burned down the entire mountain, it would be impossible to find a proper fire. Rimmer replied that if they did that, they would both die, but he guaranteed that he knew the perfect place. They went to a hidden forge where Rimmer was friends with an old blacksmith. As soon as they arrived, the blacksmith commented that the fire had been acting strangely, as if the heat had died because of Rimmer. Rimmer replied that it wasn't a problem since he already expected his sword to fail again that day. He explained that that place was where one could feel the hottest and most passionate fire in the entire north, the furnace of the legendary blacksmith. The blacksmith then asked what they had come to do this time. Rimmer got annoyed and asked how he dared to speak like that to the grandson of the head of the family. But the blacksmith, unfazed, said he was just a retired old man, and that unless the head himself came in person, he didn't care. Rayon, in the meantime, started to feel something familiar. It was truly the kind of fire he knew. He had seen handmade campfires, fire magic used by mages, and countless flames throughout his past life. But the fire in that furnace was different. It was warm and welcoming. It was the kind of fire he needed to imagine, the fire he wanted to control. Suddenly, the blacksmith reduced the fire's intensity and introduced himself as Vulcan. He said that if they were expecting courtesy, they should look elsewhere. Rayon was surprised by the name. Vulcan, the legendary continental blacksmith, was known for forging Glenn Sieghart's weapon, the Heavenly Tremor. It had been 30 years since anyone had heard of him, and now he was there, isolated all this time. Rayon respectfully introduced himself, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Vulcan asked if Rimmer had told him who he was, and Rimmer said no. He had only explained that Vulcan was the former blacksmith of the Sieghart family, but Vulcan corrected him, saying he was an ex-blacksmith. Rimmer said that although he was retired, he had kept that fire burning for more than 10 years. He didn't forge anything anymore. He only maintained the fire, and believed that this was the only place where Rayon could truly feel real fire. So he asked Vulcan to let Rayon stay. Vulcan suggested that he go to the family blacksmith's workshop, but Rimmer explained that place drew too much attention. They couldn't let others see a cultivation technique that was still incomplete. Vulcan asked why not, and Rimmer revealed that Rayon was Sylvia's son. That caught Vulcan's attention, and Rayon politely asked to be allowed to simply feel the fire. That was all he wanted to do. Vulcan explained that he wasn't actually forging anything, just producing charcoal. It was golden charcoal, capable of generating a heat much stronger than white or black charcoal. That was what he had been doing for the last 10 years. He said Rayon could do as he wished, as long as he didn't interfere with his work. Rayon, happy, thanked him sincerely. Outside, Rimmer spoke with Vulcan and commented that he still had a soft heart. He hadn't expected the old man to agree so easily, and said he would bring him some liquor as thanks later. But Vulcan explained that wasn't the reason. The fire in the furnace reacted when Rayon arrived. It became more intense, and the charcoal was ruined by the sudden heat. Vulcan recognized that the power of fire lived in every inch of that boy. Maybe there was a chance that, with him, his old dream could come true. From then on, Rayon spent 7 months visiting Vulcan's furnace. During that time, he constantly reflected on the image of the fire he wanted to master. He finally understood. Although fire is known as the most feared and destructive attribute, once you gain control over it, everything changes. If you are skilled enough, fire can become the most stable and safest attribute. Additionally, Rayon was beginning to awaken the energy of the cultivation of the 10,000 flames, which he still had to master. He remembered Rimmer's words, saying he needed to imagine the fire he wanted to possess. So he thought of the fire needed to cut off Darius's head, and also the fire he would use to return Sylvia to the direct bloodline. These goals were intense, but he realized that if he were blinded by revenge, he wouldn't be able to see what was in front of him. That's why he decided he didn't want a violent fire, but rather a torch that would light his path, a fire that could become his sword, able to overcome any difficulty and never go out, rain or shine. That was the fire he chose. The energy of fire flowed through his body far more powerfully than usual. He could feel the heat of the furnace coursing through his entire body. body. He needed to concentrate, keep the fire within him, and feel it deeply. Maybe that was what they call ecstasy. Now he could clearly see the mental image of the fire he wanted to master. But at that very moment, the King of Essence interrupted, saying it was now his turn. He planned to attack Rayon at his most vulnerable moment when he was immersed in meditation. He intended to freeze him immediately. Rayon realized too late that he had let his guard down. It was the worst possible moment. He had completely forgotten about the King of Essence, who had remained silent for too long. It was clear that the being before him was a demon waiting for the perfect chance to kill him. Not just any demon, but one of the kings of the demon realm. Rayon felt like his body was splitting apart. Breathing became harder and harder. If he moved, he would die. If he stopped using the 10,000 flames technique, he would also die. The only way to survive was to keep concentrating his aura somehow. To live, he had to hold on to that thought, but his consciousness was fading. The King of Essence watched and commented, satisfied that the way Rayon fought for his life was moving. He said he could no longer resist his power. No matter how much Rayon struggled, it would be useless. Soon, body and soul would be his. Rayon began to wonder if all his efforts had been in vain. Maybe he wasn't so different from the old man who burned in the furnace every day. But the King of Essence was determined to fulfill his revenge. That was when Rayon remembered the furnace. In the end, the king had given him the answer he needed. It was all or nothing. If he stood still, he would die. So instead of absorbing the natural mana from the air heated by the furnace, Rayon decided to pull the mana directly from the furnace itself. The fire was hot, powerful, capable of devouring anything. Even so, Rayon pulled it into his body. The King of Essence was surprised and questioned what he was doing. Rayon thought that this was his last chance, like a desperate man. Meanwhile, Vulcan was trying to forge more golden charcoal, but was nearly burned by flames that suddenly shot up. He was so surprised that he noticed the furnace's temperature rising drastically. He had never seen such a powerful flame and wondered what was happening. Then he saw Rayon standing still, and even though he was surrounded by heat, he was trembling from the cold. Vulcan asked if he was okay and why he was trembling so much, but Rimmer appeared and stopped him from getting closer. He said the boy couldn't be touched. Vulcan protested, saying that if things continued like that, Rayon would die. But Rimmer insisted that there was nothing they could do. Even the slightest external interference could kill him. Vulcan understood and asked if that coldness was coming from inside the boy. Rimmer confirmed it. The slightest touch would ruin everything. Thinking to himself, Rimmer hoped Rayon wouldn't die because he was giving everything he had in one final attempt to live. The King of Essence ordered him to stop. He said there was no more hope, but Rayon remembered his past life, when he died without being able to do anything. He was tired of that. He had died in vain, without even being able to close his eyes. He wouldn't make the same mistake in this life. The furnace's temperature rose uncontrollably. Vulcan warned that it was about to explode. Unable to withstand the sudden heat, Rimmer, watching, noticed that all the mana from the furnace was gathering in a single point. He realized that Rayon was absorbing all that mana. After a powerful struggle against the King of Essence, Rayon finally managed to seize the fire mana. This caused a huge explosion inside the furnace. Rimmer, startled, asked if he was okay. As he approached, he saw Rayon standing with a golden aura surrounding him. The system then announced that he had learned the technique of 1,000 flames. He had reached 2 stars due to the extreme heat. He gained resistance to the fire attribute. 2 strands of the ice curse had melted. His low energy disappeared, and the melted ice coagulated, creating the trait of freezing aura. Rayon's freezing aura reached 2 stars due to the powerful ice of fury. He thought things had turned out much better than he expected. He was about to awaken and hadn't imagined he would gain so much from that situation. The system informed him that he had endured the Fury's trials, and as a reward, all his attributes had increased by 3 points. Rayon found it impressive. In just one moment, he had achieved something that would normally take years. The King of Essence, furious, said it was absurd and asked who the hell he was. Rayon's mind had always been on the verge of collapse, so how had he survived such a miserable situation? Rayon had already warned that the king's plans wouldn't work, but even so, he admitted he had nearly died during that attempt. Now he had to be careful. The only thing he was sure of was that no matter how close the King of Essence got, he was still an enemy and could never be allowed to discover his weaknesses or secrets. Vulcan approached and asked if he was alright, if he had managed to reach his aura. Rayon replied that he had, and thanked him and his furnace. He apologized for breaking the furnace, but Vulcan said it was no problem. The important thing was that he was alive. A furnace could be rebuilt, but something caught Vulcan's attention. 3 perfect bars of golden charcoal had formed there. At that moment, Vulcan remembered the past. Many people had mocked him, saying he should be content working with furnaces, wasting his life trying to create golden charcoal that didn't even exist. They said it was just a legend, but now, right before his eyes, that charcoal was there, perfect. Vulcan said Rayon wasn't the only lucky one that day. Golden charcoal was more powerful than white and more durable than black. Thanks to Rayon, he he had finally managed to forge it after decades of trying. Each time Rayon trained there, the furnace heat increased. His breathing attracted even more flames. The heat spread throughout the entire place. Even though he was just a blacksmith who had spent his life with a hammer in hand, Vulcan knew exactly what had happened. It was all possible thanks to Rayon, so he asked what the boy's life goal was. What kind of swordsman did he want to become? Rayon replied that he wanted to become a swordsman who never gives up, no matter the hardships or enemies he faced. Vulcan, surprised by such words from a child, said it was an admirable goal. He said that in 3 or 5 years, Rayon could have his sword. When he felt ready, he should look for him. He would keep the 3 golden charcoals for that special day. Rayon asked if he would really make a sword for him, since he had heard that Vulcan was retired. The blacksmith replied that sometimes people come out of retirement for a while, and he asked Rayon not to die before that day came. After they parted, Rimmer watched everything from afar. He thought about what could have happened, but in the end, Rayon had gained his aura. His talent for making others worry was truly remarkable. Rimmer commented to the patriarch that he had gone there every day, concerned about Rayon, and now he finally felt relieved. But Glenn, the patriarch, replied that he hadn't gone there out of concern. Rimmer thought maybe it was just the heat from the furnace. But even so, he was impressed by the purity of Rayon's aura. He had stabilized his aura, and his talent was unbelievable. Glenn added that it wasn't just talent. Rayon had turned hardships into advantages. Later, in the 5th training hall, Runan waited for Rayon's return. Everyone was saying he had disappeared for months and hadn't managed to get his aura. Some even said he might not be as strong as they thought. But Runan kept waiting for him. She really wanted to help him because her mother had taught her to always repay those who helped her. When Rayon finally returned, the first thing he saw was Runan rushing over. She gave him a small box with 3 pearl ice creams, saying it might brighten his day. Rayon asked if it was the same ice cream as before, because it was delicious. And Runan noticed the air around him felt stronger. In just a few months, he had become much more powerful. The King of Essence, surprised, commented that the flavor was still just as wonderful as the first time, and told Rayon to eat the other ice creams immediately. But Rayon refused. He said he would eat only one, because he knew she was sharing something she really liked. So he closed the box, thanked her, said it was delicious, and that one was enough. Runan asked if Rayon was feeling better. He said yes, that he was much better now. She was happy to hear that and walked off quickly, blushing and embarrassed. Rayon in turn thought she was a very mysterious child. Later on, Rimmer spoke to the cadets. He said that since the basic training in swordsmanship and techniques was complete, it was time for a new challenge. He admitted the previous training had been boring, so he had prepared something special for the next month. The upcoming stage would involve energy cores, and the duels between cadets would begin in 1 month. These duels would be used to evaluate and rank their performance and would directly affect their graduation status. Everyone needed to prepare during that time. However, Martha wanted to clarify something. She asked if those who were behind and still hadn't awakened their aura would also need to participate. It was clear she was referring to Rayon indirectly. Rimmer replied that he had heard this someone had already succeeded. Martha, surprised, asked when that had happened. The other cadets began murmuring, trying to figure out when Rayon had managed to awaken his aura. Martha then said she would finally have an opportunity. The long training had been tedious, and now she could settle an old score. She reminded Rayon that she once said there were no people weaker than her, and that she had waited long enough for him to realize how unfit he was for a position he didn't deserve. That's why she wanted to teach him a lesson. At that moment, Burin stepped in to stop her, saying she should let it go. It hadn't even been a full day since Rayon had awakened his aura, and she already wanted to challenge him. He accused Martha of having no honor, but Martha replied that Burin only cared about honor because he was raised being admired. To her, honor was something reserved for those who earned it. Even the less talented cadets had awakened their aura in just 1 month. Meanwhile, the best cadet took 6 months or even longer. The most advanced techniques usually took around 7 months. According to her, that just showed Rayon had no talent. She stated that everyone knew it since they had all witnessed the judgment ceremony together. She explained that a swordsman who couldn't awaken an aura would never be recognized, even if they had skill with the sword. Without aura, it was meaningless. So she suggested to Rimmer that this would be a good time to replace the top cadet during the duels. She said Rayon had held that position for too long without deserving it, and that it was time to put him in his place. She planned to make sure the duel's winner would become the new top cadet. Rayon calmly said it wasn't that simple. If Martha wanted to bet his position as top cadet, she would have to offer something of of equal value. Martha, surprised by his boldness, asked if he still didn't understand his situation. She said no one was on his side. But Rayon, smiling, asked if she was afraid. That made Martha burst into laughter like a madwoman, saying it would be amazing. She would tolerate that provocation just this once. She then presented the Orb of Calamity, a miraculous medicine she had received from her father. It was meant to strengthen both body and aura. She said that if she lost the duel, she would give it to Rayon. He then remembered what the King of Essence had told him. Wait for the perfect opportunity to defeat her. Now he finally had that chance. A month passed, and the day came when Martha intended to make Rayon pay. She remembered the shame of being struck for the first time by someone her age, and now wanted revenge. She believed it was pointless to fight him since it had only been a month since he awakened his aura. Meanwhile, she had been training for over 3 years. She thought it would be a waste to expect anything from someone without talent, but even so, she wanted to grow stronger because there was someone she needed to save. For her, that day would mark the end of Rayon Sieghart. At the training grounds, Rimmer explained to all the cadets that watching a battle was just as useful as participating in one. He told them to observe the fights carefully, think about how they would react in similar situations, and not to get nervous. They just needed to do their best. The first match would be between Buren Sieghart and Dorian, but Dorian was trembling. He said he was quitting. Rimmer replied that the fight hadn't even started yet. Still, Dorian complained that he wasn't feeling well, had slept poorly, and was showing signs of a cold. The King of Essence, irritated, said that if Dorian were his subordinate, he would have already taken his head off. Ron found the reaction predictable. Rimmer encouraged Dorian to at least give it a try. He said that even in defeat, he would certainly learn something. Dorian agreed, but was completely defeated. When he fell, he gave up. Rimmer told Buren that he needed to learn to control his emotions. If he had done that, he could have won in just 5 moves. Buren replied that Dorian's behavior irritated him too much. Rimmer asked why Dorian kept running, even though he knew how to fight, and if he had fought seriously, could have lasted much longer. Dorian only apologized, saying he was too scared and nervous. Next, the upcoming match was between Runan and Crank. When the fight started, Crank was the first to charge, but Runan barely had to move to counter his attack. She disarmed him easily as if it were nothing. When his sword flew out of his hand, Rimmer ordered the match to stop. He said Crank was still too nervous and needed to learn how to relax while holding a sword. He praised Runan's counterattack, but said she could have used more of her aura. The day continued with other duels until the most anticipated moment finally arrived, the last match between Rayon and Martha. Expectations were high, and people said Martha seemed especially irritated. On the battlefield, the two began exchanging frantic blows. Martha tried to apply constant pressure, but Rayon's counters and dodges prevented her from gaining control of the fight. He managed to force her to retreat, and she had to dodge a strike that could have hit her directly. Martha admitted she didn't expect him to stop her sword. She acknowledged his talent, but said it was only with the sword. According to her, someone like him, who barely had any aura, had no future. Then Martha summoned her brown-colored aura and came down with a powerful strike. Rayon blocked it with difficulty, but managed to hold on. Even so, she was surprised. She asked how long he could endure in that state. She believed aura relied far more on natural talent than swordsmanship, and someone like Rayon, with such little aura, could never defeat her. She warned him that if he kept going, he could end up with broken bones. But right after that, she was forced to block a powerful blow from him. Rayon replied that she talked too much about talent, something common in the family. Martha said she knew how much that must irritate him since he had no talent at all. That was why she wanted to show him what true talent looked like. But Rayon said he would show her something too. He wanted to prove that there was something more important than talent. Then he summoned his golden flames. Even Martha was impressed when she recognized it as the Thousand Flames technique. It was the first flame, and she realized it might be dangerous, understanding that it was not an ordinary flame. They were frighteningly beautiful flames, but she didn't let herself be intimidated. Determined to take the fight seriously, Martha activated her most powerful technique, the Supreme Meteor Point, concentrating all her aura into a single spot. Her aura darkened and became even more intense. Rayon thought it was impressive that she could use that technique at such a young age. He knew she intended to finish everything with one strike. Martha admitted he was truly strong, but guaranteed that he wouldn't be able to block that attack. Their swords clashed with all the power they had gathered, and the impact was so intense that the ground cracked. An explosion erupted around them, raising dust and wind. When everything settled, one of the blades was broken in half, and Martha was lying on the ground. The other cadets wondered if Rayon had really won. They were surprised by what he had done. Looking at her unconscious, Rayon noticed that even in that state, she had not let go of her sword. He thought that she had something even more valuable than talent or technique, an admirable mental strength. Later, Rimmer was reporting everything to the head of the family. He said Raon's victory over Martha had been complete, even though she had trained her aura for 4 years. It was unbelievable. Glenn, the patriarch, commented that the flames Rayon used were beautiful, as if they had come from a burning garden. But he also warned that strength cannot be measured only by appearance. Everyone in the family knew that. For that reason, he asked Rimmer to guide Rayon so that he would not become arrogant from the victory. Rimmer asked about Martha's condition. He said she was fine physically, but the real problem was the psychological shock. He hoped she would overcome it with time. Later, Rayon was planting a flower. The King of Essence mocked him, saying he was hurting the flower and should plant it properly before he froze it. Rayon told him to stop pretending since he couldn't do anything useful at the moment anyway. The King of Essence remarked that with such absurd elemental resistance, anyone else would have died already. Rayon then reflected on the night after his victory over Martha. The miraculous medicine he had received as a reward greatly increased his attributes. The Ring of Fire reached the 4th star, and as a result, his strength, agility, and energy increased significantly. His previously worn-out body recovered. His low sensitivity also vanished, and the frozen flower senses advanced to the 2nd star, meaning his senses were now 20% sharper. All of Rayon's efforts up until now had only been truly effective because of the medicine. Many things improved, but the most remarkable was his 4-star water resistance. Thanks to that, the King of Essence's attacks no longer posed a threat to him. Rayon went to the garden because it was his last day of rest. However, the King of Essence said he needed to dig a bit deeper, even if he didn't really know what he was doing. Rayon wondered if he truly had to deal with gardening lessons, but the King of Essence explained that he needed to use his hands carefully to avoid damaging the roots. Rayon grew curious, noticing how much the king seemed to know about gardening. The king then revealed that, back when he was in the demon realm, he filled his garden with ice flowers. The demons who saw it revere him to this day. Suddenly, Martha appeared in the garden with a serious expression and remained silent. Rayon noticed that she wasn't there to fight and asked why she had come. He thought she had already matured, but she was acting like a child, even though that wasn't the most important thing at the moment. Soon after, Martha said she wanted to fight him again. Rayon found it pathetic that she still hadn't accepted her defeat, but Martha replied that it wasn't about that. She simply didn't understand how she lost and wanted to figure it out. Rayon asked what he would get in return, explaining that it was common for the loser to bring a gift when challenging the winner again. Martha said that made no sense since it wasn't a paid match, but Rayon insisted that in his case, it was necessary. She realized he didn't seem willing to fight and asked what she should do then. Looking at the blooming garden, Martha thought of stepping on the flowers to provoke him, imagining that would anger him. She commented that he must really like those flowers, but Rayon replied that he didn't. In fact, he didn't even understand why people liked them so much. He was only tending the garden for his mother's sake. Hearing that, Martha gave up on the idea and said she was leaving. But at that moment, Sylvia appeared. She said she didn't know where Rayon was and asked who the girl was. She wanted to know if he had made another friend during training. Martha recognized Sylvia Sieghart, the woman who had abandoned her position in the family for a man and later returned to protect her son. She was someone who stepped on her pride to protect the one she loved. Sylvia remarked that, because of the black hair, it could only be Martha, and said it was a pleasure to meet her. Rayon, however, said she was not his friend, nor anyone important, and walked off saying he had other things to do. Sylvia cheerfully said she just wanted to talk with her son's friend. She mentioned hearing about their duel and asked if Martha was all right, showing concern. She also said she had heard that Denier had brought a very talented child, and in addition to that, she was beautiful. Sylvia said Martha was both pretty and gifted, a lucky combination. She then asked what brought her there. Embarrassed by the compliments, Martha said she had only come to talk a bit with Rayon, but was now leaving. Sylvia insisted, saying she should stay for dinner. She couldn't let her son's friend go hungry. Martha was so flustered that she couldn't even answer. Later, the three of them were at the table. Rayon sat across from Martha, eating the delicious meal prepared by Sylvia. He wondered why Martha was so quiet and acting that way. She seemed different. Sylvia then asked if Martha was a year older than Rayon, just to start a conversation. Martha confirmed she was 15. Sylvia then commented that neither of them seemed to have trouble with training. Martha replied that she was doing fine. Sylvia explained that, although the cooks were good, the meat there wasn't as high quality as that from the main residence, so it might be a bit tougher than usual. Even so, she recommended that Martha chew well to avoid indigestion. Hearing that, Martha remembered that her mother used to say the exact same thing. She thanked her for the meal, saying it was excellent. Later, as she was saying goodbye, Sylvia told her she was very happy with her visit. Meanwhile, Rayon asked the King of Essence what had just happened. He was confused, certain that Martha had come just to provoke him, but ended up staying for dinner. He wondered if she had eaten something spoiled or hit her head. The King of Essence replied that maybe both. As she left, Martha thought Rayon probably saw her as crazy, but Sylvia's eyes were very similar to her own mother's. She couldn't bring herself to reject that dinner. Sylvia's face, hair, and voice were different from her mother's, but at that moment, she felt like she was with her again. Since her mother had been kidnapped by the White Blood cult, Martha was adopted by Denier. She had decided that she would never lose until she found her mother again, and had held firmly to that promise until now. However, after losing to Rayon, she felt like everything might fall apart. The Ziegharts had adopted her because of her talent, but now, after a defeat, she might be cast aside. She thought her father had always been a calm person, but what if that had all been an act? Would she lose hope of finding her mother again? She felt she should never have lost. That was when her butler mentioned she had returned later than expected and handed her a letter left by Denier. Upon reading the letter, Martha saw that Denier congratulated her on her first defeat. He said that a defeat did not mean she was a loser and that she didn't need to worry about it. He encouraged her to reflect on the reason why she lost, because that reflection would help her grow. That was exactly why defeats were important. He mentioned he would love to be with her to comfort her, but his mission was taking longer than expected. He apologized for not being present yet and assured her that he was still searching for her mother and had not given up. Emotionally moved, Martha asked the butler to tell him that she would keep everything in her heart and that she was very grateful for everything he did. After that, she returned to her room and thought about her defeat. She realized she had lost in a pathetic way, not because she had let her guard down, but because she had simply been defeated. Now she needed to accept that defeat and move forward. She could no longer bring shame to her father. If she pretended nothing had happened, she would learn nothing and would feel ashamed to face him again. She decided to start over and leave her foolish past behind. After cutting her hair, Martha promised herself that she would become stronger. The next day at the training field, everyone was surprised. Something was different about Martha, who was walking straight toward Rayon as she always did. She said she wouldn't apologize for her previous behavior, but she would keep her promise. The promise that the loser must obey the winner. That was all she had to say. Then she turned and walked away. Rayon was impressed by the unexpected attitude. He hadn't expected that much obedience from her, even with the promise. He realized something about Martha had changed in a short amount of time. It was an admirable quality, especially for someone so young. However, even if she was being respectful toward Rayon, she still wasn't very friendly with others. Right after that, she kicked Dorian to make him move out of the way. Rayon figured that this change only applied to him. Then the new year began. Even if only on a small scale, many things had changed. Despite everyone's expectations, Martha continued to obey Rayon after the new year. Byrne became calmer and more competent as the leader of the new recruits. Runan's swordsmanship improved a lot, even though her expression remained blank. As for Rayon, training with his life at risk became a daily routine. Everyone was amazed, as he had only learned the basics of the footwork technique, yet managed to master it in just one day. People said it was impossible. Even for someone talented, that was on another level. Later, Rimmer, speaking to the head of the family, said it was unbelievable. He was certain of what he was saying. The boy had mastered the technique using only a mental image. Rimmer declared that Rayon was a true monster. He even trained with his eyes closed to master the footwork. The family had then asked sarcastically if Rimmer was now Rayon's personal butler, since every time they met, he only talked about the boy. Rimmer was curious too, but he noticed that the main house's servants seemed busier than usual. He asked if something was being prepared, and Glenn explained that the delegation from the Kingdom of Orwyn would arrive in a few days. The Kingdom of Orwyn was one of the 6 kingdoms located at the center of the continent, and one of the few nations that maintained a friendly relationship with the Sieghart family, which usually remained distant from other alliances. This kingdom was known for valuing knights, swords, and martial arts. When Rimmer asked who the official representative would be, Glenn said they had announced it would be the 3rd prince, but it was likely that the real representative would be Duke Tartan. Rimmer commented that the 3rd prince of Orwyn was probably still young, maybe the same age as Rayon or Burin, but he had never paid much attention to the boy. Even so, he was instructed to ensure the students were well prepared, as the kingdom's trainee knights would accompany the prince. They wanted to observe how the young swordsmen of the Sieghart family trained, and for that reason, they needed to show something unforgettable. Rimmer found the idea interesting. The 3rd prince, accompanied by trainee knights, seemed like a valuable opportunity. Glenn commented that Rimmer was probably already planning something, and later Rimmer told the cadets that they would be dueling against the knights from the Kingdom of Orwyn. He said they had probably all heard the news about the prince's arrival, and that he himself would like to face him in a duel. He warned that no one should feel frustrated about it. A swordsman always needed to be ready to draw his sword, even right after waking up. Some students commented that they had heard the prince would visit other training grounds, not just theirs. Rimmer, recalling a previous conversation, said he had already spoken with His Highness, and learned that he had visited the 6th training ground before. Judging by his his expression, it seemed the place hadn't impressed him. That was why Rimmer had invited him to visit the 5th training ground, promising he wouldn't regret it. He assured them he would show something memorable. Rimmer said the cadets had every right to be surprised, since it was a sudden announcement. But before jumping to conclusions, they should get to know the visitors. The knights in training and the 3rd prince were the pride of the kingdom of Orwyn. The prince then introduced himself as Greer of Orwyn, and his presence was striking. Rayon immediately noticed that, despite his young age, he had a much more imposing presence than the other knights. Rimmer asked if Rayon was hesitant to duel the prince, but Rayon thought it was a great opportunity to test the combination with the footwork technique he had been practicing. He said he wasn't nervous, and that he also wanted to fight. With that, Rimmer took it as a general approval and declared that the duels would begin. 20 cadets would be chosen, with Rayon being the 20th. He called everyone together and let Rayon, as the top cadet, decide who would face whom. However, before anything else, Rimmer revealed an important detail. He had bet his entire monthly salary on the cadets' victory, so they had to win, or he'd kill them himself, jokingly, but making it clear he expected full dedication. Rayon stood in front of the other 19 cadets and said the first step was to analyze the opponents. He asked everyone to observe the hands of the knights from the kingdom of Orwyn, who, despite their armor and confident appearance, were trembling. They were also young, the same age as the Sieghart cadets, and just as nervous. Even so, their training was on the same level as the other 6 kingdoms, or even the 5 great demons. Rayon encouraged them, saying that all the sweat and blood shed up to that point would be rewarded. It was time to show what the Siegharts were made of. He then decided that the first fight would be the most important, as it could raise morale for the others. He chose someone strong to start, Martha. Rayon asked if she could handle it, and Martha answered confidently, saying she could. The ones ready to fight gathered in the center. At that moment, the cadets noticed the size of the first opponent. They asked if he was really the same age as them, since he was much larger. The knight introduced himself as Tars, from the vanguard of the kingdom of Orwyn. Even though he was young, his body was in excellent physical condition. He expected to have a good duel. The 3rd prince was watching everything closely and seemed quite impressed. He believed that Martha was overwhelming her opponent with crushing strength. He thought the swordsmen from the 2nd training ground were truly powerful, perhaps even comparable to royal knights. That was expected from someone of the Sieghart family. However, he also noticed that the 6th training ground was disappointing. Although well trained, they seemed weaker than even the knights of the house. Still, it looked like the best talents had been there from the beginning. Meanwhile, Tartan was speaking with Rimmer. He said he had visited him and invited him to the 5th training ground. He wanted to understand the purpose behind that. Rimmer explained it was a good opportunity for safe duels among talented youths, which could be more effective for their growth. Tartan replied that it was hard to believe someone once known as the Blade of Light would now think that way. Rimmer then suggested he could return to his former personality and turn it all into a bet. Tartan agreed and asked what the conditions would be. Rimmer explained the winner would be rewarded after 20 rounds. Even so, Tartan suggested it would be more interesting to bet while watching the knights in training, since they had been raised as an elite. He asked if Rimmer believed he had a chance to win. Rimmer replied that he had a lot of faith in himself, but also trusted his students. Martha, using very powerful blows, drove her opponent into the ground. She broke his sword in half, and using the hilt of her own sword, threw Tars far away. That's how she won the duel. Runan thought it was all a bit absurd, as she expected Martha to lose efficiency after her previous defeat. However, Martha had become even stronger and faster. Martha, in turn, was frustrated with Tars, and commented that it was pathetic he hadn't fought seriously from the beginning. Rayon was watching everything, and found it interesting. The spirit of Redcrest found no enjoyment in it, calling it a battle between ants, and labeling it boring. Rayon replied that even ants grow over time. The King of Science, who came from the demon realm, remarked that he made young demons fight each other, and they were all better than those cadets. Before he could continue, Rayon punched him and said it was interesting to him. The duels continued until the 18th match between Runan and Adelia. Adelia revealed that she didn't like Runan's empty eyes and activated her flaming aura. In response, Runan used her freezing aura, as she didn't like fire. When their swords clashed, they seemed evenly matched. The arena was covered in smoke, and Runan used the distraction to move behind. She thought she had struck Adelia, but it was just an illusion created by the mist. Soon after, Runan appeared behind her real opponent and subdued her with her sword, winning the duel in a matter of seconds. After the victory, she simply ignored Adelia and went to sit next to Rayon, asking if he had watched her fight. Rayon praised her performance, saying she had adapted well to the movement technique. Rimmer announced that there had been 9 victories and 9 defeats, which made everything more interesting. Then the 19th duel began between Burin and Saren. Saren introduced himself as a knight in training, while Burin identified as a cadet. Rayon noticed that Saren was truly strong, perhaps the strongest of all, except for the third prince himself. When the duel began, the two seemed balanced in strength. Burin felt that Saren's strength was close to Dorian's, and knew that if he wasn't careful, he could lose in seconds. On the other side, Saren was probably thinking the same. In the next moment, their blades clashed and both broke. The audience commented that, with both swords destroyed, it was clearly a draw. Rimmer confirmed that the 19th duel had ended without a winner. Rayon praised Burin, saying he had done well, since his opponent was truly strong. Burin, however, said that didn't matter. He believed he could have won, and that he was fighting for the Sieghart name. Rayon reassured him, saying he would win the final duel himself and protect the family's honor. The last match would be between Rayon and the student of the third prince. Upon seeing him, Greer commented that he could barely sense anything from that boy, and asked if he was from the direct bloodline. When he found out he wasn't, he thought he'd rather face any of the 3 previous opponents. He then made a suggestion to the instructor, asking if he could duel the 2 girls who had just fought, claiming they might still have energy for another match. Rimmer answered that yes, the extra duel could happen, but only if Greer won the current match. Greer didn't care. He thought it would be quick and easy, and that he wouldn't even need to use aura against that boy. He wanted to save his strength. However, Tartan was already starting to sweat. He wondered what kind of monster that boy was. For Rimmer, Rayon was almost unnoticeable due to his weak presence. Even so, he commented that the Duke seemed to have a good eye for recognizing that. He suggested the Duke should warn the third prince, since he clearly hadn't noticed anything. It seemed like he didn't believe in Rayon's abilities. One day, the prince would become the future of the kingdom of Orwyn, but until now, he had never experienced defeat. Tartan believed this environment was ideal for him to learn an important lesson safely. Even so, he acknowledged that Greer wasn't weak. Even if Rayon was a genius, winning wouldn't be simple. Rimmer, on the other hand, didn't think the same. He asked Tartan if he wanted to make another bet. Tartan joked that he was addicted to it. Rimmer replied that this one was simple. If Rayon defeated the prince within 5 strikes, he would win a high-quality craft beer. Right at the start of the duel, Rayon used his flame aura. With a single strike that completely broke through Greer's defense, he hit him in the abdomen and ended the fight. Rimmer, watching, commented that it looked like it was already over. Not even 5 strikes were needed. Greer, on the ground, reflected on what had happened. He realized he had underestimated Rayon. Now he understood why he was the last to fight. He was, in fact, the strongest. Tartan, observing, questioned whether that boy was truly just a student. His footwork and swordsmanship were nearly complete. Rimmer explained that's why he had bet on his victory and said he would now reserve an expensive spot to enjoy his drink. But Greer did not accept the end. He said it was not over yet. He claimed he needed to show his true abilities and that he would have won if he had used everything from the beginning. Martha, watching from afar, mocked him, saying he was acting like a little dog barking after losing. She asked how someone who was supposed to be a prince couldn't acknowledge his own defeat. She also said he was just like someone she knew. Despite that, she stated she was being kind for now, and told him to leave the arena since he had lost. Another knight approached, and warned Martha to be careful with her words, reminding her that he was the prince. But Martha replied that she was also royalty, from the direct bloodline, and questioned why they had to be so formal. Rimmer interrupted the discussion, and said that was enough. Everyone now wanted to hear Rayon's opinion, since the final decision was his. Rayon replied that there had been a bet tied to the battle, and since the duels were already over, there was no reason to keep fighting. However, the prince himself admitted defeat. He said he had misjudged his opponent and completely underestimated him. Ashamed of his attitude, he bowed and humbly asked for one more chance. He wanted to fight Rayon again. Rayon had not expected that request. He had thought the prince was just arrogant, but was surprised to see him acknowledging his mistakes and even lowering his sword. In the end, Rayon agreed to fight one more time. Both prepared in the arena. Greer was determined to give it his all. He admitted he had been arrogant and hadn't realized how skilled Rayon was. Now he would unleash all his power. When he released his aura, everyone around was amazed by its intensity. The Duke, watching, asked if that was the technique he intended to use. Greer replied that there was no time to hold back anymore. He would fight with everything. Meanwhile, the King of Science complained, saying Greer was a fool. He had no idea that Rayon was also hiding his true power. He commented that Greer might have more aura, but Rayon's was far stronger. Curious, he then asked what the new bet would be. The conditions were simple. If Rayon defeated the prince, he would gain 4 points in all his attributes. If he lost, his rage would increase by 10 points. But Rayon was already ready. Greer launched the first attack with great speed. Their swords and auras clashed violently, creating an explosion of energy. Greer was far more aggressive now, but Rayon was able to block his strikes. Even with Greer going all out, Rayon didn't retreat. In fact, he didn't even seem like a genius. He looked like a monster. That was exactly why Greer was using everything he had. Rayon analyzed the movements and recognized that the technique Greer was using was probably a secret passed down only to the successors of the Kingdom of Orwin. The energy it released confirmed that. He concluded that the prince would use all his strength on the next strike, so Rayon prepared too, channeling his flames. Greer announced he would attack with everything he had, but Rayon had already memorized all the sword styles used by the prince. Then he activated his own technique, the 100 Flames, starting with the first flame, Cycle of Flames. The golden flames that appeared left Greer impressed. Even so, he still had one last technique. The two then clashed with their most powerful strikes. The energy released by the clash could be felt from afar. The exchange of blows was intense, fast, and without a clear winner. The battle was fierce. Even so, Greer started to overwhelm Rayon's aura. Greer still seemed to have the upper hand, but Rayon's strike was so powerful that it broke the prince's sword blade. At the same time, his aura also shattered. He had not known that Rayon could reflect energy like that, and because of it, he was defeated by the final blow of the first flame. The winner of the duel, once again, was Rayon Sieghart. Greer admitted that he was stronger and faster physically, but he realized that Rayon was far more strategic. He had used a footwork technique to counter his aura and had outsmarted him. Impressed, Greer remarked that the world was truly vast and thanked Rayon for everything he had learned from the duel, sincerely admitting defeat. Rayon replied that he had also learned a lot and that it had been an excellent fight. Curious, Greer asked Rayon's age. Rayon replied that he had turned 14 that year. Surprised, the prince admitted he had lost to someone younger than him in every way. Then he handed Rayon a gift, a plaque as proof that the third prince of the Kingdom of Orwin, Greer, owed him a favor, no matter what it was. Rayon, surprised, asked why he would give something so valuable. Greer answered that, even though he had lost, Rayon had opened a new path for him. He felt as if he had been enlightened by that defeat. He said it was a blessing to have fought someone like Rayon Sieghart. He was sure they would meet again, and hoped Rayon would keep walking his own path. Greer said it would be fun trying to catch up to him. Smiling, he admitted to Rimmer that he had lost the bet. Then he told the Duke they needed to return, as he would take immediate action. As he stepped down from the platform, Rayon reflected. In his past life, he considered it a blessing just to complete a mission, even without receiving anything in return. Now he was being rewarded for simple things. It was a strange feeling, but this new life kept surprising him in many ways. Later, Greer had a conversation with the head of the Sieghart family, Glenn. He said he had learned an important lesson from that duel. He mentioned that he used to think he was the best, but Rayon had made him reflect as if he were a veteran swordsman. He had faced many duels across the 6 kingdoms, but it was the first time he had met someone like Rayon. Even though he was younger, Rayon had been the one to teach him a valuable lesson. That's why Greer declared he would return in the future, because now he wanted to train both the body and the mindset he saw in Rayon. Glenn replied that Greer should thank the king on his behalf for the letter he had sent. After that, the group left for the Kingdom of Orwin. During the trip, Tartan started a conversation with Greer. He mentioned that Greer had revealed his secret skills, even using a sword technique passed down only to royal heirs, and that by doing so against Rayon, he had gone too far. He said it was important to keep certain powers secret. Greer admitted he knew that, but acknowledged that he had gotten too excited. Tartan also criticized him for giving the plaque to Rayon, but Greer defended his decision. He said that Rayon Sieghart showed goodwill throughout the duel. Even after being underestimated, he remained respectful until the end. That's why he felt it was right to respond in kind. Besides, Rayon had also used a technique that could be considered secret. The plaque to him was an investment. That kind of skill, personality, and mindset would make Rayon a great warrior in the future. He was sure Rayon would become an important figure and represent his family with pride. He also said that it would be extremely useful to have someone like him by his side one day. Tartan commented that Greer was thinking too far ahead. Greer replied that, having grown up in the royal family, he had always learned to think long-term, but that didn't mean he was worthy of becoming king. Still, he was curious to see how much Rayon would improve and how strong he would be the next time they met. Back at the Sieghart mansion, Glenn's butler commented that he seemed happy to see his grandson recognized by a prince from another kingdom. After all, it had been a long time since he had seen Glenn smile like that. Glenn, surprised, asked if he had really smiled. The butler confirmed confidently, saying he had been smiling since the moment the prince mentioned the young master's name. Glenn said that Lowen must be getting old, as that was the only explanation for such a mistake, though he wasn't smiling when he said it. Still, Still, Lowen showed concern about what Duke Tartan had said earlier and asked what they intended to do about it. The Duke had mentioned that in addition to the prince's letter, he also brought a message from the King of Orwyn and from Lacrosse Alberton. They reported that the Five Shadows had begun moving again. Later, Rimmer congratulated everyone for the duels against the Kingdom of Owen. With everyone gathered, he announced that special training would begin the following week, which left many startled. When Dorian asked what kind of training it would be, Rimmer explained that it wouldn't be training exactly, but a real battle. He said everyone should be prepared to see blood. It was explained that, to the south of Zieghart territory, lived a group of bandits known as the Snow Tiger Claw. They were partially allied with both the Northern and Southern alliances and made a profit by charging tolls from those crossing the mountains. Lately, however, they had been acting more violently, killing people and robbing merchants. Initially, the cadets' mission was to eliminate those bandits, but that changed when Rimmer revealed they had ambushed a village in the south, killed all the inhabitants, burned the place, and fled. This left everyone terrified. Now the mission was to locate the bandits first and only then eliminate them. They were dangerous bandits, all aura users, and the departure would be in the afternoon of the next day. Later that same day, Runan was training her skills. She wanted to improve her stance before the mission, but it still wasn't how she wanted it. She thought Rayon's technique was flexible and smooth, but she couldn't understand what she was doing wrong. She imagined Rayon was probably still training and considered asking him, but gave up the idea. She preferred to keep trying on her own. After a lot of training, she felt weaker than before, even though her movements were smoother. She figured that was enough for the day. She thought about going to where Rayon was to talk to him and remembered her mother's words, who had promised to buy ice cream and asked her to come home early over the weekend. So she decided she would head home early and talk to Rayon the next day, bringing him some ice cream. On the way, Runan realized she was being followed. Frightened, she turned and saw Sirius Lyon, her brother. He asked why she looked so unhappy to see him, saying it was disappointing to be greeted that way by one's own brother. He commented that the training with Rimmer really seemed effective, as she had grown stronger than he expected, and said he was proud. But he questioned whether she really intended to take part in wars and duels, risking her life. Scared, Runan ran off. Syria asked if she had already forgotten everything he had taught her, even though so little time had passed. He said he would remind her once more. He asked if her pet squirrel's name was Ruby, and since she didn't respond, he showed that he was holding a squirrel. Then he said she should remember exactly how Ruby had died and what happened when she didn't listen to him. When Runan tried to stop him, Syria killed the small, helpless animal, repeating the trauma from the past. The girl, in shock, screamed. It was a painful memory that haunted her. Syria stated that Runan belonged to him until the time came, and that until then she was not allowed to do anything difficult or dangerous. All she needed to do was stay alive. At that moment, a burst of energy exploded beside Syria. Rayon appeared, demanding to know who he was. Syria replied ironically, saying Rayon should introduce himself first. Rayon responded firmly, saying he didn't expect such behavior from someone who blocked a girl's way. He implied Syria was a thief, but Syria answered that while he might look like one, he was no robber. He was merely Runan's older brother, though it was obvious she wasn't comfortable with his presence. Rayon noticed that Runan looked terrified and asked if he was really her brother. Syria explained that he was just happy to see her after so long and had gone too far with a joke. When Rayon mentioned the crushed squirrel, Syria said that wasn't real. He showed that there was nothing in his hands, suggesting it was just a toy. However, Rayon realized that he had completely burned the squirrel's body with aura to cover it up. Syria then said he wouldn't be back anytime soon, as he was on a long-term mission. He claimed he only stopped by to drop off a snack and advised Runan to get along with her new friend. He apologized for the aggressive joke and left. Rayon watched the man go. Unfortunately, he knew who he was. Sirius Lyon was the genius swordsman of the Slyon family and one of the 12 monsters of the next generation, those destined to become gods of the continent. He was known as the Azure Sword. Even before Rayon's rebirth, he had heard that name. Now, seeing him for the first time in person, he was sure. Syria was a psychopath pretending to be a benevolent hero. His presence was suffocating, exuding a revolting stench, as strong as the one Rayon felt in the presence of Darius. Rayon helped Runan stand up and said he would accompany her home. When she finally reached her carriage, Rayon advised her to go to bed early, as they would leave at dawn. Even afterward, already inside the carriage, and even after arriving home, Runan remained with the same expression. She stayed in the same position the whole time and didn't even touch the ice cream she had received. While remembering what had happened, Runan thought that he had returned. Nothing about him had changed. She recalled the day Ruby scratched her hand and how Rayon Rayon had said it was fine, that the animal was just sensitive because of her baby. But Syria had said that Ruby belonged to her, and that no one could touch her. He had also threatened that from that moment on, she shouldn't get hurt anymore, and that if she told their parents anything, he would kill them too. He said he didn't need a family and would destroy everything if necessary. If Runan spoke up, someone would get hurt. That's why she chose to live in silence, thinking that as long as she kept her mouth shut, everything would be fine. She thought she was just a lonely person suffering, but in time she realized she wasn't the only one. Everything began to change when she met Rayon Sieghart. She started to understand what kind of person he was, how hard he worked, and the difficult times he had faced. He was a boy who changed how others saw him through sheer effort and determination. Because of that, Runan began to believe that she could change too. She tried to change, even though she thought she might never be completely free. In the end, she believed it was fine, as long as she could endure. South of the Sieghart estate, in the village of Zartan, Rimmer announced that they would rest there that night. They had traveled in a hurry through the dimensional gates and everyone was exhausted, so they needed a good rest. An elder from the village appeared and said it had been a long time since Sieghart swordsmen had passed through there, then guided them to their lodging. Later, while resting, Raon thanked the King of Essence, acknowledging that if it weren't for his tip the day before, he wouldn't have noticed that the man was hiding his energy. The spirit replied that the man had a vulgar aura, referring to Runan's brother. Raon thought that Syria had said he was on a long-term mission, so he probably wouldn't return anytime soon, which meant Runan could remain safe for a while. The King of Essence then suggested that Rayon hand over Syria's body to him and promised to kill him. He said he repaid kindness twice over and enmity tenfold. He also said that Runan had shown him some great ice cream, and for that, she deserved revenge. Raon found it funny and replied that even if he was serious, the answer would still be no. He knew that just killing that man wouldn't erase the trauma Runan carried. In truth, in all his lives, past and present, Runan was the first person to treat Raon with kindness, and if anything happened to her, he would hunt Syria down and kill him personally. 2 days after leaving the Sieghart estate, the group arrived at the place where the Snow Tiger Claw had passed. The village was completely destroyed and the bodies of the people burned. Even Burin, normally calm, was visibly shaken by the scene. Raon thought it was horrifying, with throats cut before being burned, a cruel massacre. Martha, on the other hand, showed no reaction upon seeing the corpses, as if she had witnessed scenes like that many times before. Worried, Raon searched for Runan and found her in shock, staring at one of the bodies. Rimmer explained that the terrible scene had been caused by the bandits of the Snow Tiger Claw, and that everyone should engrave that sight into their minds, never forgetting it. He warned them to always be ready. Rimmer presented a special whistle, saying that it did not emit an audible sound even when blown, and only those trained would recognize its signal. If something dangerous happened, they should use it, and the instructors would intervene immediately, as their swords were merciless. Still, he recommended that before using the whistle, everyone should try to face the enemies on their own without hesitation and make every effort in battle. If they had a chance, they should decapitate their opponents. Then the cadets had to split into groups, led by the most capable among them. Since Rayon was the strongest, he organized the formations. By his side, he called Runan, who was still shaken by memories of Syria. She recalled how he had warned her not to do anything dangerous, saying she only needed to stay alive until the day he called for her. If anyone hurt her, he promised to kill them all. While forming his strategy, Rayon analyzed the terrain around them. He observed the peak of Mount Ruthin and concluded that the elevated location would allow a clear view of the region below. It would be easier to escape or hide if things turned bad. It looked like the perfect hideout, but precisely because of that, it was unlikely the bandits were there. It would be too obvious to choose the most visible spot, especially knowing they would be pursued. They had surely assumed their pursuers would suspect such a place. That meant the hill was their only option. Although it seemed completely visible from the outside, Rayon suspected there could be a hidden area inside. So he called Runan and suggested they check the hill, leaving the rest of the forest to the other teams. At that moment, Rayon noticed that Runan was unmotivated. The King of Essence remarked that it was obvious Rayon was worried about her and wondered why he didn't say anything. But Rayon felt he didn't know what to say. This was a family matter, something he didn't fully understand. He thought that since he didn't even comprehend her feelings toward her own mother, he couldn't offer advice about this. Still, he knew what Syria had done to Runan, and perhaps in the future, when he was stronger, he could fix that problem. Descending the hill, Rayon confirmed his suspicions. There was a hidden forest there, invisible from the outside. He noticed that human footprints had been carefully concealed, enough so that no one had detected them until now. But this kind of trick only worked on novices. For someone like him, who could detect subtle traces, it was useless. Becoming the best assassin wasn't just about killing targets. One had to master tracking tracking, scouting, and information gathering, fooling a pursuer like him was nearly impossible. Rayon warned Runan that he believed the snow tiger hideout was nearby. He asked her to stay alert and follow him in silence, breathing lightly and avoiding any noise. Along the way, they encountered some bear traps. He thought it was expected. Nothing special, just traps placed at the entrance, relying on the idea that no one would dare come this far. They clearly underestimated their pursuers. Soon they found the snow tiger bandits. Rayon saw a child, likely a hostage. The bandits guarding the hideout had strong bodies, but he sensed no aura coming from them. They were probably low-level warriors. However, there was a giant man lying near the hostage, someone who seemed skilled enough to live by the sword. The rest of the bandits were probably inside the hideout, resting. There was no way they would leave their only hostage at such a simple outpost unless they were confident. Rayon considered using the whistle to call for reinforcements and then attack with the main force, but seeing the condition of the child, he realized the boy might freeze to death before help arrived. The bandits had not yet noticed their presence. The best option was to act quickly, save the hostage before it was too late, and silently eliminate the enemies. Runan was visibly nervous. Rayon asked her to look at him, assuring her that they could save the boy. He explained that he would need her help. As soon as he gave the signal, she should block the sound. He would take care of the rest. Runan, though full of doubt, decided to try. Later, the bandits were yawning, bored, and complaining about the weather. Suddenly, Runan appeared before them. She used her aura to block all sound waves. The bandits realized they could not hear their own voices and wondered what an aura user was doing in that place. Rayon seized the opportunity. Before facing the giant, he would eliminate the first two enemies. With a simple and precise cut, he decapitated them both. But the sight of the blood triggered Runan's trauma, reminding her of death, and she froze in fear. Her barrier fell. Rayon realized it was the result of relived trauma. If they didn't act quickly, they would be discovered. When the third bandit charged at Runan, still in shock, Rayon knocked him to the ground. He threatened the man, saying if he shouted, he would be killed on the spot. Now he just needed to answer questions. With each refusal, Rayon would break a bone. Meanwhile, Runan was clearly shaken. Even so, she managed to raise a new mana barrier, trembling in fear. Thanks to her, they survived. Despite the panic, she did well. Rayon then asked the bandit if he was part of the Snow Tigers, and he confirmed it. He said there were 39 bandits total, scattered through the forest. Rayon asked if there were more hostages, and the man said yes. Besides the child, there was another person trapped inside the hideout. The rescued child revealed that the other hostage was his sister and begged for her rescue. Runan then replied firmly, saying they would save her, and he didn't need to worry. Rayon said that Runan should not make promises so hastily, but she insisted, affirming that they would rescue the boy's sister. Rayon explained that it was possible to defeat the bandits, but that if they wanted to safely rescue the hostages, the best course was to call for reinforcements. There were 39 enemies in total, including the leader of the Snow Tigers, and that made the situation much more dangerous. Runan asked if she should use the whistle, and Rayon confirmed that it was the right time. Even blowing the whistle with force, Rayon heard absolutely nothing. However, the bandits did hear it. They recognized that it was a silent alarm. Rayon wondered if they had ears trained enough to detect it, since even he, with his heightened sensitivity, had not been able to hear a sound. To try to control the situation, Rayon grabbed one of the bandits as a hostage while Runan held onto the boy. One of the older bandits asked how someone so young had managed to get there and cause so much damage. He also wanted to know who Rayon had called with that whistle. Rayon replied that it was none of their business and proposed a trade. He would hand over the captured bandit in exchange for the child. The old man scoffed at the offer, saying that the man had no value to him, unlike the child. He stated that if Rayon did not want to see the boy die, he should lower his sword. Understanding the threat, Rayon told Runan to turn around and wait for his signal. Then he slit the throat of the bandit he held, and taking advantage of the distraction, killed the one behind the child. He asked Runan to create a snowstorm immediately. Using her aura, she covered the entire area in a freezing mist. Rayon passed through the mist unnoticed, grabbed the child, and ran to a safe location. By the time the bandits realized he had escaped with the hostage, it was too late. They shouted that they would hunt him down and kill him. Later, Rayon had hidden the two children safely and told Runan that they had fainted, likely from the cold. Escaping with them in that condition was risky, and there were still many bandits nearby. Even so, it was possible to defeat them all. He asked Runan to protect the children there. It was then that Runan noticed Raon's arm was bleeding. He said he was fine and would get rid of the bandits as quickly as possible before returning. Crying, Runan tried to stop him. She said it was dangerous to fight while injured, that the instructors would soon arrive, and all he had to do was wait. Rayon crouched down to speak to her. He said the battlefield was real, even for young trainees and swordsmen like them. The scariest thing was not fighting while hurt, but being paralyzed by fear, unable to act. Those bandits had committed terrible, unforgivable crimes. He was sure that among the dead were people who had tried to protect their village, who had fought until the end for those they loved. As Sieghart swordsmen, they could not close their eyes to the deaths of the innocent. It was their duty to carry out their missions to the end and honor the will of those who had been sacrificed. He said he didn't know what Runan's brother Syria had done to her, but he knew that the more fear she felt, the stronger his shadow would grow over her. If she let fear consume her, she would end up lost. Only she could protect herself. Only she could protect those she loved. Rayon took something from his pocket and handed it to her, saying that from that moment on, the choice was hers. She didn't have to live in the shadows anymore. Runan felt that she wanted to change. She wanted to escape and no longer be trapped in the past. She wanted to protect what was important to her, to live in the light, to take a step toward hope. What Rayon had given her was a small squirrel figurine. Meanwhile, Rayon faced the bandits one by one. None of them could stop him. They didn't know how to react to the strength of someone so young. The old leader asked why no one could stop that child. When they tried to ambush him from behind, Rayon still managed to dodge. But it was all just a distraction so the real leader could get closer. When he looked to where his strike should have landed, Rayon was no longer there. He asked how long the leader planned to wait for an opening like a coward, then took the chance to decapitate the old man. The bandits were in shock. They said that child was a monster, that it was not normal for someone so young to be that strong. Rayon warned them to surrender but was surprised by another attack. A man approached, saying the whole situation was ridiculous. He wanted to understand how they were all being defeated because of a mere child. This was the true leader. He said it was shameful and that Rayon seemed like a noble, maybe from a good family, which made him even more valuable. He was worried that the gifts he had prepared wouldn't be enough, but figured the heavens were on his side. With a heavy blow, he struck Rayon's sword and declared that he would take him as a hostage. Rayon immediately recognized that this man was the real leader of the Snow Tigers. He had to be an aura user, perhaps even stronger than the others. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the entrance. Someone had arrived. It was Runan, trying to act on her own. Rayon grew concerned, knowing she still wasn't ready to fight. He wanted to run to help her, but the bandit leader noticed his intention. He said that Rayon's fight was with him and that he wouldn't let him escape. He was willing to delay Rayon just to stop him from helping Runan. Meanwhile, one of the bandits commented about Runan, saying she was using a strange ability, but looked like she had never killed anyone. He told her to stop playing around and hand over the hostage, but Runan knew she had to protect those children, even if it meant killing whoever stood in her way. Luckily, it wasn't a strong enemy. All she had to do was face him. Even so, she hesitated. She remembered Syria's voice telling her not to do anything dangerous. His image returned to her mind, bringing back the same fear from the past. She couldn't shake off that shadow. She couldn't even lift her sword properly. She felt like she had never protected anyone, not even herself. Then Rayon called her back to reality. He said she could do it, that it was okay, that she could walk toward the light with him. Runan felt she should thank him for that. Using her aura, she killed the bandit in front of her. She knew he had given her the courage she needed. She wanted to thank him for believing in her. On the other side, the Snow Tiger leader, enraged, shouted, asking if everyone was losing to children. He called his subordinates useless. Rayon replied that they were not just children. He said that Runan had overcome her dark past on her own and had a heart kinder and stronger than anyone's. She was a swordswoman who had conquered her own fears. Then Rayon activated the Thousand Flames technique. He used the first flame, Fall of Flowers, to attack. With that move, he cut the bandit leader's neck, ending the battle. Later, Rayon checked the chests and remnants of the camp. He thought he should examine everything carefully, as there could still be traps. Inside one of the chests, he found a two-toned flower, a rare miraculous herb. That made him wonder if the bandits had massacred an entire village just for that. While he was thinking, a man approached and asked if everything was over. He saw the flower in Rayon's hands and wanted to know if they had really killed all the Snow Tigers. Rayon answered with another question, asking what if they had. The man commented that Rayon was bold, seemed good at assessing situations, and had great self-confidence. That could only mean he was truly skilled. Rayon asked if that man was part of the North-South Alliance. He confirmed and introduced himself as Rictor. The name reminded Rayon of something. He had heard of a brilliant swordsman with that name. Rictor had joined the Alliance wielding only a sword, and in less than 10 years became the leader of a large mountain bandit group. Compared to him, the Snow Tigers were nothing. Rictor was a true martial artist, someone with genuine abilities. Rictor then asked if Rayon and Runan were from the Sieghart clan. He looked at their swords and said they didn't have anything engraved yet, meaning they were still cadets. He then asked if he should kill them. Rayon thought that man was very direct about killing, but for someone who had lived his whole life as an assassin, that didn't scare him. Rictor wanted to know know if Rayon could handle a fight, saying he didn't seem like an ordinary child. Rayon noticed that Richter was fully confident he could kill him. And at that moment, Rayon knew he wasn't in a condition to face him, but still didn't want to back down. He told him to draw his sword and come. Richter said that if he did, he would kill him. Rayon replied firmly that it was common sense. The weak die before the strong. Richter found the answer impressive, especially coming from someone so young. He said that after hearing that, he actually had even less desire to fight. It would be a shame to kill someone like Rayon, but he remembered that a martial artist does not choose where to die. He asked if Rayon really was just a child, or if he had a collection of famous quotes at home. Then he said there was another reason he wouldn't kill him at that moment. The vicious wind had been watching them for a while. He commented that it would have been fun if Rayon were part of the North-South Alliance, and asked his name. When Rayon answered, Richter said he would remember that name and wait for the day it would be known beyond Mount Terok. After Richter left, Rayon told Runan it was time to go. Before they departed, Runan asked if she had done well. Rayon looked at her for a moment and replied of course that she was the best. That was the end of their first mission, short but at the same time long. When they returned with the head of the Snow Tiger's leader, Burin and Martha were quite upset at being surpassed by him again. Rimmer comforted the other students for not doing so well and seemed to be trying to give advice. The King of Essence, as always, took the chance to boast, almost making Rayon's ears bleed. The rescued children had lost their parents during the attack. The Sulian family decided to take them in, and the children seemed happy with it since they quickly became attached to Runan. After returning from the mission, Runan and Rayon were summoned by Patriarch Glenn Sieghart and rewarded for their accomplishments. Rayon was surprised to be praised directly by him, and even more surprised when he returned the bicolored flower, and the Patriarch told him to keep it as recognition. Even though it was a miraculous and extremely rare medicinal herb, it was given to him as a symbol of merit. After that, when he got home, it was Dorian who opened the door. Rayon asked why he was there, and Dorian explained that he had finally returned home. He said it was Sylvia herself who called him to tell her everything that had happened during the mission. Rayon asked if he told everything, and Dorian, excited, replied that yes, he had shared the whole thrilling story. Rayon immediately worried, thinking that idiot had made a mess. As expected, both Sylvia and Helen were extremely worried. Rayon feared Sylvia would get furious upon finding out he had volunteered to face the bandits. But to his surprise, she just hugged him tightly and said he had done a great job. She asked if he really thought she would be angry. Rayon said she always told him to be careful with everything. Sylvia explained that the first Patriarch drew his sword to protect the weak. Legends said he always extended a hand to those in need. The Sieghart clan continued to fulfill that mission, and her dream had always been to become a swordswoman with that same purpose. That was why she had no reason to scold him for saving the hostages. In fact, she was extremely proud. Helen also said that both of them were moved and full of pride when they heard the story. Sylvia said her son had grown and become such a good man. Rayon, confused by that reaction, thought he really couldn't understand his mother. Emotions were complicated things. Looking back, he saw that Dorian had already disappeared. The King of Essence commented that he had taken too long and that Coward had already run away a while ago. Still, Rayon thought that night wasn't so bad. Meanwhile, Runan held the gift she had received from Rayon while lying in bed. She thought about the words he had said, that she no longer needed to hide in the shadows. She promised herself that next time she saw him, she would find a way to thank him, no matter how. At that moment, Rimmer, enjoying his break, remembered the conversation he had witnessed between Richter and Rayon. He was feeling proud of that boy. It had been a long time since he saw in someone the same spark he once saw in the Patriarch. He thought the seed of a new king had begun to sprout. Meanwhile, in the main residence of the Robert family, Darius was in his office writing when he noticed a drop of blood fall onto the paper. He realized the wound still hadn't healed. 17 years had passed since the day he killed the real Rayon. Since then, he had tried all kinds of treatments. Miraculous medicine, priests, renowned doctors. Nothing helped. The wound neither worsened nor improved. It remained exactly the same as that day, as if something wanted to force him to remember that moment. Darius wondered if it was some kind of spirit trying to keep that memory alive. He said it was a pity, but the past couldn't be changed, and now there was little time left until his great goal would be achieved. At the same time, Rayon was receiving system messages. The curse of intense cold had weakened. He had reached the 3-star level of intense cold aura. His senses had risen to the legendary level. He had also gained 3-star resistance to fire, and was now officially a sword specialist. His speed, aura control, and all his stats had improved considerably. His sword proficiency and movement techniques had also evolved. Rayon thought he had finally reached the realm of a specialist, even if still at the beginner stage. He remembered how hard he had worked to get there. The King of Essence, however, mocked him, saying it was ridiculous. To him, a swordmaster was nothing more than an insect. He asked if Rayon was really proud of being just a specialist. Rayon replied that it was rare for someone at 15 to reach that level. Even searching across across the entire continent. It would be hard to find someone like him. The King of Essence said only idiots cared about age on the battlefield. There, age meant nothing. Weak is weak, strong is strong. Rayon agreed, saying no one would go easy on him just for being younger. The King of Essence said that in his current state, Rayon couldn't even scratch his pinky. Rayon admitted that was true, but still he smiled, because unlike in his past life, now he was much stronger. The King of Essence had just admitted that he had grown. When the demon said he would never praise a human, Rayon replied that he had heard his voice tremble, so he knew he had struck a nerve. He said he had spent too much time with his own rage not to recognize it. The King of Essence replied that humans couldn't understand him, that he was a demon, deserving of something greater than death. Calmly, Rayon said that kind of anger was nothing. The demon laughed upon hearing that, and said those words reminded him of the good old days. Back in the demon realm, there were demons who dared to challenge him. Rayon was trying to end the conversation before someone started rambling. Later, during training, Rimmer told everyone to stop, saying time was up, but Burn complained that the instructor had arrived 20 minutes late and asked if they shouldn't extend the training a bit. Rimmer said they would make up for it the next day, which was enough to end the discussion. Then he left. Round said it was fine, they could stop there. The responsible ones would begin cleaning. While picking up cleaning supplies, Dorian ran into Martha, which almost gave him a heart attack. Martha asked if cleaning with her was really that terrible. Nervously, Dorian said of course not, it was an honor. She commented that she was already busy with training and now had to clean too, questioning why some people were still slacking off. Annoyed, she told everyone to get out of the way. Round noticed that her behavior only changed around him. Rimmer commented that Martha was unpredictable and seemed to act differently only near Rayon. He added that he thought the instructor had run off, but Rimmer explained he had just returned to pick up something he forgot. He also said he had one more important thing to announce. There was a new mission for the group. An absolute silence fell over the area. Rimmer apologized for forgetting to mention it earlier, which left everyone confused. How could he forget something so important? Rayon thought that 6 months had already passed since the first mission. The second had taken much longer than expected, perhaps because the Ziegharts had fewer responsibilities at the moment. Rimmer explained that orcs had been invading the southern part of the territory. Their mission would be to eliminate the orcs threatening the villagers and protect the village. In other words, they had to defend the people and fight monsters. Everyone got excited with the news. They would finally go on an offensive against orcs, exactly the kind of mission they had been hoping for. But Rimmer cut off the excitement by saying that this time the instructors wouldn't go with them. Only the trainees would go to the village and would have to work together to complete the mission. Burn asked what they should do if they encountered something too dangerous to handle. Rimmer said in that case, they should retreat. The ability of a leader lies precisely in knowing when to advance or retreat. Knowing how to make the best decision to protect the group is what truly matters. Dorian asked if retreating from a mission wouldn't be shameful. Rimmer replied that, in general, yes, but it all depends on the situation. If they encountered 5 demons and managed to escape alive, that would be seen as admirable. Dorian was then happy because now he had a good excuse to run away. Rimmer said they would depart at dawn, the day after tomorrow. The trainees were surprised. Only 2 days? Another commented that it was already getting dark, so in practice, they only had 1 day. Rimmer explained that monster missions required much more preparation than patrol or dungeon exploration. If they weren't well prepared, they could end up causing harm to the village itself. Byrne complained that it wasn't enough time to prepare. If they had known earlier, they could have planned better. But Rayon calmed the group down, reminding them that the instructor always said you never know when a mission will be assigned. The situation called for calm and focus. The more time they spent complaining, the less time they had to organize. Everyone started moving. Rimmer emphasized that orcs were much stronger and more aggressive than any enemy they had faced before. They were big, numerous, and hard to fight head-on, so it would be better to focus on dodging their attacks and taking only what was essential. They were to gather again at dawn, 2 days from then. After that, they were dismissed. Later, Rayon went to his room and saw a backpack left at the door. It had a spell on it, clearly indicating that Rimmer wouldn't be helping him. It was a clear message that everything was now in his hands. Rayon understood that everything was set as far as the instructor was concerned, but the King of Essence said Rayon was arrogant for thinking everything would go according to plan. He said the unexpected could happen at any time. Rayon replied that yes, he was aware of that, just like the king himself said when increasing his stats. The King of Essence said he wanted to sew his mouth shut when suddenly someone knocked at the door. Rayon had no idea who it could be at that hour. When he opened it, he saw his mother, Sylvia, with a serious expression. She said he should at least inform her when receiving a mission. Rayon suspected Dorian had told her, but Sylvia said it was Rimmer himself. Rayon apologized, but Sylvia explained that being a student leader was more than just representing the others. He had to guide them on the right path. path, ensure everyone was in the right position to minimize risks, and lead the mission to success. His classmates' lives depended on the choices he made. Rayon thought he was about to be scolded, but realized she was actually giving him advice. Sylvia said that monster raids might seem easy, but they were very difficult. He had to make sure every threat was eliminated to protect the people. During the mission, he would not just be a trainee, but a true Sieghart swordsman. She wanted him to prove that by representing the ancient ideals of their family. Rayon commented that he thought she was going to yell at him. Sylvia said she was angry, yes, but also worried and frustrated. Then she gave her son a strong hug, saying that it wasn't the time for scolding. He should focus on preparing well now, and the reprimand would come after he returned. She was happy to see how motivated he had been since he started training, but she also knew she would never stop worrying about him. So the two of them shared that moment together. On the morning of the departure, Rimmer gathered the group and said anything could happen out there. Everyone needed to be as cautious as possible and retreat if they felt the situation was beyond their ability to handle. After that, he gave them permission to leave. Normally, that journey would take a month, but a direct route had been created to the village, reducing the time to about 2 weeks. Rimmer wished them all good luck. Rayon then took the lead, organizing the group into 4 lines based on the buddy system they had set up that morning. Rimmer, watching from afar, thought he was sure they would do well. To him, Rayon wasn't just talented in combat and aura control, but also had great reasoning ability. He believed that boy, even at only 15, would complete the mission successfully and return safely. He had high hopes for him. Meanwhile, one of the subordinates asked if they shouldn't follow the trainees from a distance. They were far enough not to be noticed if they observed, but Rimmer said it wasn't time yet. One of the trainees had very sharp senses and would notice easily. Then he said he was going to take a nap, which worried the others, who thought they should depart with the students. Rimmer, however, insisted they should be more worried about the orcs than the trainees. Meanwhile, in a death-stained forest, a hooded man asked his partner if he was sure about the information. The other confirmed, saying the source was reliable and had come directly from the village. They decided to eliminate anyone who crossed their path. Later, in the forest near the village where the mission would take place, Rayon encountered Kane Sieghart, a member of the direct bloodline and known as the top-ranked trainee from the 6th training hall. Rayon asked why he and his group were there. Kane returned the question. Rayon knew who he was. He had heard that Kane entered the 6th hall later due to an experiment, but now he clearly demonstrated high-level swordsmanship. Kane explained that they were on a mission to attack the orcs and wanted to know what Rayon's group was doing there. Rayon replied that they were on the same mission. The two realized that no one had told them about the other group's presence. In fact, on the night before departure, in a nearby tavern, some people praised Rimmer for how well his students had done on their last mission. Even being so young, they had managed to defeat mountain bandits. Rimmer, proud, said it was thanks to his training, and that was why he trusted them to handle the mission against the orcs. He believed they would take care of it in a flash, but another man appeared and disagreed. He said the 6th training hall would be taking the mission. He argued that, unlike the 5th hall, which focused more on individual development, the 6th hall emphasized teamwork, which was essential in attack and invasion mission. This man was Methune, the instructor of the 6th hall. He explained that his students had just completed a week of flawless intensive training and were better prepared for the mission. Rimmer then asked if Methune was frustrated that the 5th hall students were receiving more recognition. Instead of arguing further, he suggested they send both groups. After all, the faster they eliminated the orcs, the better. If both groups competed, they would finish the mission faster and more efficiently. Methune agreed that it was a good idea and said he would ask the Patriarch for permission. The two instructors were excited to see what would happen. In the present, Buren, after hearing everything, commented that it was probably a communication issue, unaware that both instructors had planned the coincidence on purpose. He insisted the 5th hall could handle the mission alone, but Kane replied that he couldn't ignore the arrogance in Buren's tone, asking if he had become that full of himself since joining the 5th hall. He emphasized that the 6th hall was more experienced in teamwork, unlike Rayon's group, which would struggle with that. The mission would be exhausting for them. Buren, however, said he knew Kane's level well, but that didn't give him the right to belittle his group. Rayon, on his part, thought Rimmer had known from the start that both groups would be there that day, but just didn't say anything in advance. Rimmer believed experience was extremely important. He knew that mission wouldn't be a game. However, in an attack and invasion mission against monsters, teamwork and tactics were the true key, and that was precisely the 5th training hall's weakness. If Rimmer's goal in putting both groups together was to make them compete, then it was an effective way to force them to learn how to communicate and organize better. Rayon thought that made a lot of sense, even though he still considered that elf to be a real headache. Still, he admitted it was a good idea, and a great opportunity for the others to learn too. Besides that, he still clearly remembered his mother's words. He had to prove he was a strong and true swordsman. That kept echoing in his mind. So Rayon told everyone to calm down, saying they were only wasting time and losing focus by arguing there. He said he knew they wouldn't reach any conclusion at that moment, so he suggested a bet. Burin didn't understand what he meant by that, since no one knew exactly what kind of situation they would be facing. But Rayon explained that neither the 5th nor the 6th Hall would back out of the mission. Since it was an attack mission, it was likely to involve a large number of orcs, maybe even a high orc, so he proposed a bet to decide who would act as the commander for the mission. The winning group would be the one that defeated the orc leader first. This would cause chaos among the monsters, allowing them to complete the mission accordingly. If the leading group faced difficulties, the leadership would pass to the other group. Rayon asked if the plan was viable, and Kane agreed with the proposal. Rayon then declared he would start with that mountain, and the groups grew excited and set off with enthusiasm. Martha, smiling, thought the rules were simple: completely defeat the enemy group or capture their flag. It was much better than endless arguments. When Rayon suggested starting the planning, Martha interrupted, saying losers didn't need a plan. Without waiting for anything else, she charged ahead alone like a beast. Meanwhile, Rayon was using his legendary senses. Because of his heightened sensitivity, he didn't need to see what was happening. He could sense the situation around him using his other senses. He knew the group had already started fighting. Runan asked if it was okay to let them fight like that without a plan. Rayon replied yes, since they were so confident and wouldn't listen to instructions anyway. When she asked if it was possible to beat the other group, he said no. He was sure they would lose, and in a very pathetic way. As expected, Martha couldn't land her strikes. She thought the enemies were weak, but their defense was solid. One of the swordsmen from the 6th training hall told her not to underestimate them, because they weren't the center of the universe. In the end, the group from the 5th hall returned completely beaten. Rayon observed and sarcastically asked if it had been as easy as they imagined. The losers this time were them. He explained they were wrong to think the world would wait for them while they acted superior. He said they underestimated the 6th Hall just because they had been ignored by the Kingdom of Orwin, and this was the result of fighting without tactics, teamwork, or knowing the enemy. Overcome by their own arrogance, they wasted energy, aura, and even revealed their techniques. The other group also trained every day, and just because they were doing better didn't mean they could be underestimated. Runan asked if this meant they had lost. Rayon said no, they still had a chance. Martha stated she would do anything to secure victory. Rayon said that at least they were willing to try, and so he shared the plan to turn the situation around. Meanwhile, the 6th Hall group was also talking. They said it had been easy to defeat the 5th Hall, and that it was good to see the others struggling. But one of them, a bald one, warned not to let their guard down. The 5th Hall had defeated organizations from both the Northern and Southern Alliances, as well as the Tiger Claw Bandits. He knew they wouldn't give up so easily. Suddenly, he stood up on alert because Martha had returned. She declared they would regret speaking ill of them and charged forward again. The 6th Hall quickly entered their 4th defensive formation, but this time, Martha attacked from the sides, as she now knew that defensive strategy well. At the same time, Burin attacked from another point of the formation. The 6th Hall used the same defense strategy as before, but Burin tricked them with an unexpected strike. They could barely see his movements before being taken down. It was then that they realized the cadets from the 5th Hall had completely changed their fighting style, leaving the 6th Hall confused and unsure of what was happening. Meanwhile, Martha was destroying the defensive formation with brute force and thought that, as always, Rayon had been right. Earlier, when explaining the plan, Rayon had asked why they thought they had lost to the 6th Hall despite being stronger individually. Burin responded that it was because of information and tactics. Rayon confirmed, explaining that the 6th Hall already knew their personalities and abilities well and had planned accordingly. However, they didn't expect the 5th Hall cadets to change their approach. They entered the fight thinking they had already won and lost in a humiliating way. Dorian asked what they should do now, and Martha told him not to say that out loud, or it would bring bad luck. Rayon commented that even if they hadn't completely lost yet, they had already spent a lot of aura and energy, and were at a disadvantage. Still, they weren't the only ones who could use tactical formations. He had a plan too. Kane Zighart, the top student of the 6th Hall, had extremely sharp vision and intuition. Because of this, he quickly noticed the approaching group and sent the most suitable comrades to face them. Against Martha, whose strengths were power and endurance, but whose attacks were straightforward, he sent swordsmen who could endure her strikes and drain her aura. Against Burin, who was fast but predictable, he sent more cunning and technical swordsmen. Rayon said the only way to win would be to switch opponents, but he knew that wasn't what they wanted. Martha and Burin thought the same. Rayon said that, in that case, they would have to completely change their fighting style. Although the opponents were strong, they probably had more openings, as they weren't used to aura-based movements. Rayon told Burin to look for those gaps. One here, another there. Since he was weak against instinctive fighters, he needed to change his style and use feints and strategies to trick the enemy. Martha commented that Rayon's precision was frightening, as if he had been fighting alongside them. Burin agreed, saying he described described everything perfectly. Rayon replied that Cain truly had sharp senses, but so did he, and his were even better. At that moment, Rayon saw that everyone was doing well. Runan seemed to be winning her duel, and now it was time for him to begin his fight against Cain Sieghart. He knew the situation was very different from what they had faced in the beginning. As the battle grew more intense, Cain had no choice but to go after the flag. Cain said he was trying to understand why they had suddenly started losing. Rayon had told his comrades to change their fighting style, and that disrupted the original plan. Cain then declared that the battle would end there. He said he had heard that Rayon's aura was fire type. His was too. That surprised Rayon, who didn't expect such a coincidence. Cain stated that, unfortunately for Rayon, he possessed the most powerful type of fire aura and was a user of the official swordsman aura. In theory, Rayon had no way to win, but Rayon simply replied that people always talk too much before a fight, then activated his golden flame aura. The battlefield looked ready to be consumed by fire. Rayon said he would show who truly had the stronger firepower. He moved so fast that he vanished from Cain's sight. Cain thought that even though he had heard Rayon had defeated Martha and even the Prince of Owen, he still believed his own aura was stronger. The fight began evenly with both of their attacks clashing, but then Cain was struck in the face. He was confused. It didn't make sense. His flames were being overpowered by Rayon's golden flames. Under pressure from the heavy attacks, Cain found himself at a disadvantage. Using his golden flames, Rayon unleashed an intense explosion that hit Cain directly and ended the fight with his victory. Rayon sarcastically remarked that yes, of course, Cain's firepower must be much stronger. When the 5th Hall cadets returned and saw Cain defeated, they were shocked. Burn commented that the easiest way to turn the game around when you're losing is to eliminate the enemy commander. And that wasn't all. Rayon had also been right about the overall strategy. The enemies had been completely fooled. If not for his orders, they would have lost to the 6th Hall. Martha reluctantly admitted that she agreed with Burn. She said that if Rayon's advice hadn't worked, she would have broken her promise to follow him. But since they won thanks to him, they now recognized Rayon as the true leader of the cadets of the 5th training ground. From that moment on, they would follow his orders without complaint. Rayon realized how much they had all matured with just a little experience. He thought that this was the 5th training ground, he remembered. Later, he praised everyone, saying they did an excellent job and had surely learned a lot from that fight. They had learned how dangerous it is to be consumed by confidence and arrogance, and what happens when you act without planning. He said that if it had been a real battle and not a bet, they would all be dead. He asked them never to forget what they had learned that day. Meanwhile, Cain was reflecting on Rayon. He thought Rayon was far better than expected, clearly more talented in both combat and mind. He had underestimated the 5th Hall, thinking it was full of arrogant people, but in the end, it was he himself who had acted arrogantly. Cain acknowledged that Rayon had taught both him and the 6th Hall to never let their guard down until the end, and to always have a backup plan in case the first one failed. They thought they would win effortlessly since they already knew the opposing group. But not only had they lost as a team, Cain had also been defeated individually. He was beaten in a direct duel by Rayon, even though he believed himself superior. With that, Cain extended his hand to Rayon and thanked him. He said that in a way, Rayon had saved him. Rayon thought that Cain was much better than the other members of the direct bloodline and replied that he had also learned a lot from the confrontation. From that point on, the two groups would begin helping each other during the mission. 2 weeks later, they arrived at the village that had been suffering from the attacks. Rayon noticed it was a small village with no significant regional production or tourism, a simple place where people lived mostly from farming. It didn't seem like a special mission, just a standard one due to the monster appearances. Still, he couldn't ignore the constant feeling of being watched. The sensation was strange. It didn't feel like something an instructor would cause. It felt like someone was trying to figure out the best way to confront him. Because of this, Rayon thought the best solution would be to deceive this person and stay alert. So he asked Burn for a favor. He wanted him to lead the mission. Burn was surprised and asked if he had heard correctly. Rayon explained that in the first mission, only he and Runan had faced the Ice Claw Tigers. Now it was the others' turn to show what they had learned. He said that when he claimed in the past that Burn would catch up to him, it was because he truly believed it. Burn responded that he would accept the challenge and show how much he had changed. From that moment on, he would lead the mission. Rayon told everyone to listen. From now on, they would follow Burn's orders. He also commented that he would explain the reason to Martha later. But Martha said she didn't need an explanation. She would accept Burn's orders and do whatever was necessary. Rayon then spoke with the King of Essence, saying that someone was watching the group. The king confirmed that he had also sensed the presence. He said Rayon's senses had become sharper after absorbing others' traits. Rayon asked if he knew where the person was, but the King of Essence refused to answer, saying he hoped Rayon would suffer. Rayon then concluded that it was just just one person. He thanked the king for letting that information slip when he got annoyed. Even so, Rayon knew he couldn't rely only on that. It might just be a lone observer, but there could also be a group hiding somewhere. He couldn't let his guard down and had a feeling that this mission would be anything but easy. In fact, the group of hooded figures watching them was already in a nearby forest. One of the messengers said something to the leader of the group, who asked if the person in question was one of the 6 emperors. The messenger said no, but even so, the boy didn't seem ordinary. He commented that they were just cadets, and since no instructor was nearby, it was probably only their second mission. He also claimed that he hadn't been discovered. He was sure no one had noticed his presence. Another member of the group said it was impossible for mere cadets to see through their stealth techniques. But the messenger insisted, saying that since the cadets had eliminated the orcs, he didn't understand why those students had been sent. The other replied that the villagers were probably alarmed by the situation and requested help, maybe exaggerating the threat. They said monster numbers had increased, but the real reason for the mission was probably to find the mana stone. The messenger said they had searched for it and found nothing, so it must be hidden inside the village. They questioned whether they should attack immediately, but the leader said not yet. It would be relatively easy to kill the cadets, but if they discovered the mana stone, it would be a major loss. They decided to wait a bit longer. They would let the students defeat some monsters and think they had completed the mission before making their move. Later, at the inn where the team was staying, probably arranged by the village chief, everyone was having dinner together. Rayon was thoughtful, reflecting on Burin's performance. At first, he had been a bit concerned about his behavior, but he realized that Burin was doing much better than he had expected. At no point did Burin use the name Sieghart to show off or act arrogantly. On the contrary, he showed responsibility, prioritized the mission, and managed to calm both the village chief and the villagers. Burin was doing his best, and Rayon concluded that there was no need to worry about him. The team would be able to handle the monsters on their own. The real problem was the presence of someone who had been watching them since they left the village. Although he wasn't sure who it was, Rayon noticed that the mysterious figure disappeared toward the mountain as soon as they entered. He wondered if this could be a test from the Sieghart family itself, or maybe someone completely different. In any case, that would only be revealed the next day. Later, while investigating the area, Burin noticed footprints in the snow. The village chief explained that monsters usually appeared during that time of year, but the number was now 3 times higher. They had no way of handling them all alone. It was estimated that over 100 monsters had already been seen, which meant the real number could exceed 200. The issue wasn't just the quantity, but also the fact that the trainees were unfamiliar with the terrain. The chief then said he would prepare a guide so the group wouldn't get lost. He chose the fastest young man in the village for the job, saying he wouldn't be completely useless. When the guide appeared, he was nearly collapsing from exhaustion. It was Kanbar, known as the mountain guide. Kanbar had already sensed that something was wrong since the chief's visit the night before, but didn't understand why he had been chosen to accompany the Sieghart trainees. Rayon assured him there was no need to worry, as they would do their best to ensure his safe return. Burin then called everyone's attention and explained that orcs were superior to other monsters in direct combat, but goblins and kobolds fought dishonorably, using poison and other tricks. He warned that even a small wound could be fatal and told everyone to be cautious. The 6th training ground would be responsible for covering the rear in case any monster tried to escape, while the main group would focus on the attack. Soon after, the team set off to confront the orcs. Meanwhile, one of Eden's commanders, known as the King of Essence, was observing the situation and thought that all those youths were fools. He noticed they had tried to set up an ambush, but failed when they started yelling and revealed their positions. He told himself that this completely defeated the purpose of an ambush. However, Yang remarked that the shouting was probably a way to relieve nervousness. For many of them, it was their first mission, and mistakes were understandable. The King of Essence assumed it must also be Rayon's first mission, but the boy watched everything calmly, like an experienced veteran. Meanwhile, the battle progressed. The group was handling the orcs well. Martha was excited by the fight, and Burin guided the others to deal with the goblins and kobolds first, before focusing on the orcs. Suddenly, the orcs broke formation and charged directly at Rayon, but he remained calm. With a single strike, he killed the first enemy. Then, using his golden flame, he sliced the neck of another. Kanbar, who was watching everything, was surprised by how quickly the orcs fell and replied that he was fine when Rayon asked if he had been hurt. Rayon then took the opportunity to ask a question. He wanted to know if there was any legend in the mountains, something like a great monster or an ancient treasure. Kanbar said yes. According to an old legend, there had been a battle between the Goblin King from the west and the knights hundreds of years ago. They said the Goblin King's ring was buried somewhere in that region. Rayon thought that now everything made sense. The feeling of being watched since his arrival wasn't a coincidence. Those eyes belonged to Eden, one of the 5 great demonic organizations known for their madness. Eden Eden wanted to restore the ancient times when monsters ruled the world and worship those creatures as gods. They could control and tame monsters and even use their powers despite being human. Their strength rivaled that of the Ziegharts themselves. The secret behind this power was unknown even to the noble houses of the continent. However, Rayon knew the truth thanks to Darius Robert. It was during a mission given by him that his squad encountered Eden. All members of the Shadow Unit were killed, leaving only Rayon to survive the hell. At the time, he hadn't understood what was happening, but now he realized how strange that had been. Darius had known from the start that Eden used mana stones, but still never revealed this to the world. The King of Essence silently watched Rayon, trying to understand what he was thinking. He sensed a deep and unwavering hatred coming from him. Rayon, however, tried to stay focused. He knew that Darius stirred his emotions and that he needed to stay in control. Instead of being consumed by those feelings, he turned his thoughts back to Eden, which was the most important thing at that moment. He concluded that their goal was to find the Goblin King's mana stone. It had been hundreds of years since the Goblin King fell in that place, and Rayon was sure that a mana stone of immense power was buried in the mountain. That was why he believed Eden would let the team think they had completed the mission, only to begin digging for the stone once they departed. Meanwhile, Burn went after an orc that seemed to be the leader, but Martha defeated it first, claiming that prey for herself. Burn protested, thinking it was unfair, and informed the group that the leader was dead, so now they just had to finish off the rest. Elsewhere, Rayon spoke to Kanbar, asking if anyone had ever found treasure or gems in that mountain. Kanbar said that when he was a child, the village chief had climbed to the top of the mountain and returned with a red gem, which was now buried beneath his house. Rayon thought that was probably the mana stone, but if he was right, the situation was more serious than it seemed. If Eden did not find the stone in the mountain, they would destroy the entire village searching for it. Later, when the team checked to see if there were still orcs nearby, they found no signs. They considered the mission complete and returned to the village chief, who thanked the Zieghart cadets for their courage and skill. During that moment, Martha asked if everything had gone according to Rayon's plan, even though she didn't fully understand it. Rayon replied that he wasn't sure either, but promised to explain when the time came. Martha said she didn't mind, and that no matter what happened, she would follow his orders until the mission was over. Meanwhile, Runan, watching Rayon standing still and thoughtful, asked if something was bothering him, as he seemed distant. Rayon replied that it was nothing important. He was just thinking about the banquet the chief had promised. He told everyone to enjoy themselves, but deep down, he knew that Eden would only make a move once the team left the village, and that would happen the next day. That was why he considered the following day to be the most important. By late afternoon, the team was already outside the village limits. Burn reflected on how well everything had turned out. They had defeated the monsters occupying the mountain with only a few injuries. Officially, that had been their first mission without an instructor, and they had completed it perfectly. To him, that was the reason why Rayon had not taken back the leadership. There were no flaws in how he had led the mission. Burn did not fully understand why Rayon had handed him the leadership, but he hoped Rayon would acknowledge his abilities. As the group walked along the trail and night began to fall, Rayon ordered everyone to stop. He said the real mission was starting now. Burn was surprised, stating that they had already defeated the orcs and cleared the area, so he asked what Rayon meant. Rayon explained that although the original mission was to eliminate the monsters and protect the village, there was more behind it. He revealed that someone had been watching them until just recently. He could feel that presence right behind him, and then it vanished. He said that although it seemed like an instructor at first, there was too much hostility in that presence. Round said he had felt that presence ever since they got near the village hill. That was why he had handed leadership over to Burn. He wanted to hide his own aura to better understand the enemy. Kane, who had also noticed something during the earlier bet, thought Rayon's tactical skills were impressive. Not even he, who had been fully alert, had sensed the observation the way Rayon did. Burn asked if that was the real reason for the leadership change, and Rayon confirmed it. He thought that with Burn in charge, the enemies would assume he was the best cadet and ignore Rayon. He added that Burn had done excellently, and that he would recommend him as the second best cadet when they returned. Burn, surprised, realized that while he had been celebrating the mission's success, he had only been a distraction to help Rayon assess the enemy. He hadn't even noticed it. Rayon then explained the real problem. Monsters normally don't cooperate with each other, especially not orcs and goblins. The fact that they fought side by side meant someone with control over them was manipulating the creatures through some form of mental domination. The mission to protect the village was over, but the threat to the village remained. That was why they needed to return silently, so they wouldn't be detected. He commented that it would be better if they had stealth gear, and Dorian, already prepared, appeared with everything ready. He showed the items and asked if they were suitable for infiltration. Rayon, surprised, asked how he had all that. Dorian replied that he had brought them just in case. When Rayon asked if he really carried 40 of those just in case, Dorian said it was always better to be prepared. He had indeed done a great job. Rayon then explained that they would follow exactly what they had trained during the infiltration exercises, and since Crane was the fastest among them, he would notify the nearest Sieghart branch. Rayon stated firmly that from that point onward, everyone had to follow his orders no matter the situation. He would not tolerate disobedience. 5 hours later, at Eden's temporary hideout on a nearby mountain, a messenger informed the commander that the cadets had finally left. They had even checked the other side of the area just to be sure, but found no issues. Thus, Eden's plan could begin. The commander put his orc helmet back on to lead the monsters. His army of orcs and goblins was already assembled. The order was clear: invade the village and kill everyone without sparing anyone. Meanwhile, Rayon and Burin, watching everything from the top of the mountain, saw the army move. Burin suggested attacking immediately, but Rayon said it still wasn't the right time. He emphasized that the enemy wasn't made up of monsters alone, but also humans behind them, controlling everything. The problem was they still didn't know the real identity of those enemies. Burin was worried about the number of orcs and the imminent danger to the village, but Rayon explained that if they charged in now without a plan, they would all die. He asked if Burin didn't remember what their instructors always said: the most important part of a mission is to understand the situation before acting. It still wasn't the right time to intervene, and they needed to be extra cautious since they were dealing with Eden. Everyone was shocked upon hearing that name. Martha asked if it was the same Eden, one of the 5 most dangerous demonic groups. Rayon confirmed it. If someone could control monsters, the only explanations were that they were from Eden, or that the controller was a Hank Lord-class monster. Burin recognized the danger, but insisted they couldn't wait any longer. If they didn't act now, half the village would die. He said they couldn't just hide while innocent people were slaughtered. That was the duty of a Sieghart, and he would fight even if no one followed him. Rayon, seeing that, thought that was exactly how Burin was. Runan also said she would follow him, to keep him from doing anything foolish. Other cadets from the 5th training ground agreed. It was shameful for a Sieghart to stand by while people suffered. Kane, representing the 6th training ground, declared they would also help fight Eden's ghosts. Rayon then thought that everything was going exactly according to his plan. Based on what he had observed about Burin and the other recruits, he knew their personalities well and knew they wouldn't be able to sit still. That was why he had secretly sent a message to Runan earlier, asking her to follow him at the right moment. With Burin, Runan, and even Kane taking action, not even Eden could stop the group's advance. Nothing unexpected would happen. He was only surprised by Martha's delay, as he thought she would be the first to move, but she said she would follow Rayon's orders to the end. He then instructed everyone to head toward the village with the utmost discretion. There was no doubt that Eden had reinforcements hidden, especially at the front lines. Rayon sensed a murderous intent not coming from the village, but from the mountains. The 5th and 6th training grounds could handle most of the enemies, but it would be dangerous to confront them all directly. A standard battle was one thing, assassination and ambush were another, and in that area, Rayon had more than enough experience. Meanwhile, the 2 teams began their attack. With fast and powerful strikes combined with good teamwork, they advanced efficiently against the orcs. They were fighting for the village. However, Burin noticed that these orcs were fiercer than the ones they had faced the day before. If that were all, protecting the village would not be difficult. The real problem was something else. If the enemy truly was Eden, as Rayon had said, it would not end there. Burin then warned everyone to be cautious. The threats would come from the forest, hidden in camouflage. These were the so-called green ghosts of Eden, and they indeed appeared. They wore goblin masks and helmets, clearly identifying themselves as part of Eden. Burin had expected them to show up, but never imagined there would be so many. With a quick glance, he counted at least 40 enemies. The weight of command was heavy on him. He needed to make the right decisions if he wanted to survive and protect his companions. He quickly ordered Kane and the others to hold back the orcs to keep them from reaching the village, while Runan would use her icy aura to freeze the enemies and immobilize both the orcs and the ghosts. Burin took the front line, and Runan, right behind him, froze all the enemies using her ice aura, forming pillars of frost. Burin took advantage of the opening and used the continuous flow sword technique, the autumn wind sword, cutting down the frozen orcs one by one. However, he was nearly caught off guard by a sudden attack from one of the ghosts. He was not the only one. All the cadets were suddenly bombarded by a rain of poison needles shot by the green ghosts. Burin shouted for everyone to use their aura to block or dodge, and also ordered them to throw a poison pouch onto the field. But he noticed something alarming. The poison was the strongest one used by those monsters. Even cadets who who had only inhaled a little of the substance, were already collapsing to their knees, completely drained. At that moment, Burn realized he had also been exposed. His body would not move properly, and Runan was also beginning to be affected. Meanwhile, the green ghosts and the orcs kept attacking without showing any signs of weakness. He understood that at that rate, they would all be exterminated. Then a powerful presence entered the battlefield. Martha arrived with reinforcements, shouting that they would wipe out that Eden scum. She ordered the cadets not to let anyone escape. She quickly charged forward and cut down all enemies around, preventing the recruits from collapsing due to the poison. Burn thought that even though Rayon was not there, he was sure the plan had come from him. If things kept going that way, they would really win. The green ghosts began to retreat. That was when they encountered someone different. All the cadets felt a crushing pressure in the air, a presence stronger than any monster they had ever faced. It was the champion's helm, a battle ghost of Eden who wore special armor and could speak the human language. Burn had not expected to face an Eden officer there. The officer confirmed he had received reports about the cadets' departure, but they had returned in secret without being noticed. He said that for mere recruits, they were not bad, but their strength would not be enough to survive. He declared that they would all die there. The officer's first attack was so powerful that it knocked down Runan, Martha, and Burn all at once. The cadets, shocked, asked where Kane was, and one of them answered that he was at the barricade fighting the orcs. Rayon was also not present to face that enemy. The officer was surprised to see that Martha was still standing. He said she was better than the other trash, at least able to sense his presence. Still, he called her a weakling who would be crushed. He declared that everyone there would die, calling them powerless insects without discipline. That was when Rayon appeared, saying that the one who would die was the officer. He used the Thousand Flames technique with the cyclical rotation of the first flame, and with a single flaming strike severed the enemy's arm. The officer was impressed. He said it was a well-done ambush, though he hadn't expected Rayon to get so close so fast, avoiding a fatal hit. Rayon replied that the officer was a lunatic willing to sacrifice his own arm just to avoid death. The officer admitted that even though it had been a surprise attack, that strike took skill. He acknowledged that Rayon was a promising Sieghart, but noted that Rayon had used most of his energy in that blow. Rayon realized it too. He had gambled everything on that single attack and now could barely hold his sword. He asked if the officer was the commander of the group, and the officer answered sarcastically, saying that his superiors would never come to such an insignificant village. Even with the gentle appearance of a child, Rayon had a sharp tongue. The officer mocked him, saying he wanted to see how long he would last with that mouth. Rayon knew he hadn't fully recovered, but he had to fight for his life. Their swords clashed with such force that the ground cracked. The officer was surprised to see Rayon holding on. He said Rayon was better than expected. Rayon replied that if he couldn't handle that much, he should give up being a swordsman. The two began exchanging fierce blows. The officer acknowledged that Rayon had an impressive mindset for someone so young. The fight became so intense and fast that even Burn couldn't understand what was happening. He remembered that the officer had defeated everyone with a single strike before, but now Rayon was fighting him evenly. Moreover, Rayon was using the same flowing sword technique as Burn. That made Burn realize how far behind he still was. He had thought he was catching up to Rayon, but he wasn't even close. Martha commented that this was Rayon's true power. What he had shown before was just the tip of the iceberg. Even so, his strength still wasn't enough to defeat the officer. They were evenly matched in power, but Rayon didn't have enough energy to last much longer. Martha began to wonder if Rayon could actually win. He still had strength, but he was exhausted. Runan said they would help him. Martha replied that she was weaker than both of them, and if she rushed in, she would die from a single strike. Runan firmly said that didn't matter. Martha was surprised. She expected Runan to be nervous or scared, but she was calmer and more determined than ever. She sensed something had changed in her. Burn also felt ashamed for hesitating. He agreed with Runan. They needed to help Rayon. Martha then asked if they had already forgotten what happened earlier. Nothing would change if they charged at the officer now. Burn said that even in the face of danger, they wouldn't leave a comrade to die. They were Sieghart swordsmen and would fight together. Martha replied that it didn't matter. She would go too, but she made it clear that if anything went wrong, it would be their responsibility. They were aware of the risk, but they would stake their lives and fight for real. Meanwhile, Rayon was still facing the high-ranking officer from Eden alone. The enemy was surprised that a mere cadet had lasted so long in direct combat. Recognizing Rayon's talent, he even considered recruiting him to Eden and asked his name. When Rayon introduced himself, the officer became intrigued by his features. Golden hair and distinct eyes, traits of a direct Sieghart descendant. That made him curious, so he withdrew his offer. Instead of recruiting him, he would use all his power to kill him. Eliminating a Sieghart heir was always valuable. valuable. At that moment, the officer not only increased his power but also grew physically. His next strike was so fast and heavy that Rayon barely dodged it. Some strands of his hair were cut. Rayon realized the enemy was using his own life force to gain power. Even activating the Ring of Fire technique, he could barely endure it. His body was still not fully healed. Suddenly, Martha appeared behind the officer and landed a direct hit on his back. The enemy, irritated, questioned how someone so weak dared attack him. But as he lowered his guard, he was caught off guard by Runan's technique, who used her freezing aura with the winter breath, immobilizing him. This opening allowed Burin to charge in and land several strikes with his flowing sword all over the officer's body. Even so, the officer retaliated and grabbed Burin, mocking them. He said those cheap tricks wouldn't be enough to defeat him. He claimed that if everyone were like the golden-haired brat, they might have had a chance, but the way they were, they had none. Burin, even as he was being crushed, said he knew that, but at least he could buy time. Then Martha used the meteor aura technique, her strongest move, and delivered a devastating blow. She asked if the enemy could withstand it. The attack was so powerful that it drew blood from the officer. Now he was feeling the pressure. In response, he threw Burin at Martha, sending them both flying and leaving them unconscious. Triumphant, the officer said that those filthy insects should know their place and called their resistance pointless. But Rayon disagreed. He silently thanked his comrades for the time they had given him. That was enough for him to recover. He was determined not to waste the opportunity. Now he would finish everything. The officer, surprised, asked how Rayon still had that much strength. He wanted to know who he was. Rayon then prepared his most powerful technique, the 1,000 Flames. He said the enemy should feel honored, as it would be the first time he used that technique on someone. He didn't think he could activate it in his condition, but thanks to what he had learned during the battle, he was ready. This was the 10th flame, the wind of the blazing empire. The officer, shaken, felt something strange. That flame was different from all the others. His instincts screamed at him to run. He felt he had to kill that boy no matter the cost. But when he moved forward, he was struck by a blow so blazing and majestic that it lit up the entire battlefield. Everyone watching was dazzled. With that single strike, Rayon sliced the officer in half. He ended the battle cleanly and decisively. Exhausted and barely able to stand, he was watched by all the cadets around him. They were in shock. He had defeated the green ghost of battle. Even tired, Rayon told the group that it wasn't over yet. Eden's demons might still be nearby. They had to eliminate them all to ensure peace in that land and safety for the village. The cadets, motivated, went back into battle. After some time, they achieved total victory over Eden's forces. Afterward, Burin approached Rayon and said that if it hadn't been for him in the second group, they all would have been wiped out. The villagers would have died unprotected. He thanked Rayon for saving their lives and admitted he felt guilty for disobeying orders. But even so, if given another chance, he would do it all again. He said he couldn't stay indifferent in the face of injustice. That wasn't his ideal of being a Sieghart swordsman. Rayon simply replied that he did the right thing. He fought with all his strength to protect the people. It was thanks to that, and everyone's effort, that he managed to kill the officer. Burin had contributed greatly to the victory. Rayon added that if they hadn't been there, the battle might not have been won. He said it sincerely, with not a trace of falsehood, because he wasn't that kind of person. Burin, a bit embarrassed, said he didn't even know why Rayon was saying all that, but he would become stronger. He promised that next time, he would do his part without relying on Rayon. Rayon also thanked Martha. He said he had recovered his strength thanks to her, and was grateful that she followed his orders. Martha, with a small smile, said she would have died if she hadn't followed Rayon, and affirmed that she would return to the village to help. She told him not to worry. Rayon, exhausted, wondered to himself if it had really ended. Now that the adrenaline was fading, he could barely stand. As he nearly collapsed, Runan caught him and asked if he was okay. Rayon asked if she knew he was going to faint, and Runan replied that, of course, she knew. Looking at him, she said his face looked just like it did when he was completely drained during training. Rayon understood what she meant. He realized that he wasn't the only one who observed the other cadets. Runan thanked him, but before he could answer, a system message appeared before him. The notification said he had surpassed his limits in an extreme battle. All his attributes had increased by 1 point. In addition, for surprising a stronger enemy, he gained a new trait called Backstab, and for defeating an enemy from a higher realm, he received the title Unbeatable. His attributes were now 57 Strength, 58 Agility, 59 Endurance, 42 Energy, and 64 Perception. Rayon thought these were the rewards for defeating the Eden officer, a general stat boost, a new trait, and a title. That made him happy. He told Runan she could return to the village because he was fine. He said he would check if there was still any danger in the area before going back, but in truth he just wanted a moment alone to analyze the system's new information. Later, alone, Rayon looked into the details of the unbeatable title. The effect was much better than he expected. It increased all attributes by 3 3% whenever he faced stronger enemies. For Rayon, it was practically a permanent bonus, since the opponents he would face from now on would almost always be stronger. This made the effect constant and extremely advantageous. He also reflected on the backstab trait, which increased critical hit chance and reduced his presence when performing surprise or assassination attacks. He thought that if he had that trait during the fight against the officer, he might have defeated him in a single blow. At that moment, the voice of the King of Essence echoed in his mind, asking why the system was giving him so many rewards. He called the officer a weakling and said that even though he created the system himself, none of it made sense. Rayon silently gave thanks, knowing he was getting stronger because of him. The king, enraged, promised him a terrible death, swearing to crush Rayon's body endlessly for all eternity. Rayon replied ironically that sure, that would happen if the king could kill him first. The king screamed in fury. Later, the cadets were helping rebuild the village after the orc attack. Rayon, who had lain down to rest, ended up falling asleep. When he left the hut, he saw that most of the fences and houses had already been repaired. He thought the others had done a lot while he was sleeping. Runan appeared and asked if he was feeling better. Rayon said yes, that he felt great after resting. Runan told him everyone was waiting for him. When they arrived at the square, all the villagers were gathered. They bowed deeply, expressing their gratitude to the Sieghart swordsman. The village chief thanked them, saying they had risked their lives to protect the village and that they would never forget what happened that day. Rayon was touched. He looked at his companions and felt the admiration and passion in their eyes. It was a new feeling. In his past life as an assassin, no one had ever shown him gratitude. All he knew was kill or be killed, and everything he achieved was used by Darius. Recognition never came to him. But now, it was different. For the first time, he had been recognized. He thought he had never been seen that way before. And in that moment, something changed. Rayon wanted more. He wanted to be admired. He wanted to live as a warrior, not as an assassin. He wanted to witness countless moments like that, and he would fight to make it happen many more times in the future. The cadets decided to spend the night in the village. Now that everyone was safe and happy, Rayon took the opportunity to speak privately with the village chief. He asked if the chief knew who was behind the control of the orcs. The chief said yes, since Burn had told him. He said it was one of the 5 demons of Eden. He also said he didn't understand why such a simple village had been targeted. Rayon commented that during the battle, he had heard something important from Kanbar. He said that a long time ago, the chief had brought a red gem from the mountain. The chief confirmed it. When he was young, he found the stone in the mountains and brought it to the village. He asked if that could be the reason for the attack. Rayon replied that yes, Eden was after the gem. The chief, shocked, asked if it was all his fault, if he had brought destruction to the village. Rayon said that this time they had driven Eden away. But as long as the gem remained there, the attacks would return. The chief explained that ever since they buried the gem, the village had prospered. The land became more fertile, the weather milder. The people came to worship the stone as a blessing or a protective god. But now they knew it was actually a powerful mana stone, and it had drawn Eden's attention. Rayon asked the village chief what they could do about the stone. The chief asked if it wouldn't be better to get rid of it, but Rayon said no. He would take the stone himself. Eden believed that the artifact was a treasure capable of bringing the dead back to life. Even if they buried or hid it, Eden would find it again. That's why Rayon said he would take it safely to Sieghart territory. The village chief grew worried. He said that if Rayon did that, the Siegharts would become Eden's next target. He didn't want that burden to fall on the village's savior. But Rayon answered firmly that it was fine. That was exactly the path of the Siegharts. They were born and lived to protect. The village chief, moved, commented that it felt like the Siegharts were once again giving the village a new chance. He said he would never be able to repay that. Rayon, curious, asked what he meant by once again. The chief then explained that decades ago when he was young, the patriarch of the Siegharts himself, Glenn Sieghart, had saved the village from a monster attack. He remembered that day clearly. The patriarch had rescued them effortlessly, looked at them with a gentle smile, and left without saying a word. Rayon was confused. He thought that man could never smile or be kind. He wondered if they were really talking about the same person. The village chief said maybe he had said too much, but he would guide Rayon to the place where the stone was kept. He carefully dug into the ground until he unearthed the artifact. Little did he know that what they believed to be a blessing was actually the source of destruction. Rayon noticed the stone was wrapped in cloth and asked why. The chief said it was to cover the intense red glow of the gem. Rayon finally saw the mana stone of the Goblin King. If that artifact fell into Eden's hands, a new monster of equal power could be created. But at that moment, a deep voice echoed. A towering man, his body covered in scars, appeared, saying that he finally understood. He He explained it was because the cloth had hidden the stone's energy, that he had never managed to find it in the mountains, despite searching endlessly. Rayon had barely noticed the man's approach. Surprised, he asked who he was. The man responded sarcastically, asking who Rayon thought he was as he summoned his orc helmet. Rayon understood. He was the bloodthirsty demon of Eden. The man was impressed that Rayon, just a recruit, recognized the helmet. The bloodthirsty demon asked if it was that boy who had killed the green ghost of battle. Rayon confirmed and said that the officer had mentioned the veteran wouldn't come. The demon said he had handed the mission over to the officer, but since he was dead, now he had to come himself. He blamed Rayon for everything. Just being near that man made Rayon barely able to move. He realized it was impossible to defeat him. Even if all the recruits fought together, they wouldn't win. The King of Essence spoke to him in that moment, saying that Rayon had no chance against this enemy. There were only two choices left: die trying or give control of his body to the King of Essence. Meanwhile, on the other side of the village, Burin asked what Martha was doing there. She replied that she heard he was fixing the barricades and came to see if he was doing it right. She said he seemed to have more talent for carpentry than for swordsmanship. Burin told her to shut up and leave if she was done checking, but Martha retorted that she only took orders from one person, and it wasn't him. Suddenly, Runan returned with some fruit. She said she had been picking them, and got those especially for Rayon because they were fresh. Burin found it odd, since the villagers had already given them plenty of fruit, but Runan insisted those were for Rayon. Martha, smiling, teased that she was pretty loyal, almost like a couple from a distance. Embarrassed, Runan quickly walked away. At that moment, they all heard a loud explosion. Runan immediately knew Rayon was in danger and ran toward the sound. Martha realized the explosion had come from the village chief's house. Burin shouted Rayon's name, and then another, even stronger explosion rocked the area. They saw Rayon, severely injured, flying with the village chief in his arms after taking a brutal hit. Even wounded, Rayon threw the chief toward Burin, asking him to get the man to safety. He ordered everyone to evacuate the village immediately. Everyone and everything, no exceptions. Martha asked what he was talking about. Then they all felt the tremor. A monstrous aura spread through the area, overwhelming. It was so heavy they could barely move in its presence. The bloodthirsty demon looked over the village and commented that there were still more lovely children around. Everyone realized he was another officer from Eden. He mocked the young swordsmen, saying they were pathetic, even as Sieghart cadets, and asked if they couldn't even handle that kind of pressure. In response, Rayon reacted with determination. He said that if they kept standing still, they would die. They had to return to reality, gather their strength, and overcome the pressure. He ordered them to focus their auras and get up immediately. Burin was tasked with taking the village chief and beginning the evacuation of the villagers. Martha and Runan were to stay with Rayon, preparing distractions to keep the enemy busy. Rayon told the others not to try facing the enemy head-on. They should just observe carefully. They had to remember Rimmer's lessons. This was the moment to surpass their own limits, physically and mentally. The bloodthirsty demon praised Rayon's spirit, but doubted that mere willpower would be enough to kill him. Rayon, however, knew he didn't stand alone. Behind him were not just cadets, but the villagers too. If he backed down, it would all be over. He had to find an opening to cut off the monster's head, but he still couldn't convince himself that he could do it. It felt like standing before an endless abyss. He thought that even in his past life, this would have been hard. In this life, it was even worse. The demon then showed frustration. He expected Rayon to attack, but he just stood there. Determined to end it, the demon charged like a beast, saying that if Rayon wouldn't come to him, then he would go to Rayon. The creature was even faster than before. Rayon tried to counter with his 10th flame technique, the spinning sky, creating a vortex of fire. The demon even praised the move, but with a single strike, he completely shattered Rayon's technique, cutting through the flames as if they were nothing. Rayon tried to block, but the impact was too strong. He realized he would have died if he hadn't dodged at the last moment. Even though he wanted to retreat, he knew he couldn't. He had to buy time so the others could observe the enemy's movements. Only then would they have even a small chance of defeating him. When he launched a counterattack, the demon said he was enjoying the fight and increased his power even more, stating that it would only be fun if Rayon fought back. The monster leapt high, preparing for an aerial strike. He wanted Rayon to entertain him a bit longer. The attack was so powerful that its explosion could be seen on the horizon. He then acknowledged that Rayon's flames were far superior to ordinary aura. He found it strange that one of Eden's former officers had died, but now, fighting Rayon directly, he understood why. That only made it more unfortunate, since fire didn't work against him. Rayon knew why. The demon's helmet had the properties of an artifact created from a forest forest king, monsters known for resisting any kind of flame while protecting their territory. Even when a forest was consumed by fire, these creatures suffered no damage and could destroy entire castles even with their bodies pierced by flaming arrows. The bloodthirsty demon had inherited that natural resistance. Knowing this, the demon concluded that no matter how much aura was released, it would have no effect on him. He said it was a shame, but Rayon did not give up. If flames didn't work, then he would use something else. With that, he summoned his frozen aura. The demon mocked him again, saying that first Rayon had used an extremely powerful flame aura and now something resembling water. Even so, he was impressed by Rayon's skills, especially considering how young he was. He asked who that boy really was. Rayon replied that it didn't matter because the demon would die there. The enemy said he was being far too arrogant and wanted to see how long he could keep that attitude. The fight was so intense that it could be seen from afar. When Burin arrived, he witnessed the impressive scene. Rayon and the demon were fighting on equal terms. Burin was surprised to see Rayon using a different kind of aura. On top of that, there was a heavy pressure surrounding his blade. He wondered if Rayon had already become a swordmaster. Then it was explained that warriors on the continent were divided into different levels based on their strength. All weapons, including swords, followed this classification. Those who started learning to control aura were called beginners. Those who could use this energy outside their bodies or through their weapons were known as aura users. When these warriors refined their skills further and became capable of freely releasing their aura, they reached the level of aura specialist. Given that, Burin concluded that Rayon must have already reached that level, as he was clearly using an aura blade. That was something extremely difficult to accomplish. Still, Rayon was facing the bloodthirsty demon head-on in a battle that showed he had already surpassed the limits expected for his age. Rayon kept fighting the demon, but even though he could block the attacks, he still wasn't dealing any significant damage. Even so, his strength couldn't be ignored. At one point, Rayon looked directly at Burin, and Burin understood immediately. It was a clear signal, suggesting a coordinated attack. They had trained together for so long that they could understand each other with just a look. Then Burin noticed that Martha and Runan were also alert, ready to move. He thought to himself that they were Siegharts. It was their duty to protect that place, and together with Rayon, they could do it. Taking advantage of the opening created, Burin struck the demon's hand with such force that it was nearly frozen. That was the break they needed. The three of them launched their final attack together, determined to win. They believed they could win, but the bloodthirsty demon had predicted this. He said he was waiting for those insects and released an intense aura that sent them flying. That was astral energy. The enemy had surpassed the aura specialist level and become a true master. He remarked that he thought he would have to hunt them down one by one, but they had come to him, saving him the trouble. He felt pleasure watching the hopeful eyes of the cadets turn to despair. It was always fun. According to him, he would never lose to someone like them. They would all die there for not knowing their place. Rayon, however, said he wasn't the only one who had been waiting for that moment. He then focused all the bloodlust accumulated in his past life as an assassin, mixing it with the coldness of his ice aura and the sword mastery cultivated through the 10,000 flames. He concentrated it all into a single point and unleashed the supreme technique of the 10,000 flames cultivation. The strike hit precisely, piercing the demon's chest with his blade. The force was so great that the enemy fell to his knees. But Rayon realized it still wasn't enough. The demon had blocked part of the blow with his defense. He praised Rayon, saying it was truly impressive. If he had lowered his guard, he would have died. But that wasn't the case. With a single punch, he sent Rayon flying. He said Rayon was still far too weak to overcome the difference in power between them. He broke Rayon's sword as if it were a twig. Rayon thought he had found the right moment to strike, but he barely managed to get through the enemy's defenses. The bloodthirsty demon had blocked the attack by hardening his muscles and skin. That was the true level of an aura master. Rayon, as the leader of the cadets, announced that the plan had failed. He ordered everyone to retreat immediately. They had no chance in their current state. They needed to evacuate with the villagers. He told Burin not to die in vain, but to fulfill his duty. Everyone had to fall back now. The cadets obeyed and began running, trying to take the villagers to a safe place. Runan, crying, said Rayon couldn't die there. The bloodthirsty demon asked if Rayon really believed he could buy enough time for everyone to escape. Rayon then turned to the King of Essence, asking if he was ready for a bet. The king replied that Rayon was about to die and asked what he had to wager. Rayon said the bet was about who would die there, him or the demon. He knew victory was nearly impossible, so he asked the King of Essence to fully restore his body and aura in exchange for allowing the king to channel some of his fury through him. The King of Essence agreed, saying that at this rate, Rayon would die anyway, and his body would be wasted, so he decided to help. Rayon received a portion of the king's fury. The moment he felt that power, his body trembled. The cold was so intense it caused a deadly pain. The bloodthirsty demon, confused, asked what was going on. That level of recovery recovery was absurd, even stronger than the blood of a demon king. It was beyond comprehension, but Rayon gave no explanation. He only said there was no need to understand, just to fight. He told the demon to keep playing with him until sunrise. While Rayon held the enemy off, Burin led the others. He told them to move quickly, help the injured, and get the villagers to safety as fast as possible. No one understood what was happening, but they obeyed. Martha explained. She said Rayon was fighting the monster alone, even with broken ribs and a broken arm. She asked why they were just standing there, if they were really going to let Rayon die fighting alone. Burin agreed. He said it was not the time for despair and ordered everyone to keep moving. Crane went to the nearest branch to ask for help, and reinforcements from the family were already on the way. The group began evacuating the survivors quickly. Suddenly, an orc appeared from the forest. Burin asked why it had left the woods and approached them. Then another appeared, and another. They were completely surrounded. Martha immediately understood what was happening. Those bastards from Eden really could control monsters. Now everything made sense. The reason the demon hadn't ignored Rayon and gone after the others was because he had already sent the orcs to surround them, predicting this situation. The cadets panicked, saying it was over. They believed they were going to die there without even being able to fight back. But Burin refused to accept that fate. He remembered Rayon was still fighting. If they were going to die, it couldn't be in vain. He thought that if he gave up now, he would never again have the courage to look anyone from the Sieghart family in the eyes, especially Rayon. Martha, upon hearing that, admitted that for the first time, Burin had said something truly worthy. Runan agreed and said they needed to evacuate everyone quickly, and then rushed to where Rayon was. Burin reinforced that they couldn't die there. It was the least they could do as cadets. At that moment, a blade of wind sliced through the orcs with precision. Everyone knew exactly whose power that was. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the bloodthirsty demon looked at Rayon and said he was incredibly persistent. He told him to just give up already. Rayon was on the ground, completely injured. He thought about how his broken left arm was getting in the way. He even considered cutting it off to endure a little longer. But then he questioned why he was trying so hard. His entire body hurt like never before. It was a pain he hadn't felt even in his past life. If it were back then, he would have surely fled. But now something was holding him there. He remembered his mother, who dreamed of seeing him become a great warrior, a true Sieghart. He also remembered the memories he had created with his companions and his new family. The one who seemed indifferent but was the kindest of all, Runan. The one who started poorly but was now on a respectable path, Burin. And the one who seemed tough but had unshakable resolve, someone he truly trusted, Martha. Rayon knew he would be lying if he said he hadn't grown attached to them. He wanted to protect them. They were becoming true swordsmen worthy of the Sieghart name. The King of Essence acknowledged that Rayon had managed to buy a lot of time, all while enduring his fury. He said Rayon Sieghart was bold, but there was a limit to how much he could underestimate the king's control. Once again, Rayon was struck by the king's fury. The king stated that the moment Rayon accepted that fury, his chances of reclaiming his body became almost zero. Even while resisting possession, he was already doomed. The bloodthirsty demon, in turn, concluded that Rayon had reached his limit. He said he would leave him for last. First, he would kill all his companions. That would be far more fun. He was already imagining Rayon's face, watching each of his friends die, their heads being torn off one by one. Rayon knew the cadet stood no chance against a master like that. He had to keep him occupied. So even without strength, he stood up. He declared with conviction that he was Rayon Sieghart, descendant of the Northern King of Destruction, and that one day he would become the strongest swordsman on the continent. As long as his heart was beating, he would not fall. The bloodthirsty demon recognized that determination. He said that such resolve was far too great for someone so young, and that calling him incredible wasn't enough. Therefore, he would show respect and remember the name Rayon Sieghart, even after his death. Rayon knew he had no strength to block or dodge that attack. He was ready to die, but suddenly a refreshing wind ran through his body. Standing before him, blocking the attack, was Rimmer. Rayon, relieved, said he was late. Rimmer apologized, saying he had overslept, but now Rayon could leave everything to him. The bloodthirsty demon recognized who he was, the famous Radiant Blade. Rimmer responded with irony, saying it had been a long time since he last saw that bald man. He stated he would never let trash like him lay a hand on his trainees. The enemy questioned whether the Sieghart family had grown so weak that they were sending someone like Rimmer to supervise a training mission. Then the two began exchanging heavy blows. The bloodthirsty demon remarked that Rimmer had grown rusty and that his body's balance was off. He said the rumor about his energy center being crippled must be true. Rimmer replied that it was nothing more than a baseless rumor. He said the demon should find a better source of information, as he was, as always, outdated. The bloodthirsty demon laughed and said it was a blatant lie. He claimed that Rimmer's sword, which once carried a terrifying thirst for blood, now felt like nothing more than a faint breeze. A blade that weak would never be able to cut him. Rimmer easily dodged the demon's strike and said he was was too barbaric. Rayon, watching the fight, noticed something important. His instructor was switching between attack and defense with impressive fluidity, like a leaf in the wind. Moreover, Rimmer's surprise attacks were scarily precise. If he were using his full astral energy, the fight would already be over. Yet somehow, he was deliberately prolonging the battle. Rayon understood the reason. Rimmer was dragging out the fight to teach him. He was demonstrating his fighting style in real time, allowing Rayon to watch and learn his technique. Rimmer mocked the enemy, saying that despite all his talking, the bloodthirsty demon couldn't defeat him, even while weakened. He warned that if things continued like that, the demon would lose his head. The demon told him to shut up and attacked again, but Rimmer easily dodged once more. The enemy demanded that he fight seriously. Rimmer thought it was becoming difficult to keep holding back. The opponent was too strong, and the battle was already slipping out of control. He told Rayon to pay close attention to what he was about to do, because this was the true way of the Ziegharts, the level that Rayon should reach one day. Then Rimmer activated his technique, the sword field creation, also known as the Eye of the Storm. A powerful cyclone formed around the area, a wind so sharp it could cut anything it touched. The bloodthirsty demon immediately felt Rimmer's aura dominating the space around them. Nothing could escape. His only option was to face Rimmer head-on. He prepared to destroy the radiant blade, but Rimmer, with his signature lightness, counterattacked with a smooth and sharp strike. When the two forces clashed, both remained standing. But the bloodthirsty demon admitted that the attack had greatly reduced his physical strength and aura power. Rimmer had drawn all the wind from that calm zone into his blade. The demon asked what the purpose of a sword field was and how Rimmer, who wasn't a direct descendant of the Ziegharts, had managed to create one. Rimmer explained that, technically, it wasn't a complete sword field. He had only mimicked the power of nature, something possible thanks to the elves' connection to it. The enemy understood. Even old and injured, a predator was still a predator. He said his only regret was not killing Rayon earlier. He should have eliminated him at any cost, because at this rate, the boy would only grow stronger with time. But Rimmer said he would never allow that. He would never let that demon kill the little king. The enemy acknowledged that Rayon truly had the qualities of a king, but warned Rimmer not to get ahead of himself. There were 5 great demons, all with exceptional talent. Even so, that day, he had lost to the radiant blade of the Ziegharts. With a quick and precise movement, Rimmer struck him deeply. The bloodthirsty demon collapsed, dead. Rimmer then turned to Rayon and asked if he had paid close attention. That was the technique he needed to learn to become a true Zieghart. Unlike the mana barrier used by mages, the sword field was formed from the soul, the spirit, the aura, and the warrior's accumulated experience. It was the embodiment of everything he had lived, his battles, victories, losses, and even his future aspirations. He said that as a direct descendant of the Ziegharts, Rayon should one day be able to create a true field. For that, he would need to seek experience, illusions, and constant growth. Rimmer looked around and asked if the others had also seen it. The 3 cadets were there, watching everything. Runan ran toward Rayon, nearly crying. The others followed, deeply concerned. But inside, Rimmer knew he was only pretending to be fine. He was in pain. For someone who wasn't a direct descendant of the Ziegharts, activating a sword field required much more than experience. It took a natural affinity with energy and a vitality strong enough to withstand the massive toll. In short, using a sword field consumed the user's lifespan. Rimmer's energy core was already broken. The pain from activating the field was immense, almost unbearable. Even so, he had no regrets. What he saw upon arriving, even though late, was the birth of a new king. In that moment, he decided he would serve Rayon Zieghart as his new leader. Ever since his energy core had been destroyed, Rimmer felt that maybe it would be better to disappear. But those kids he used to call brats gradually gave him a new reason to live. They had become his new life. Now he needed to keep living to ensure that they could live too. That's why he had no regrets about using something as trivial as his own lifespan. And before his life came to an end, Rimmer wanted to see that boy become the next king. If you enjoyed this chapter and want to follow the next moments of this journey, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference, and if you want to be part of the community, become a member to gain access to exclusive content. See you next time.